In the deep dark night, tiny ominous lights began to flicker. But these weren't pretty fireflies. No, it was a full-blown goblin squad, hot on the trail of a lone warrior lost in the woods. Our boy Joshua was the type who genuinely just wanted to be left alone. He hated the city he lived in, absolutely loathed the cramped crowds, so even if he was staring down life-threatening danger, he felt it was 1,000 times more interesting than suffocating Tokyo. For our warrior, there was nothing in this world worth holding on to. School, friends, future, it all felt like annoying paperwork he just wanted to finish so he could go home and play games. So, how did he even end up here, you ask? Before all this, Joshua was just your average student, lugging his backpack to school with a perpetually gloomy mood. He'd sit in class like a ghost, completely unbothered by whatever was happening around him. In stark contrast to our unbothered lead, we have Sindo, a girl so incredibly popular that all the guys would swoon, practically declaring roadside grass inferior to her presence. At night, Joshua would finally be his true self, immersing himself in games with satisfying action-packed combat. But once the fatigue set in, he'd find himself alone in a corner, wondering if he was truly living. Of course, Joshua knew Sindo too. He'd even stalked every social media platform just to find out more about her. But the one who always hung out with the class queen was Kusue. For some reason, though, today they kept shooting glances at our guy. When school let out, the homeroom teacher made him stay to discuss his preference form. Everyone else had turned theirs in, and he was the only one who hadn't even bothered. The teacher reminded him he used to be a really fast runner, saying if he joined the track and field club, he might even get into a better school. But Joshua just let it go in one ear and out the other, his mind always stuck on his next gaming session. The teacher also pointed out the problem. Joshua was isolating himself in class, constantly avoiding any and all friendships. The teacher warned him that if he kept it up, high school would be a tough ride. Even though the teacher hit a nerve, Joshua just brushed him off, promised to turn in the form tomorrow, and quickly found an excuse to bail. It was his turn for cleaning duty, so he had to stay behind to lock up the classroom. But in an instant, the classroom became eerily, strangely empty. Sindo and Kusue also vanished, as if they were never even there. Before he could even process what was going on, Joshua was yanked into a completely different world. Then, he had another question pop up when he saw the two school goddesses standing right in front of him. Then Sindo quickly warned him that a half-faced pervert would appear any minute, but he should just stay calm and let him finish talking. Sure enough, a guy calling himself the server master appeared, looking anything but normal. He started explaining the rules, as if all three of them had just been thrown into some kind of survival game. This time, the mission was to complete the village chief's request. They had 14 days to do it, and the monsters in this world wouldn't go easy on the players. After every mission, a new person would be added to their party, until finally, the group would reach 10 members and have to keep overcoming even more challenges. Next, the self-proclaimed server master announced everyone's classes. Sindo was a wind mage, Kusue was a sword warrior, and for the third player, Joshua, it was time to spin the lucky wheel for his class. His teammates were practically begging for him to get a warrior class. And yet the result that landed on him was a farmer, a class with only a 5% chance of rolling it at that. Once he was done, the server master immediately vanished, leaving Joshua with a mountain of unanswered questions. Sindo then started explaining everything from the beginning. She was the first brought to this world. Back then, she had to complete the mission all by herself before she could return to Earth. After returning, she received a direct order from the server master, befriend Kusue. And just like that, for the second mission, Kusue also got yanked into this mess. When the two survivors returned, the server master gave them the next objective: find a way for Joshua to be alone with both of them. Sindo shrewdly picked Joshua's cleaning duty day, figuring he'd definitely be the last one left in class. Who knew our god would get held back by the teacher for a whole lecture, almost derailing the entire plan? Even though everything felt completely illogical, Joshua finally understood this wasn't just some crazy dream. Next, Sindo showed him how to control the interface by squinting and tapping, just like using a smartphone. What he could see in his inventory were weapons. And since he was a farmer, the only things he could pull out were a hoe and a sickle. You could practically see trash tier stamped right on them. Also, this world apparently kept video recordings from all the previous missions. With just a touch, he could relive any past event. But Kusue immediately flinched, shutting down the memory reel. Turns out, this particular scene was her very first deeply embarrassing arrival in this new world. She was just a sobbing mess, clutching her face like a lost little kid. Sin then confessed he wasn't much better, taking an entire day just to accept his brand new terrifying reality. Of course, things are way chiller now compared to those dark early days. I mean, back then it was just Sindo barely scraping by, but now they're a whole party of 3. Hearing all this, Dosuza finally pieced together the puzzle, complete the mission, and they all get to go home to Earth. And this is exactly where our boy shines, apparently. Just then, a few lost goblins wandered into view. Our boy Dosuza, pulling out a trusty scythe, bravely charged in, ready to show them some basic monster-slaying moves. Except, what kind of trash-tier weapon just shatters on impact? Sindo's wind magic was so laughably low level, it was basically just a gentle breeze, good for absolutely nothing. Kusue had a sword, but she was more terrified of holding it than any goblin, bless her heart. And Dosuza couldn't even borrow a weapon, because apparently, the system is super strict about who gets to hold what. Fine then, gotta make do with what you got. Our boy digs out a trusty hoe from his inventory, charging into round 2 armed with his last resort plot armor gardening tool. The result? Even worse than a broken weapon. Our boy Sue gets absolutely bonked into next week, instantly flying colors all over the place. But here's the kicker. Getting killed here doesn't mean it's game over. Players can literally respawn after 30 seconds, as long as there's a teammate still kicking. After understanding that rule, our boy immediately cooked up a brand new, totally foolproof strategy. If dying isn't permanent, why not just kamikaze for chip damage? As long as the whole squad doesn't wipe simultaneously, they're golden. So Sindo used his Gentle Breeze wind magic to kick up some dust for cover, while Dosu just charged in like a literal moth to a flame until the goblins were down. At this point, our boy couldn't help but wonder, with this level of skill, how did these two girls even survive this long? Turns out, in previous missions, their strategy was literally just eat enough dirt and try not to let both of us die, and somehow they passed. And what happens if the entire squad bites the dust, you ask? Oh, nothing big. Just permanent real-life game over, like you're pushing up daisies kind of permanent. Later that night, the trio camped by a cozy fire, taking the chance to introduce the areas they'd already unlocked on the map. The plan was set. Next morning, they'd head to the village in the west for some good old-fashioned adventure. Dosuza opened his inventory, only to discover his precious hoe and scythe would take 5 whole days to repair. Talk about a crafting cooldown. Might as well ask, what exactly is the reward for completing these absolutely insane missions? Turns out the grand prize is getting to ask the server admin one question. Totally worth almost dying for, right? Sin once asked why he was chosen, only to find out it was because of some anonymous acquaintance who put in a request. Then Kusue used her turn to ask who this mysterious server admin actually was. I'm from the future, the admin casually replied. Dosuza heard that and immediately had a very dark, very clear vision of his team's future. Spoiler, it did not look good. As night fell, our boy went into the forest to grind some goblins for practice. Only, he totally didn't notice the gigantic titan that appeared right behind him, like some kind of cosmic jump scare. He looked down to see Kusue was literally only half there, and Sindo was getting mercilessly gnawed on. Yikes. Game over for them, for now. In his head he knew, if he went down too, it was game over for the entire team for real. No time to think, just react. So Dosuza grabbed Kusue and booked it straight for the village, strategically leaving Sindo as temporary bait. Next morning, Kusue respawned, but her left arm was, shall we say, permanently detached. Probably got chomped clean off. The situation was officially worse than ever. Our boy Dosuza still had 0 attack power, and their only combat-capable member was now one-armed. Later, the two finally stumbled into the western village. The villagers immediately hailed them as heroes. Bless their naive hearts. A small village boy ran up, eyes sparkling with pure admiration. Oh, you sweet summer child. But Dosuza knew that hero title felt a little sour. After all, his actual job description was still just a farmer who accidentally attracts trouble. The village chief then appeared, explaining a monster named Chan was terrorizing the outskirts. He desperately begged the heroes to eliminate it and save everyone, as per classic quest requirements. The only problem, the description of Chan perfectly matched the giant titan that nearly wiped them out, like last night. And that was it. Our boy had never ever felt this utterly, hilariously hopeless in his entire farming career. He glanced at his teammate, who had a sword but literally just tossed it away every time they tried to fight. He silently cursed. Why couldn't she have been the one the Titan grabbed instead? Kusue wanted to rush out and rescue Sindo, but Dosuza quickly told her to stay put. He'd go solo. Our guy straight up told her if she messed up it'd be a huge pain, so if she's trashed here, she should just stay put and let him cook. And that right there? That's our boy Juza's true gaming philosophy in a nutshell. Teammates are just collateral damage. All that matters is securing the W. To our guy, even if it means rolling the dice with his life, this new world is still infinitely more lit than that trash tier Tokyo. Flashback to the good old days when the squad was still a trio. Our boy Juza was deep in a daydream when Sindo popped the question about that classic future goals form. She'd noticed our boy was still slacking on turning it in. Our boy also remembered the homeroom teacher had already nagged him about it. Of course, our MC, ever the smooth operator, just mumbled something to dodge the question, then immediately flipped the script to ask Sindo what she'd put down. Sin's future career path was still TBD, but she'd decided on an elite tech high school, the same one Kusue, our resident intellectual, had chosen. Kusue's reason for picking it. She was already on the grind for a pharmacy degree at a future university. Basically, future medical waifu dreams, researching potions and cures. Even Kusue got a bit flustered after saying it out loud, but Sindo, ever the hype woman, saw absolutely no shame in chasing your dreams. You can totally do it if you put in the grind. Back to reality, our boy had just stepped into the forest and immediately understood. At his current scrub level, even thinking about taking down monsters was a pipe dream. Standing in front of one would just make him a glorified snack. Can't exactly be a hero if you're Monster Chow. So he wisely decided to nope out of that Cholan encounter and switch to finding weaker goblins for some classic grind leveling. While on his goblin hunt, our boy Juza accidentally stumbled upon a forgotten recording from a previous quest. In it, Sind had once asked Kusue, if another guy got summoned next, who would she pick? Kusue immediately picked some dude named Yamada from the judo club. But Sind wasn't asking who was strong, she was asking who Kusue liked. Kusue, ever the savage, shot back that she hated boys, claiming they were childish, violent, and constantly spouted crude nonsense that made her want to yeet herself into another dimension. Hearing that, Sin just shook her head, thinking her friend was still a bit childish. She had chosen Josua. But plot twist, right at the crucial moment, a sneeze of doom struck. Juza didn't quite catch Sindo's exact words. He couldn't make out which Josua she was talking about, since there was another guy with the same name in their class. Even so, the 50-50 chance that he was the chosen one immediately put a pep in our boy's step. Our boy's brain immediately started conjuring up delusional scenarios, a full-blown harem surrounding him, and if things went really well, maybe even a grand confession arc. Just like that, our unbothered, slightly bored farmer suddenly got a burst of motivation, determined to prove himself as a useful, harem bait kind of character. The forest view overlooking the town gave our boy a slight hit of nostalgia, but that cozy feeling didn't last long, because a squad of local bully goblins was already lurking right behind him. He immediately charged in, ready to serve up a goblin-slaying masterclass. Everything went pretty easily, which, considering he was just a farmer, was a casual flex. Every time the old memories resurfaced, a wave of inner rage would just darken everything in his mind. There was that one time he transferred schools, fresh from the countryside to glitzy Tokyo. When he introduced himself to the whole class, he dared to peek down and saw everyone openly snickering with contempt, making him want to disappear into the floor. Lost in that traumatic flashback, our boy Juza accidentally let one goblin slip right past him. The more he fought, the more annoyed he got, because he was just a hair's breadth away from hitting level 10. If he hadn't let that one get away, he would have already met the conditions. Our boy started mumbling to himself about a potential job change. With a whole system full of classes, there had to be a way to switch into something else, right? What he really wanted right now was a legit weapon. Something with an actual blade, not just his janky hoe and sickles. Of course, the only proper sword was in Kusue's hands. And she was practically scared of it, making our boy admit it was totally useless in her hands. He was sulking, absolutely determined to become a warrior, come hell or high water. Then Juza suddenly noticed Kusue's status had a problem. She was dead. That plot twist immediately sent shivers down his spine. He frantically rushed back to the village, but the situation was even worse than he imagined. Kusue wasn't respawning like normal, meaning there was a high chance that Chon had completely consumed her. In this critical situation, if our boy went down, it was game over for the entire party. With no villagers in sight, our boy's only option was to dive back into the previous recordings for more info. And from those scattered memories, our MC saw a completely different Kusue than he ever imagined. Earlier, some curious village kid asked why she was so obsessed with swinging that sword around. Kusue confessed that back in her old world, she was sick and couldn't exert herself much. She had to chug down super expensive medicine every single month just to keep it at bay. Her parents probably wanted more kids, but her condition meant all their resources and energy went to her. Growing up, Kusue always felt like her very existence was just a massive inconvenience to everyone around her. But in this dangerous isekai, she could actually move without her illness holding her back, so she desperately wanted to get stronger. At least during this rare chance at health, she wanted to protect others instead of just being a burden forever. Those words hit him hard. He'd always seen Kusue as dead weight holding back the team, but turns out this girl had been busting her butt within her own limits. When the Chon monster attacked the village, Kusue told everyone to run while she stayed behind to buy them time. Josua saw the panicked villagers, saw Kusue putting her life on the line for others, and it hit him. He'd been selfish all along. Even with zero chance of winning, even as the Chon monster grabbed her, she had no regrets about sacrificing herself, only pleading for someone to come save her soon. Just then, the Chon monster spotted Josua, immediately chased him down, and sent him flying with a single hit. Suddenly, memories of Josua's old promises with his friends flooded his mind. The kids had all sworn they'd come back to that tree after high school graduation to dig up their time capsule. That's when Josua finally realized things like Sindo's dreams, Kusue's aspiration to research medicine, or even the simple happiness of the village kids. None of it had ever registered with him. But the more he thought about it, the more pissed off he got. Someone who'd been a burden to her parents for years because of illness now dreamed of researching medicine? Who plans their entire future around something so tragic and painful? And this frail girl, who constantly called herself a burden, was somehow still stronger than him because she dared to stand up and protect others. Just that fact alone was a bitter pill for Josua to swallow. Was Kusue really brought to this world just to throw herself into a pointless death? He swore then and there that he wouldn't let someone stronger than him disappear so senselessly. He stopped panicking and started observing the Kuchon monster instead of just running around like a headless chicken. It moved with a weird frog-like hopping attack pattern. If he could change direction just as it lunged, its attack would miss. As long as he kept moving, he could dodge its relentless pursuit. But a direct confrontation? No way he had the strength for that. Running forever wasn't an option either, so he had to find the tiniest window for a counterattack. After being pushed to his absolute limits, Josua suddenly spotted that runaway goblin from earlier. He immediately sniped it with a clean neck shot, hitting level 10. Time immediately froze. The system admin, or maybe just the system, appeared right in the middle of the battle. Our guy hadn't even caught his breath after that life-or-death scramble when the half-faced system prompt announced it was job change time and forced him to spin the career wheel. Josua just prayed he'd get a warrior class this time, or at least something that let him use a decent sword. But of course, life had other plans. After Farmer, the next class to bless our boy was Chef. Just the name alone instantly doubled his despair. But then he checked out the skills and tools that came with it, and immediately realized this class did have the one thing he needed most: a knife. The second time snapped back to normal, Josua didn't hesitate, thanks to his new skill, X-ray vision for C-rank monsters and below. He plunged his knife straight into the Cholon monster's guts, right where his trapped comrade was stuck. And just like that, his teammate was revived. Both of them thanked Josua profusely, practically tripping over their words. But Sindo also noticed his outfit had completely changed, and was even more shocked when she found out his new job was Chef. A class that sounded anything but heroic, but hey, at least it just saved lives for real. Josua quickly pulled everyone back into the fray. He'd totally figured out the Cholon monster's attack pattern. Just wait for it to jump, then shift direction at the perfect moment to dodge. Sindo immediately realized that kind of movement was absolutely insane for a normal person. Most people would hit their limit after 1 or 2 dodges, but Kusue also noticed the monster was finally starting to tire out. And it was true. Despite its massive size, constantly leaping nearly 20 meters at a time meant its stamina couldn't be infinite. So the whole group switched to a class. After dying more times than they could count, the squad finally got a handle on its attack patterns, and the number of knockouts visibly dropped. But fewer deaths didn't exactly mean victory was secured. That Chol's defenses were still ludicrously thick, and none of the trio had an attack strong enough to punch through its damage-soaking hide. Sindo's wind magic really just moved air, and being low level, its direct damage was practically negligible. But that seemingly trash-tier weakness actually opened up a whole new strategy. Josu decided he'd burrow inside the monster through a wound and attack it from within, while Sindo would need to use his wind magic for perfect, timely support. With the plan set, he charged in alone, keenly aware that the Chol's main attack range was all in its massive limbs. He just needed to risk getting close to its blind spot and dive into its belly through that fresh wound they'd just inflicted. Once inside, he'd just need to slice it up, get knocked out, and give Sindo the opening to blast wind magic in there to finish the job. But before they could even bask in the afterglow of their hard-won victory, the server master popped up again. He declared the quest complete, and the entire party instantly leveled up. Our accidentally overpowered country boy Josu stared at his status screen, utterly speechless. Sindo's mage class barely gained anything, while Josu's farmer and chef professions had inexplicably shot up several levels. Without letting anyone process anything, the server master immediately moved on to the quest completion rewards. This time, the question was directed at Josu. Josu recalled the 2 previous questions. Sindo had asked why he was chosen, and was told that someone they knew had specifically requested them. Kusue, meanwhile, asked the server master who he really was, and he replied that he was a person from the future. If that was the case, then the person who requested them might also be from the future. But what was their real objective? What did the future want them to accomplish? After a moment of thought, Josu chose to ask, after how many more quests would the team be done? The server master didn't give a simple verbal answer. Instead, he showed the trio a snippet of images from his own timeline. The scene that unfolded before them was none other than Tokyo. And there, an ancient dragon was being summoned down onto the city. The trio only caught a glimpse of its insane power before they were abruptly yanked back to their original world. Sindo was still reeling, but she had to leave right away. Thankfully, time in the outside world had practically stood still at the exact moment they were pulled into the game. The next quest might not happen for a few weeks, meaning she could still participate in her tournament. 2 years of hard training hadn't gone to waste after all, so she sincerely thanked Josu. Before she left, Sindo also reminded him to make sure Kusue got home safely. On the way home, Josu walked beside Kusue, his mind still reeling a bit. A long day of constant life-or-death battles had passed in the other world, but here, no one had any idea. And according to the server master, they still had to clear 7 more rounds to reach the final answer. Kusue then thanked him, admitting that if it weren't for Josu, the whole team would have truly been toast. Our unbothered farming king then casually realized this was probably the first time in his entire life he'd walked alone with a girl after school. While this situation reeked of classic youthful romance, our MC Josu would inevitably open his mouth and ruin the entire vibe. Afterward, he'd realize he was saying something utterly dumb, but he'd just keep going anyway. For Josu, that other world actually had one aspect that resonated with him quite a bit. Over there, as long as one person survived, everyone benefited. Meaning each individual could survive in a very pragmatic way, without needing to make some grand flowery vows to protect anyone. Kusue just listened patiently, while Josu, the more he spoke, the more he realized how much he was accidentally oversharing. And then in that very moment, Josu realized a dark, unsettling possibility. If the quest was abandoned, if his team didn't continue clearing the subsequent rounds, the very city he despised could be utterly annihilated, just like the future images had shown. He utterly hated this place. He hated its suffocating atmosphere, and he hated all the people crammed together within it. So, the thought that simply abandoning the quest could make everything crumble began to flicker in his mind. Then he recalled a time when he'd glimpsed a snippet of a teammate's memory. After they'd struggled to take down a monster, Kusue had apologized for feeling like she hadn't done anything. But Sindo had simply felt relieved, because at least the second player was someone she knew. For her, that alone was enough to cling to. Sind immediately covered it up, because our resident tsundere elf can't have anyone seeing her moment of weakness, obviously. Back in the real world, Josua's casual flex about the other world suiting him quickly reached Sindo's ears. Our girl Sindo just found it hilarious. I mean, who keeps dying and reviving in a different world and still claims it suits them? Baffling. And since her friend Hosey was conveniently nearby, who happened to go to elementary school with Josua, Sindo decided to ask what kind of guy Josua used to be, but the answer she got was about as exciting as unbuttered toast. Apparently, Josua transferred in 6th grade was super quiet and left pretty much zero impression on anyone. Classic OP main character behavior, really. Hearing this only solidified Sindo's belief that Josua was some kind of strange alien life form she'd never encountered before. Meanwhile, Juza was stuck running through the city, but all he really wanted was to be back in the mountains. Honestly, concrete roads were just an eyesore for our country boy. After glimpsing the future at the end of the last mission, he still couldn't wrap his head around why he was the chosen one. If the ultimate goal was to save this city, then why bring in a guy who practically despised the place down to his very soul? The more he pondered, the more absurd it got. Suddenly, Josua's phone rang, and who else but the shady, half-faced server owner was on the other line. His new mission, go flirt with a designated girl in real life, classic. Even though he clearly wanted no part of it, Josua begrudgingly trudged to a random school, following the instructions. Once there, our hero noticed the lights were still on in the girls' restroom. Just as he was questioning if his mission really involved flirting in a bathroom, the scene before him took an immediate hard left. His target girl was surrounded by a group of female students, who seemed to be taking pictures to threaten her. Not good. Juzo was initially bewildered, having no clue how to intervene, but then his hardcore gamer brain kicked in, calculating the most practical solution. If her pictures got out and she was driven to despair, his flirting mission would be a definite fail. And a failed mission meant lower survival odds for the whole party in the other world. The stakes were suddenly very real. So, no more time for shyness. He charged in like an absolute madman. Josua quickly snatched a phone and smashed it on the spot, no time to dig for photos. One down, but his gamer brain immediately processed the possibility of cloud backups. So, he demanded to check the other phones too. In our hero's tactical mind, this was the perfectly logical way to boost mission success. Hilariously, Josua also thought he was being incredibly cool, even fantasizing that this might be his chance to finally get a girlfriend. There was one last phone. He quickly spotted it in a bag on the sink. Without a word, Josua stormed over, ignored all the pleas, and instantly obliterated it. One of them tried to sneak attack him, but let's be real. How could mere mortals with zero combat skills even hope to stand a chance against Josua? The whole squad ran out crying, swearing they'd report this pervert to the police. Oops. The whole incident ended in a way that was, shall we say, less than ideal. The girl he rescued was Dua, and Josua awkwardly tried to explain he was just passing by and decided to help. Problem was, he was in a girl's restroom, so his just passing by excuse sounded completely wrong from start to finish. Dua still thanked him, but the vibe between them was so incredibly awkward, even breathing felt like a chore. On the way back, Joshua tried his best to play the role of a gentleman. In his head, he thought things were going pretty well. Dua, however, just wanted him to leave her in peace. When Juza asked if what happened was bullying, Dua explained it wasn't exactly bullying, more like a petty act of retaliation. Turns out, she and the other girls were all streamers at the same agency. Apparently, Dua had a slip of the tongue once, mentioning that one of the girls only acted cute when talking to guys. The girl in question immediately figured it out, even though Dua hadn't named names, because, well, Dua was talking about her. And that's how we ended up with the chaotic bathroom scene. Joshua, hearing this, was just completely speechless. He had no clue how to comfort a crying girl. A shoulder hug would probably get him arrested, and the server owner was radio silent, no mission complete notification whatsoever. Just as he was about to drop her off and call it a day, Dua unexpectedly offered him some tips on how to be more charismatic. Turns out, among her friends, a male idol-raising game called Worda was super popular. The game's protagonist is a female producer who works closely with a whole roster of handsome Bishonen. Dua suggested that if Joshua just copied some of the Bishonen poses from the game, he might actually learn to look a little cooler. Upon hearing this, Joshua immediately mentally labeled her as a certified, beyond help otaku. And with that, the awkward real-life mission concluded. 2 weeks later, the next Otherworld mission began. Joshua was pulled into the Otherworld with 2 familiar faces, and wouldn't you know it, the new party member was none other than Dua herself. Task failed success. The moment she saw Souza, Dua was convinced he was that pervy stalker from the bathroom incident. The server admin, true to form, popped up to announce the 4th player, and after a spin of the gacha wheel, Dua rolled the class of Fire Mage. From this round forward, the respawn timer was cruelly cranked up from 30 seconds to 40 seconds. This particular quest, clear 5% of the map and deliver some goods to Jado. Once the announcement was over, Dua immediately glared at our boy Souza like he was a criminal. He tried to explain, but the more he talked, the more his image shattered in her eyes. Dua explained that after that incident, she talked with the 3 other girls, and they all agreed to pin the pervert label on Souza to make amends. Poor Souza, the unbothered hero who saved them, now getting collectively shunned for his troubles. After that, Sindo took charge of guiding Dua on how to survive in this new isekai world. Since they could see everyone's positions on the map, the group decided to split up to uncover more of the map faster. Dua was initially overly polite since Sindo was younger, but Sindo just said that in this world, she was the veteran, so Dua should just treat her like a senpai. Sindo's vibe in that moment was utterly captivating. For a girl who loved idle games and magic worlds, the image of a beautiful, elegant, calm Sindo, the first player to survive until now, was nothing short of a sparkling main character. Dua even started mentally assigning Sindo the hot purple mage title that's all the rage in otaku circles right now. As they walked together, Sindo brought up the topic again about Dua and those 3 girls. She couldn't understand why Dua would make peace with the very people who had just tried to take incriminating photos of her. Dua reluctantly confessed that she'd always tried to act in a way that wouldn't make her a target for bullies. But this time, she'd inadvertently given them an opening to attack, so she had to drag Souza into it as a common enemy to patch things up with them. Classmates she'd have to deal with for a long time, while Souza was just some random passing stranger she'd probably never see again. But Sindo didn't immediately scold her. She understood a part of it, but still asked why Dua thought she wouldn't understand being bullied. Dua hesitated, suggesting that someone like Sindo probably wouldn't ever find herself in such a situation. Sindo said that assessment was only half true. She also had to put in a lot of effort, from her appearance and academics to her physical activities, because she wanted a high school life she could be proud of. She admitted she was the type who liked to take the lead, but bullying was just too cheap and boring, so whenever she saw it, she'd shut it down. And if anyone left her because of that, well, they were never truly her friends anyway. Dua just froze, stunned. In front of her was truly the version of herself she didn't dare to become, so strong she wanted to propose right then and there. The first day of map exploration didn't exactly go smoothly. As they continued on, they spotted the carcass of a giant insect flying their way. Before they could even process what was happening, a centipede suddenly burst out from the carcass. It launched a volley of stink bugs straight at its enemies, with our unlucky boy Souza taking the first hit, acting as the unfortunate guinea pig, and now stuck waiting 40 seconds to respawn. Thanks to his chef ability, he was able to identify their names and danger levels. The total threat level, a casual D tier. Also, the millipede-like creature was male, and the centipede was female. Dua was absolutely buzzing right now, her kindergarten dream of becoming a mage, finally, gloriously, coming true. In her head, she pictured blazing red flames incinerating her enemies, transforming herself into some cool, legendary female mage from a game. But reality, especially at level 1, has a cruel sense of humor. Dua's heat spell only managed to warm her staff by a measly 20 degrees, which of course led to her having to wait 40 seconds as well. Souza finally respawned. He looked around, completely baffled why he, who clearly saved them, ended up being labeled the pervert in everyone's eyes. He quickly ran over, slashed a line with his knife, then casually broke the millipede-like creature in half with his bare hands. It was then that he bitterly realized his grand escort mission from the other day wasn't nearly as cool as he'd imagined. All that courage, all that protection he offered, ended up being nothing more than a grain of sand in their eyes. As for Sindo's previous comment about liking one of them, our boy Souza decided to temporarily ditch his delusions and observe the situation for a bit longer, maybe a month, 2 or through 3, then he'd figure it out. Souza probably had no idea, but at this moment, both Sindo and Dua thought he was insanely cool. Back in the battle, Souza told Sindo to fall back and started analyzing the monster himself. Noticing a blind spot in its midsection, he immediately pounced, holding on tight and systematically chopping off each of its legs with his knife. Thanks to his proactive dismemberment, the centipede's mobility was reduced to pretty much 0. Next, Souza cleverly figured out how to utilize Kuzue's sword. System weapons were usually designated to specific owners, so others couldn't just use them. But if the owner was still holding it, someone else could support its attack power from the outside. So Kusue just had to hold the sword, and our boy Souza would adjust the attack trajectory. That attack became the perfect way for the whole team to compensate for each other's weaknesses. Seeing this sight, Sindo was suddenly reminded of her own past. Our girl Sind, even as a kid, was a force to be reckoned with, once leaving a boy in tears before casually strolling away. While she was sulking by the river, a kind older girl came by, listened to her woes, and gave her the classic girls shouldn't be too rough, you'll never make friends lecture. But a young, angsty Sind just coldly declared she didn't need any friends anyway. Hearing that, the older girl, bless her heart, offered to be friends with Sind. She then introduced herself as Suzuki. For a stubborn kid who swore she didn't need anyone, Suzuki's timely appearance felt like a godsend, but that beautiful memory didn't last long. Then Sind heard her father talking about Suzuki with some seriously cruel words. He called her pathetic, said she was a good kid besides her looks, then compared her to Sind, proudly declaring his daughter was beautiful. Those words weren't a direct punch, but they burrowed deep into a child's mind, staying there. And that's probably when she truly understood. You can be a great likable person, but still get torn down over something as superficial as your looks, as if it's completely normal. Back in the present, Sind jolts awake in the middle of the night, totally freaking out Yos. Our boy Yos was trying his best to keep quiet during his late-night workout, after all. Juka noticed Sind was acting completely out of character. In class, she's usually the absolute queen bee, so impossibly confident you'd never imagine her crying. But Juka recalled a memory from their last mission, where Sind had actually broken down, hugging Kusue like someone utterly lost in despair. Juka mentioning her crying during that memory caught Sind off guard. She'd always thought Juka was the completely unbothered type. Yas didn't even know what to say when Sind suddenly turned to him, desperately begging him to save her. To be fair, Sind used to be the neighborhood's legendary troublemaker, the kind of kid whose name alone gave adults a headache. But then she met an older girl, and everything started to change. Sind truly cherished this person, seeing her as a rare beacon of gentleness in her otherwise chaotic childhood. The only tragedy was, one day, that older girl jumped from an apartment building, ending her own life. Nobody ever knew how much she'd been bullied, and she had no one to turn to for help. And the adults around them talked about that death with chilling indifference, saying it was just because she wasn't pretty enough that it happened. Some even sighed in relief that Sind, thankfully, was blessed with good looks. Then in elementary school, it was Sind's turn to become the bullying target. People would bring up her father's gangster past, or her 2 older brothers' constant feuds, dumping all that baggage onto an innocent kid. Still, Sind wasn't completely alone. She always had friends who stood up for her, some even questioning why she was the only one getting flack. From then on, Sind learned a crucial lesson. Your squad is your strength. If she didn't want to end up cornered like her older sister, she had to change her world herself and make sure she had people on her side. And yet, the moment she got yeeted into this isekai world for the first time, everything Sind had built for years was stripped away in the blink of an eye. The server master casually threw her into a literal life-or-death scenario, coolly reminding her that since she was a solo player, there was no team wipe to save her. If she died, it was game over, for real. No friends, no powers. After all that effort, she was reduced to absolutely nothing in this godforsaken world. That's why when she begged Yas for help, Sind wasn't putting on an act at all. She genuinely didn't want to die in this place. She genuinely needed his power. Coincidentally, not a single word of her desperate confessions escaped the ears of Kusue and Juka. The next morning, the crew headed back to the western village they'd rescued in the last round, but the scene before them made everyone freeze. This place was now a literal desolate wasteland. Just as the group was still reeling, a passing merchant recognized them as heroes and gave a deep bow. From that reaction, Yos understood that Isekai residents could spot players on sight and automatically dubbed them heroes. The merchant added that he'd been traveling through this area for about 5 years, and for that entire time, this village had always been in ruins. That made Yos realize that time between worlds wasn't just different from Earth's. Each time they popped into this isekai, they could land in wildly different timelines. Kusue suddenly remembered the kids she'd saved in this village and silently prayed they were still safe. This time their quest required the whole squad to head to Rad Duubo, which, according to the merchant's directions, was all the way at the western edge of the continent. The distance alone was enough to make anyone gasp for air. A one-way trip by horse would take around 30 days, by foot maybe 3 times that. But the mission deadline was way shorter than that. Seriously, was the system trying to set them up for failure right from the start? Sind immediately thought of Hiro flexing their way into borrowing horses, but the merchant, while respectful, pointed out that his horses were his livelihood, so no dice. Luckily, he casually mentioned an upcoming martial arts tournament in Cotonilo, where the championship prize So, the first objective was locked in. The squad was heading to that town to join a tournament, snag some horses, and then figure out the best route to Radabo. On their way, the team decided to multitask by grinding levels as they traveled. Duo was panicking about running into strong monsters and getting wiped, but Sindo casually dropped some wisdom. If you can't beat 'em, just run. Suddenly, a bush ahead rustled. Dua thought it was a human-sized goblin hiding, but plot twist, a real human jumped out. A bunch of bandits appeared, and the moment they spotted our adventurers, their eyes lit up like they'd found a free buffet. Juza drew his knife to attack, only to immediately get a system notification punishing him for player killing in this world. He lost a whole level of experience. Juza quickly relayed the news to his teammates, yelling at them to make a tactical retreat ASAP. But after they finally managed to shake off the bandits, they realized Sindo was gone, most likely captured during the chaos. Kusue and Zuka naturally wanted to mount a rescue, but Juza asked a question so cold it would freeze your spine. Do we really need to save them? For him, during a mission, individual safety was secondary to whether someone completed the final objective. As long as one person cleared the quest, the entire group would be returned to Earth. If time was running out, leaving a captured teammate behind was a viable option to consider. Du couldn't stomach that kind of talk. She reminded him that Sindo had once begged Sua for help, yet now he was planning to ditch another ally. But Juza didn't think he was going back on his word at all. In his personal life value tier list, Sindo actually ranked highest, even above himself, meaning Sindo was someone he'd risk his life to protect. Of course, Du was also on that list, so while he could save people, he'd do it like a cold, calculating strategist, not some hot-blooded hero who rushes in with a blazing heart every time someone's in trouble. Upon hearing that, Kua reminded him that just surviving isn't the same as truly being saved. Doa understood her point, but declared that part was officially above his pay grade. He left the 2 girls to handle the Sindo rescue mission, while he himself would go to the martial arts tournament to snag some horses. So the whole squad split up, and let's be real, it looked exactly like last time. Our MC was once again thrust into lone wolf mode, except this time he actually chose it. On their way to rescue Sindo, Kusue and Juka talked about Joshua, and they were not in a good mood at all. Du found him completely unreasonable, but now Kusue was wondering about Duka's earlier comment. How is it that only we are decent here? So Sindo isn't decent? Du agreed Sindo was awesome, but he never chose to open up to the whole team. But Kusue saw things differently. Thanks to Sindo, bullied kids could actually return to school. For those too scared to speak up, Sindo was a true pillar of support. All that talk, and yet before they could even fully commit to their rescue plan, they both got captured by the bandits. Joshua looked at the map, just sighed, then wondered, should I go rescue them now? In the end, he was still the only one grinding levels by hunting goblins all by himself. After some effort, he met the job change requirements, and this time evolved into a biomancer. The name sounded super cool, but reading the actual skills made him freeze on the spot. Biomancy allowed him to manipulate the metabolic rate of living cells with a palm touch, and also boost or dampen his own persuasive power. And to make things worse, after the job change, his stats actually went down. Still, he had to participate in the martial arts tournament. If he could win 3 horses and then casually rescue the 3 captured girls, that familiar delusion sparked in Joshua's mind. Maybe he'd finally become popular. But life and our MC hit the wall very fast. His first round opponent was a female knight named Kahab, and the match ended after just 5 seconds. Jua was so utterly decimated that he died on the spot. Of course, Joshua himself was so embarrassed he wanted to dig a hole and live in it. After the match, Kahab actively approached him, relieved that a real hero could actually respawn. Because otherwise, that last hit would have been a literal fatal accident. Josu seized the chance to ask about horses, explaining he had to reach Radabo within 35 days. Kahab explained that a merchant at most could only reach the next town, but if he wanted horses quickly within 5 days, he would have to take on a serious job. Eliminating ghouls could get him a horse, but whether he'd find them at the right time was a total roll of the dice. Upon hearing this, Joshua's mind immediately went to the very bandits who'd just captured his teammates. Clearing out this bandit hideout could net them some sweet rewards. Though, the knights would probably only pay them a single horse for this crucial intel. But hey, a horse is a horse, right? Beggars can't be choosers. Our boy Josu started debating if he should just solo this whole quest. With half a day to spare, Cabal offered to give Josu some sword training. Our boy agreed naturally, but had to use a wooden stick instead of a real blade, cause plot reasons. Kahabal gave him a generous 5-second head start before she started going full attack mode. And while our boy Josu did improve from his initial flailing noodle phase, his sword talent was still firmly in the below-average category. Plus, whenever he swapped back to his mage job, his physical stats went right back to average Joe, bringing back all those familiar feelings of being utterly useless. Josu remembered all those times he'd spectacularly failed at sports. Kahabal deadpanned that maybe his issue was not seeing his own chaotic movements, hence the absolute mess of a posture. Her fix? Brutally simple but supposedly effective. Just swing his sword 1,000 times a day, and he'd magically get better. Classic shonen training arc. Meanwhile, the girls were all cozying up in a bandit prison cell, and things were looking a little less than ideal on their side. That very night, Kahabal, leading her squad of soldiers, began their full-scale assault on the bandit stronghold. On the other hand, the bandits were absolutely seething because Sindo had dared to rupture one of their bros' eardrums. They figured this was their golden opportunity to extort some cash and make these so-called adventurers pay through the nose. What they didn't know was that Kahabal's forces were already creeping up to their hideout just as the first rays of dawn hit. The raid began swift and brutal. Kahabal's troops burst in, and Josu surprisingly joined the fray within his limited capabilities. Thanks to Kahabal's tough love training, the bandits' movements were suddenly a lot easier for him to track. He also realized that if you're actively under attack, a certain amount of counterattacking won't actually trigger an EXP penalty. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, the cornered bandits pulled out their ultimate nope card and opened a secret cage, revealing not a wild beast, but a terrifying berserker. Kabal quickly explained that this thing used to be human, but after chowing down on some meat overloaded with magic, its mind was completely consumed, turning it into a ravenous, mindless beast. This berserker's strength was beyond human comprehension. It could swing a massive longsword with one hand and generate absolutely devastating force. The soldiers were instantly forced to retreat, but Kahabal, ever the no-nonsense knight, stepped forward to face it head-on. And this is where our serious by-the-books female knight started to reveal a much darker side. She drew her greatsword, then cheerfully declared that she loved hacking up raw meat. That's why even as a woman she chose a path of bloody warfare over a quiet, settled family life. For Kahabal, finding an opponent like a berserker, someone she could hack and slash at without them just falling over, was genuinely thrilling. The fight between Kahabal and the berserker was far more brutal than Josu had ever imagined. On the surface they seemed evenly matched, but in reality, Kahabal was slowly losing the arm wrestle. Seeing her sword go flying, our boy Josu immediately jumped in, taking the blow himself. Result? A few broken finger bones for our hero naturally. Just as he was backed into a corner, Josu suddenly remembered a seemingly useless skill from his biomage class, the ability to boost his persuasive speech. He decided to try it, pointing dramatically and yelling, "Hey, look behind you, someone's trying to sneak attack." And get this, the berserker actually fell for it, turning its head. Josu immediately seized the opening and plunged his blade right into its flank. Naturally, he was immediately cleaved in two right after. But it was fine, because Kahabal swooped back in, delivering the decisive blow and ending the berserker in one swift strike. With the berserker dealt with, the rest of the bandit forces quickly crumbled. A few tried to make a run for it, but Kahabal's soldiers were hot on their heels. Josu finally located the rest of the girls in the prison cell. Sino thanked him for the rescue, but our boy Josu could only apologize for getting instantly clapped in the first round. Still, he did manage to snag that horse he was after from the bandit raid, and with a cart it could definitely hold at least 2 people. It was at this exact moment that Kahabal dropped a bombshell offer. She introduced herself as a knight and proposed taking a long-term leave with her squad to personally escort the adventurers as far as they needed to go. In return, she had 2 very specific conditions. First, once they reached Jadadobo, the team would have to return the horse. Second, Kahabal demanded to personally train all 4 of them in swordsmanship. Seeing her absolutely gleeful expression when talking about sword training, the entire group suddenly felt a shiver run down their spines. Hue, being a swordswoman herself, understood that even if terrifying, this training was probably necessary. But Josu? He was completely flustered. He was a mage, for crying out loud. He never thought he'd be dragged into sword training. Before they set off, Kabu couldn't help but wonder what Souza had just told her father. Our boy just gave a vague answer, and the group hit the road. Now let's get to know Kusue a bit. She's hated physical education for a very long time. And it wasn't just simple laziness, but because doctors had warned her against strenuous activity. Born with such a body, she barely ever had the chance to get good grades in things others found super easy. That's why Kusue always felt she had to find another path to prove her existence. She dreamed of studying pharmacy, of creating medicine to cure her own and her mother's illness. Even knowing pharmacy school took 6 years, and her family couldn't afford private tuition, she vowed to study hard for a scholarship. But then one day, all that peace came crashing down. In this other world, the violence Kusue once thought irrelevant to her life suddenly became the most crucial skill for survival. She watched comrades get knocked down, dragged into a desperate escape, then heard the soldiers discover living bandits and immediately order their execution. Once the dirty work was done, they rummaged through the pile of corpses for valuables. All of Kusue's emotions were completely flipped upside down at that moment. It wasn't just a loss of identity or confidence. Even the most fundamental premise of life, that the world was inherently peaceful, was completely obliterated right before her eyes. Back to the present, as dusk fell, the whole party had to rest their horses and set up camp for the night. Everyone praised Suzu's meal, but Kusue could barely swallow a bite. The brutal image of the bandit being eliminated just kept replaying in her mind. It was so horrifying that even with Sindo trying his best to reassure her, she still couldn't eat normally. And then, the turmoil in her heart finally spilled out. Kusue confessed that she wanted to protect everyone, her comrades, and the people of this other world, but she couldn't even protect herself. Hosua, meanwhile, was still diligently busy preparing dinner. Seeing this, the knights felt super awkward that the hero had to prepare dinner. Our boy just said not to worry about it, since he was actually pretty good at cooking. Du heard this and almost choked, muttering that he was just showing off getting EXP from cooking, pretending it was nothing. And it was true. After his chef profession hit level 10, Joshua had unlocked even more pots, pans, and cooking tools, meaning just serving meals gave him a whole new way to gain EXP outside of fighting. Kusue watched him completely unbothered as if nothing was wrong, and her heart sank even further. After all, those with inherent strength leveled up easily, while she could barely even stand straight holding her own sword. They hadn't rested for long before Kabu appeared, calling everyone to sword practice. This was the exact condition she had set for escorting the heroes. And obviously, this Night Sister was not planning a fun, casual training session. Jos recalled the last time he fought her, 100 matches. Even with a handicap, he only won 3, and then Kabu literally sliced him to within an inch of his life with a real sword. Du was the first to get a taste of hell, and even though pain in this other world was only a fraction of normal, being sliced was still, well, being sliced. Definitely not a good time. She wailed dramatically, and Kabu moved on to Kusue's turn, with an even more heartbreaking result, because Kusue couldn't even lift her longsword. Kusue was so utterly disappointed in herself that she burst into tears. Just then, a knight from their squad was attacked by a goblin while out gathering firewood. Seeing the wound, Kabu erupted in anger, scolding him for getting hurt by just a goblin. "And you dare call yourself my subordinate?" she fumed. Zhou, ever the opportunist, used his biomagic master skills to heal the knight. He casually explained that he was just speeding up cellular metabolism, helping the wound heal faster. Du heard this and instantly felt it was unfair. Our boy was gaining EXP from cooking, and now from healing too? Joshua just replied, "If you've got questions, go complain to the system." And that very system was something Kusue couldn't run from. She wanted to protect everyone, so she had to gain experience, level up, and make herself useful. During practice, Kabu noted she was moving better than before, but wielding a longsword was still a very distant dream. The next day, the group spotted a goblin ambush and planned to deal with them quickly, but Joshua stopped them, explaining the heroes had only been training recently and barely had a chance to grind for EXP. Du scoffed sarcastically, muttering that for the past few days, Joshua was the only one gaining EXP, yet he was talking like he was the one suffering. The battle against the goblins went pretty smoothly, as everyone was well accustomed to fighting. Everyone, of course, except Kusuve, who had to force herself into the fray, shaking as she fought. And when she finally managed to take one down, she could only repeatedly apologize. That night, the sensation of her sword cutting through goblin flesh still lingered in Kusue's hands. For anyone else, it might have just been a tiny monster. But for Kusue, it was her very first time actually getting her hands dirty with something that was still alive. Kahab, on the other hand, was absolutely thrilled, seeing Kusue finally awaken her inner swordswoman. Her only regret was not getting to personally carve up those creatures herself. Kusue, unable to hold back, just had to ask why Kahab was so obsessed with live meat carving. And just like that, our knight-errant launched into a truly unsettling lecture about the joys of fresh meat in battle. For her, the moving muscles as the blade cuts through, the sensation of each fiber tearing apart and slowly becoming dead meat, the moment the sword swings down, all of it was an unparalleled, exquisite sensation. At that point, the entire group just went completely silent. Done with her TED Talk, Kahab called 2 more soldiers to start patrolling the area. It was then that Josu revealed even Kahab's father was utterly powerless against his daughter's unique inclinations. Apparently, when she was young, she'd heard her father say that sparring with real swords against live opponents was the best way to gain experience. Nobody knows how her little kid brain processed that information, but it somehow warped into her current, extremely questionable passion for live meat carving. Kusue, surprisingly, only found her resolve strengthening even further. She was scared, but she wanted to protect everyone, to return alive, and fulfill her dream of curing both herself and her mother. If the path to achieving that meant wielding a sword, then she would simply have to learn how to cut. The next day, the group continued their journey, but it wasn't long before the carriage hit a snag, its wheel getting so tightly stuck it almost broke. Everyone had to work together, lifting and adjusting it bit by bit to finally get unstuck. It wasn't a huge incident, but it served as a stark reminder to the group. Time was flying, their mission had barely 15 days left, and any delay could come at a massive cost. But before they could even get much further, Kahab spotted a military unit ahead, under attack by monsters, including not just soldiers but civilians and even children. Kusue immediately spoke up, declaring she wanted to save them. Josu, on the other hand, reacted completely opposite, asking point-blank if they really had enough time to play hero. For him, if they kept getting sidetracked by every single roadside incident before the main mission was complete, they were just asking for trouble. But Kusue refuses to back down. She even got off the carriage, stating she'd go alone if necessary. Josu reminded her to think carefully, pointing out that she herself had said they absolutely had to return alive. But Kusue countered with what she'd said earlier. Being human isn't just about preserving your life to be considered saved. If she ignored children in distress right in front of her, then the rest of her life would hold no meaning. That line genuinely made Josu let out a wry chuckle. But thinking it over, what if this was an unexpected event tied to their mission? What if the server admin was watching to see if they'd save them? What if that group was actually the party heading to the capital? With that thought, he decided to split the party. Josu and Kusue would go save the people, while the rest would continue forward, and the 2 of them would catch up later. And so Josu borrowed a horse and carried Kusue towards the chaos. Using his chef skills, Josu identified the attacking creatures as mage kobolds, essentially E- threat level goblins. He quickly realized that if just the 2 of them rushed in, it would be like 2 moths flying straight into a bonfire. He proposed that the brave group would draw attention, while the soldiers attacked from the rear. The problem was, the monsters almost immediately focused their attacks on the designated heroes, instantly nullifying humanity's numerical advantage. He even tried to use verbal taunts to distract his opponents, but the monsters didn't understand human speech, rendering it completely useless. Josu got a nasty bite, but immediately retaliated with a jab to the eye, then pounced, wrestled it to the ground, and delivered the finishing blow. But right before that, another one bit him from behind, and a 40-second countdown timer immediately began. Kusue wasn't faring much better on her side either. She found herself wondering, what exactly was she even doing here? If she couldn't fight, if she always just relied on others for protection, then what was the point of all her resolve to protect everyone? And then, she adopted a fighting style that was incredibly risky, but perfectly suited to her current limitations. Since her longsword was too heavy to wield constantly, she would feign carelessness, waiting for the absolute last moment to draw it. Seeing that tactic, Josu had to admit, Kusue had truly changed. The girl who was just trembling at the sensation of cutting a goblin now knew how to use her own weaknesses to fight back. Of course, the battle wasn't over yet. There was one last monster, and Josu had to step up to bait it. He drew its attention towards himself, creating an opening for Kusue to deliver the finishing blow. After the battle, the entire group checked on the survivors. The number of survivors wasn't large, and many were still injured. But thanks to their biomancy, when everyone checked if he was alright, our boy casually mentioned he was probably fine after trying to absorb monster blood for mana recovery. He recalled how Buttersur had once transformed after consuming too much monster meat infused with magic. If eating it caused issues, then absorbing it directly should be an interesting experiment. The rescued folks bowed in gratitude, thanking our brave heroes. Josua took the chance to ask where they were headed and who they were with. Their answer immediately yanked the entire party right back to the mission's core objective. They were soldiers from the Imperial Kingdom, under royal decree, to escort those deemed heretics to Jadadobo. The escorted individuals had violated the ban on Ano, a religion from the continent, and were to be taken to a hill in Jadodobo for public execution. The name Jadodobo finally appeared, but it came with information that sent chills down the entire group's spines. The goods for their quest probably weren't objects or cargo, but these very people being escorted. If they delivered them to their destination, everyone, including the child in the group, would certainly be killed. But if they interfered with the kingdom's soldiers, the system might count it as attacking humans and deduct experience points, just like last time. Joe started doing mental gymnastics. Was this a mandatory quest event, or a trap where siding with the wrong party would lead the entire group to inadvertently sabotage their own path? While they were still figuring things out, Cobb suddenly flared up in anger. She scoffed, asking if the Imperial Kingdom even cared about the word honor anymore. What gave them the right to execute their own citizens on another country's territory? Realizing the woman before him was Codanilo's head knight, the opponent immediately put on a disdainful face, retorting that a nation whose only asset was an important transit route shouldn't be talking down to anyone. He introduced himself as Camito, vice-captain of the Imperial Kingdom. Cobb refused to back down, continuing her verbal spar by pointing out how a mighty army from an esteemed nation like theirs almost got wiped out by a bunch of Kobos, yet still acted so arrogant. The air suddenly reeked of gunpowder, forcing Shindo to step in and mediate before someone ended up dead. She called Souza to quickly come and help. And just like that, a private meeting of the heroes was convened. After analyzing the situation, the group tentatively leaned towards the possibility that the prisoners were indeed the goods that needed to be delivered to Jadodobo. Purely from a quest logic standpoint, helping the kingdom's soldiers escort them to their destination might be the way to clear the stage. But the problem was, clearing the quest that way meant actively sending all those people, including the child, to their deaths. Doza suspected that whoever was in the future was trying to see if the heroes would accept sacrificing lives to complete the mission. He also couldn't rule out the possibility that indirectly causing deaths would incur a system penalty. Hearing that, Yu found it completely unreasonable. If it really was a trap, this quest was basically forcing players to step on a landmine. But they didn't have enough information yet, so outright ditching the kingdom's soldiers was too risky. Finally, Yu proposed a softer approach. Escort the entire group to Jadodobo first, then figure out a way to prevent the execution and let the people escape. No one objected, so the group decided to accompany the soldiers until they had a firmer conclusion. The Imperial soldiers, of course, were not thrilled about it. They didn't want the prisoners traveling with heroes, and they were even more annoyed to have knights from another country, like Cobb, present. But Commander Camito understood that they couldn't kill the prisoners before the execution day, and they still needed the hero's healing abilities, especially since the child in the group wasn't fully conscious yet. On the other hand, Joe's clearly determined that information was what they needed most right now. As evening approached, Camito ordered everyone to stop and set up camp. Cobb didn't want to obey his orders, but there wasn't much else she could do. It was then that Josua approached Camito to ask permission to speak with one of the prisoners for a moment. The person introduced themselves as a follower from the continent of Ya. He didn't ask to save everyone, but only hoped that somehow at least the child Bellily could escape. According to him, the Imperial Kingdom not only arrested Ajot followers within its own territory, but also assassinated them in other regions. Once brought to Jadodobo, there was almost nowhere left that could protect them. The reason for the conflict wasn't simply a clear-cut good versus evil scenario either. The Imperial citizens revered their king, while the Ajot followers worshipped their own god, and both sides used the other's undermining of beliefs as an excuse for retaliation, ultimately spiraling into a cycle of mutual destruction. The climax was when statues of imperial kings were destroyed, officially sparking the ban on the religion and the execution of its followers. The woman further explained that the 17 gods of Atzos originally preached peace and love, but not all followers truly understood that. Some extremists had divided the world into allies and outsiders, only making things worse. Hearing all this, Josua was even more certain this wasn't just some random, insignificant side event. Yu honestly admitted she didn't really get religious matters or totalitarian states, while Souza continued to question the Imperial soldiers to understand their twisted logic. Camito stated very bluntly that bringing the followers to Jadodobo for execution was meant as a deterrent, as that location was a gateway for people from the continent of Ya, so to stop Ajot from spreading, they had to block it at the entrance. From the villain's perspective, this was a calculated move to break their spirit. When questioned about his extreme methods, Camito launched into a classic My Country's History monologue. Back in the day, families losing their menfolk or main providers to war literally cratered into poverty. Our boy King Diakafeev decided to fix his things by casually handing out slaves as war prizes to his victorious soldiers and the families of the fallen. What a guy! To Camito, that's what he calls a good king, someone who supposedly doesn't abandon his nation's weak. And of course, expanding his empire through colonization was just as a necessary first step to bettering the lives of his people. Du Shu totally got the twisted logic, but also felt an immediate visceral nope. This saving the weak strategy conveniently only applied to his weak, while anyone else who got conquered, colonized, or enslaved was just, collateral damage. For Do Shu, that sounded exactly like a bunch of arrogant bullies ganging up on the few and then calling it justice. What kind of good king hands out people as rewards? Bro, I'm speechless. Yuka, completely fed up, straight up told him she loathed dictatorships. She just kept getting angrier with every word. She even started cussing out the king for his slave-gifting policy. The soldiers immediately bristled, taking it as an insult to their glorious slave-giving king. Yuka, never one to back down, basically dared them. Go ahead, make my day, you think I'm scared or something? Josu frantically jumped in to smooth things over. Oh, she's just a little passionate. No hard feelings, really. Kamito then shot back, so, what's your take on the king, huh? This situation was obviously going to put someone on the spot. Du Su, viewing it from a king's perspective, found himself in complete agreement. Only then did Kamito finally chill out. As the journey resumed, Kahab, our resident nightmare coach, was still very much on the clock. She drilled into Shindo that since women typically fall short on raw strength, bridging that gap means mastering technique. And in sword fighting, the fastest path to victory is going straight for the vitals. The convoy then rolled up to a massive mountain range. Crossing these mountains would shave their trip to Rad Dodobo down to just 5 more days. But even with that, the total travel time from here to their destination was still a solid 12 days. With only 13 days left on the mission clock, there was literally zero room for error. The mountain roads were a literal nightmare for carriages, but Kamito casually mentioned a secret, faster path. The whole crew pushed their rides towards an ancient cave entrance, apparently a relic from a civilization thousands of years old. Inside was a whole network of ancient mechanisms, but thankfully, the entry-level ones were still operational. At first glance, everything looked pretty epic. Massive stone doors, grinding gears, ancient contraptions, the sound of machinery whirring after millennia, it all left the squad completely awestruck. But then, as always, that epic vibe instantly morphed into a classic dungeon trap. As our hero party and Cobb stepped inside, the entrance abruptly slammed shut behind them. From the outside, Kamito delivered a totally sincere apology, claiming they couldn't roll with anyone linked to heresy. He even dropped a nasty little taunt, wondering if the heroes were even strong enough to survive it. Doa stared at the unfolding disaster, barely resisting the urge to scream profanities. The mission objective, aka the prisoner, was gone, time was ticking, and who even knew if they could open the exit? Just then Kahab, ever the pragmatist, reignited a spark of hope. She pointed out that while, yes, they were trapped, this was technically still a shortcut to their destination. So, all they had to do was bust out of here and then bury those 3 traitors alive. Simple. With no other options, the entire squad braced themselves and dived into the challenge. The first mechanism forced everyone into a meticulously timed step-by-step dance. But our boy Souza was already way too familiar with this particular trap trope. He casually glanced around and spotted some weird symbols carved right into the rock. He instantly figured it out, sprinted to the symbols, and gave the stone panel a quick twist to align it. Problem solved, and the next, our boy Josu, brimming with his usual overconfidence, was sure the team could waltz through this cave, get ahead of those arrogant grunts, and show them how to really get a dirt nap in the mountains. But as always, the universe despises overconfident protagonists, and with one moment of carelessness, Josu was yeeted into a deep pit. That epic fall separated him from the party, and looking down from above, the pit was deep enough to swallow an 8-story building. Juza, being the MC, naturally survived, but couldn't just casually climb out. He told the others up top to go ahead if they could, while he'd figure out his own OP way. The problem was, the moment they were separated from their strategist, Do Shua, the whole party instantly lost their resident quest solver. Before this, they'd always just let him lead the way, and piggyback on his genius to reach the finish line. Now, without Souza's brilliant mind around, Shindo, more than anyone, was practically having a meltdown. But surprisingly, Kusue was the first to speak up. She ran off to grab some paper and a pen, then started crunching numbers like a mad scientist. Their next challenge involved 2 rock walls moving with absolutely no rhythm or reason. If it were just one person, it might be a coin flip, but they were dragging a whole carriage, which meant they needed a much wider, safer gap. Considering the timing between wall movements, CU figured this ancient mechanism was likely water-powered, similar to a rhythmic water flume system. If there were multiple mechanisms running on different cycles, all they needed to do was calculate when their rhythms perfectly aligned to find their golden window. She postulated the front wall operated on cycles of 60 and 75 seconds, then continued calculating for the steps beyond. After calculating the perfect crossing time, Sin decided to try it herself first, just to flex. If she failed, the others would just use her data to succeed. The entire party held their breath, waiting for the exact moment. Then Sindo dashed through the trap. She successfully made it across and called down to Juza, letting him know they were moving on. Receiving the update, Josu, ever the chill protagonist, shouted back, "Go on ahead, I'll catch up in like 2 seconds." Sure enough, he quickly figured out a way to climb up, using his knife to carve out footholds, like a total boss. Meanwhile, back on the surface, after navigating more ancient mechanisms, the group finally reached a massive arena-like chamber. Deep inside, something stood motionless, but one look told them it was definitely not a friendly decorative statue. Kabu recognized it as a gaboy, a legendary rumored construct. These things were made by draining bodily fluids, transforming them into a mummified form, allowing them to reactivate after thousands of years. Turns out, this was the very gaboy that Kamito dude mentioned. And of course, it wasn't just standing there looking pretty. The ancient mechanisms hummed to life. The millennia-old construct slowly rumbled to activation. Yosua, meanwhile, was still diligently scraping away at the wall, making his precarious footholds. He'd climbed quite high, and even knowing he'd just respawned, the vibes were still off. The feeling of plummeting and then waking up all over again still gave him the literal chills. No sooner had he thought that, his hand slipped from a foothold, and cue the 40-second respawn timer. He'd lost count of the falls, but the more he was cornered, the more he unlocked his inner grind set. On the 36th attempt, his torch was accidentally snuffed out by a gust of wind, leaving him in total darkness. Finally, Dosu decided he didn't need his eyes anymore. He consoled himself, thinking maybe closing his eyes would help him focus better.
Yeah, right.
While struggling with the cliff face, childhood memories came flooding back. Juga remembered standing in front of his class, introducing himself. He was never good at blending in, so even simple group assignments like class trips became a mental torture session. When the teacher told everyone to form groups of 6, Josu was practically tossed around like unwanted inventory. Any group short a member was forced to take him, and he just quietly swallowed the feeling of being an outcast. That's why, returning to the questing world, Doza clung to the idea of getting stronger, of climbing out himself. He couldn't just stay at the bottom, waiting for someone to pull him up. This pit was practically designed by the server admin to be almost unclimbable, but after countless traumatic falls, Doza finally made it. Talk about MC energy. He then navigated using the map scouted by the group ahead, but still tripped over literal plot devices now and then, since the map only showed a 2D perspective. After some wandering, Dosu stumbled upon a data log, and the vibe check inside was absolutely devastating. Turns out the warrior Bim had unfortunately perished in this cave. Kahab had sworn he'd send them to join Bim soon enough. After reading it, Souza immediately fell into deep thought. And right beneath his feet was Bim. He suddenly remembered the few but precious moments they'd shared. Yet now, thanks to this damn darkness, he couldn't even see the old man's face. He asked for leave, thanking the old man for everything. Meanwhile, back with the advance party. It wasn't just the Gaboy, they also had to deal with swarms of blood-sucking bats. Only Kabul and Sind could neatly dispatch the bats while focusing their attacks on the Gaboy. Sind realized the only way out was to grab the key hanging from its hand. Kabel locked onto the target, rushing into trade blows, and even praised Sind for keeping up with her. Sind then revealed she used to play some kind of stick-fighting sport back in the real world, explaining her surprisingly good motor skills. In fact, if her physical stats weren't restricted by this world's mechanics, Sind probably would have gone pro in the real world. The thought of this janky system holding her back made Sind want to explode, blaming everything on that half-perverted dude who dragged her into this game. But anger aside, she still chose to keep training until she literally couldn't play anymore. After that emotional monologue, she looked over just in time to see Kabel take a nasty stab to the gut, slowly lose her balance, and tumble into the deep water below. The Gaboy immediately shifted its murderous attention to Sind. She knew her chances of winning were practically zero. Her body instinctively backed away, only to accidentally step on a fallen bat at her feet. Right at that razor-thin moment, time abruptly froze. She remembered Juza's explanation. This was the signal of reaching level 10, meaning only she and the server admin could move during the job transfer moment. This should have been amazing news, but for Sind, those few seconds felt like pure agony. If the system had just let her transfer her job a little sooner, maybe Kabel wouldn't be in that predicament. The wheel of fortune started spinning. Juza had once shared a trick to exploit this brief window before the admin, Akka the dog walker, hit play on time again. If there were enemies nearby, these few seconds of pause time could become a monumental advantage. So when the timeline resumed, Sind, now a sword-wielding warrior, charged forward, pouring all her pent-up rage into a furious counterattack. The timing was flawless, but unfortunately the creature's body was so tough her sword barely scratched it. The monster's immediate counterstrike then shattered Sind's left arm. She was sent flying, but she managed to cling on with one hand and pull herself back up. Thanks to her warrior class, her arm healed super fast, so she promptly opened her inventory to equip a witch's hat and a shield for extra stats. It was then that Sin finally noticed the wound Cabell had managed to inflict on the Gaboy. Remembering Cabell's earlier advice, to take down a tough opponent, you can't just hack away blindly. With swordsmanship, the crucial thing is to aim for a critical spot. The neck is an obvious target, but many creatures protect that area, so the heart is often a safer bet. Even with chest armor or bone plating, if it's not full body, there's always a gap. However, women typically fall behind men in raw strength, so to close that unfair gap, technique is the only answer. It's not about swinging a sword harder, it's about knowing where to plunge it to ensure the opponent can never get back up. Sin figured the Gaboy's heart was probably in a similar spot to a human's, so she decided to take a gamble, block its attack with her shield, then thrust her sword. But the Gaboy was one beat faster, snatching the hilt of her sword. But it ain't over till the credits roll. She used her shield to block its finishing blow, then slid through its legs, vaulted onto its head, grabbed her own sword arm, and plunged the blade in for the killing strike. Elsewhere, Juza spotted a light ahead. As he ran, he reminded himself that not all lives are truly equal. Instead, life is fair in a far crueler way. Once standards are established, life itself gets scored and ranked, allowing people to choose who is more worthy of saving. The deeper he delved into this quest, the more he questioned his own existence, why he was chosen as a player, and who he truly was within this motley crew. Words he'd heard from others flashed through his mind. Stuff like teammates are strength, you have to change the world you live in, and what's the point if you abandon even the children? From all those scattered thoughts, Juza drew a stark conclusion. This current team lineup was anything but random. Everyone's chosen profession, their wheel of fortune results, how each member was roped into this game. It all seemed orchestrated to force him into the role of coordinator. Considering his combat abilities alone at this moment, he was undeniably the strongest in the group. That seemed to be the truth, until Juza witnessed the Gaboy dramatically fall. But there was no time to process any of it. Hearing Cabell was still underwater, Juza immediately stowed. Normally our guy Sue just cruises through quests, not batting an eye if a few side characters got yeeted from existence. But now, just look at our main man, throwing himself into danger for a lady knight. Even his own crew was doing double takes, totally dumbfounded. Moments later, Cabell woke up, totally healed, only to find out Souza had been spamming healing magic. And get this, whenever his mana ran dry, he'd just chug some of that blood he got from Gaboy to power up again. And the moment the healing finished, our guy just straight up collapsed, looking like he'd been completely zapped of all his life force. Seeing her savior so utterly drained he was practically sleeping with his eyes open, Cabell leaned in and gently kissed Sue on the lips, right there in front of the whole hero party. Another one for the harem folks. When they asked her why she did it, Kabu just shrugged, saying she didn't have any particular reason. She just felt like Sue had something in common with her. They were both struggling, trying to figure out who they were, how far they could push themselves, and what they could accomplish so they could die, knowing their lives actually meant something. From there, Kahab began telling them about her homeland. In Cotonel, your knightly rank is decided by this absolutely brutal cutthroat competition system. Like 3,000 people join, but only the top 100 even get to call themselves knights. Kahab ranked 70, which sounds pretty impressive, right? But in her family, that just made her look super average. Her dad was number 2, her older brother was 8, and her other brother was 15. Living in a family full of literal monsters, being ranked 70 wasn't exactly something to brag about anymore. Kabu knew that feeling all too well, pushing herself to exhaustion, only to realize she still couldn't bridge the gap with those actual prodigies. Maybe that's partly why she even joined this expedition. For her, if there was any chance to close the gap in swordsmanship, it was only through actual combat. Her father always said one real battle was worth like 10,000 practice swings. Basically, if you want to get stronger, you gotta learn to cleave into some actual, living flesh. With things temporarily stable, the whole crew started turning their attention to those Imperial soldiers. They weren't taking the cave shortcut anymore. They'd gone around the mountain road, which meant there was still a chance for our heroes to catch up. But the mission clock was ticking down, with only about 7 days and 10 hours left. Not exactly enough wiggle room to both get lost and play the hero who saves the day, you know? Right then, Dosha suddenly woke up, practically bolting upright as he realized he'd totally misunderstood the problem from the very start. What he started asking wasn't about whether the Imperial soldiers were good or bad, or if the prisoners were worth saving. Nope, he was asking about the definition of the word cargo in their quest. Sue started dragging everyone back through their past quests, literally scrutinizing how the system phrased its objectives. The first time, they were asked to kill a goblin. But this world could have a gazillion different goblin variants, and the quest never specified which kind it had to be. The second time, they had to discover 2 villages, but again, no specifics on which villages. The third time, they just needed to complete a village chief's request. And guess what? The village name, the chief's name, and the actual request itself weren't hard-coded from the get-go. In other words, as long as whatever they did vaguely matched the mission's definition, the system would still count it. From that point, Sue pivoted, ready to completely dissect the word cargo. If cargo meant something valuable, with a clear recipient, that could be transported and then handed over, then these three condemned prisoners might not actually fit the bill. They were being brought to Radabo for execution, not to be delivered to a specific recipient. And there was zero indication they were considered valuable trade goods either. But the kicker was, Souza couldn't be 100% certain himself. He admitted there was still a chance the system would count the condemned prisoners as cargo. And if they abandoned them, the mission could totally go down as a failure. Which is why when Kusue reacted so fiercely, worried he was about to abandon those three again, especially the child, Sue didn't just cold-heartedly brush it off this time. Character development, folks. He understood. These people weren't like heroes. For them, death was actual death. No respawns, no try-again options. The situation had officially become a truly complex dilemma. Ultimately, Sue decided to split the party. One group would keep tracking the Imperial soldiers and the condemned prisoners, while the other had to find alternative interpretations for that pesky word, cargo. He split the teams based on pure combat power, deciding he and Sind had to split up, since they were the two most crucial fighters right now. And Kahab didn't even need to ask. She immediately chose to chase the Imperial soldiers, because her beef with Bim Burt was still very much unsettled. The next morning, the Find the Cargo team was formed. Shindo, Kusue, and one of the regular soldiers. Sind figured if they just followed the road, they'd eventually stumble upon a residential area. And there, they might find merchants who needed cargo escorted. If not a village, then maybe they'd at least run into the Buo group heading towards Radabo. The other team, however, was in for a much less chill time. Sue, knowing he was stuck with the Imperial soldier-chasing branch, immediately started grumbling, because, let's be real, this path looked way more dangerous. But Kahab was thinking way ahead. The Imperial soldiers had no idea the hero group had escaped the cave, so if they just ambushed and wiped them out now, the consequences could be absolutely catastrophic. Because before she was locked up in the ruins, she'd noticed Kamito had sent a message back to the kingdom. The message was probably reporting that they were going to handle the hero group and Kotenel soldiers. And if those very soldiers went missing after that letter, the Imperial Kingdom would definitely interpret it as Kotenel launching a counterattack and butchering their troops. For a warmongering nation like Deox, war could break out at any given excuse. The problem was, if Deox actually attacked Kotenelo, Kabel wouldn't stand a chance. The enemy outnumbered them by a staggering 10-1. Kahab didn't want his homeland dragged into an unwinnable war just because of his anger. So the group's objective wasn't just to save people or get revenge, but also to convince Deox that Kotenelo was entirely uninvolved. Josua understood that this couldn't be achieved by simply rushing in and slaughtering everyone. They needed to force the soldiers to write reports that were favorable to them. Josua's plan, however, immediately smelled incredibly fishy. He wasn't entirely sure if the letter would truly be enough to prevent a war, because if the Deox Kingdom wanted to fight, they could easily ignore any and all reasons. But at the very least, before dying or before having to report failure, those soldiers would have to suffer enough despair, humiliation, and regret. Dua, hearing him talk, seriously thought he had the makings of a demon king. To be fair, she wasn't entirely wrong. Much like in deep strategy or competitive games, Josua spent a lot of time every day figuring out how to utterly decimate his enemies. But then, right after that, Dua casually brought up whether this world might actually be a simulation. She started asking wildly off-topic questions, like if kissing a character in this world would count as a first kiss. Josua, hearing this, immediately guessed she had already kissed someone. Naturally, Dua vehemently denied it. Our unbothered MC didn't even bother arguing, just stating his personal opinion that a first kiss is just a concept, so kissing in this virtual world probably still counts. Meanwhile, the Deox soldiers were now nearing their destination. Kamito gathered the remaining troops, declaring this a treacherous journey where most of their superiors had died, forcing him, a mere deputy commander, to lead. He emphasized that in just 3 more days, they would reach Rad Dodobo, where the Ajos cultists would be publicly executed. To him, this was about stopping heresy from the Yija continent from spreading and protecting his homeland from being defiled. Just then, Josua appeared before Kamito. He didn't come to fight immediately, but stated he was there to negotiate. He bluntly pointed out that fighting with a hero was completely useless, because if he got injured, he'd recover in 20 seconds, and if he died, he'd revive in 40 seconds, so the Deox soldiers had 0 chance of winning. Before getting to the main terms, Josua dropped a massive piece of fake news. He said the 3 Cotonello people had died in the cave, and 2 other heroes also fell into a pit, leaving only him and Dua. Dua, standing next to him, was visibly annoyed, having been dragged along as a mere background character and called by an irritating nickname. But that, too, was part of the act. She even revealed that Josua had converted to the Ajot faith. His condition was that Deox had to hand over the 3 cultists to him. Otherwise, an immortal hero like him would travel everywhere, spreading the teachings of the Saintus. And when people heard the hero's words, Atos would spread like never before. He would return at sunrise. If the 3 cultists died or were harmed before then, the negotiation would be considered off. The Deox side immediately discussed how to handle it. They realized the hero truly didn't die, but not dying didn't mean he couldn't be locked up. If they tricked Josua into a pit or threw him in jail, he would still be neutralized. The soldiers decided they would act that very night, capturing him before the threat of evangelism could turn into a disaster. And just as they thought of that, Dua secretly returned. She appeared with a very knowing expression, saying she never got along with Josua, and now having to go off alone with him, their relationship was even worse than before. If Deox wanted to catch Josua, she could tell them where he was sleeping. Kamado didn't immediately believe her, suspecting it was a ploy to lure him away from the prisoners to save them. Dua then added that if they wanted, they could go with her to confirm Josua's location. After a moment of consideration, Kamado left a soldier to guard the prisoners and followed Dua. However, he warned that if she lied, he would immediately take her prisoner. Dua led 2 soldiers on an incredibly annoying wild goose chase. They kept asking how much longer it would take. She calmly said, "Almost there, another minute, then another 30 seconds. Kamado smelled a rat and immediately ordered soldiers to stab, and of course, ahead of them was nothing but barren land and rocks. It was then that our boy Kamado finally realized he'd been completely played. Enraged, he threatened Ratadobo, swearing he'd tie stones to Juka and throw her into the sea to sink forever. But the moment they returned to their campsite, the real plan finally came to light. Dua was already waiting, a blood-stained weapon in her hand, surrounded by motionless believers. And Dua now couldn't stop grinning. She revealed the only truth was that the Kahab Night Squad had indeed fallen in battle. And the rumor about Dua following the AOS faith was unfortunately a complete fabrication. The true purpose of these 2 heroes coming here was simply to avenge their 5 fallen comrades. At this point, Josua set fire to whatever remained, burning it all to ashes. Dua also broke free from her restraints using fire magic, promptly stashing away her mage outfit so nothing could hold her back. After that, she ran straight to Josua, hopped onto the dock's last remaining horse, and they made a swift getaway. Kamado immediately gave chase, exactly as Josua had predicted from the start. Rewinding a few minutes, Josua had snuck into the campsite, knocked out the guard, tied him up, and finally got the prisoner out of there. This ensured Kamado would believe the Cotonel Night Squad was wiped out, leaving only a few surviving heroes seeking revenge, thus preserving the relationship between Deox and Cotonel. Dua looked at Josua, a mix of admiration and genuine fear flashing in her eyes. Because having this kind of person as an ally was one thing, but as an enemy, that would be a real nightmare. While the Believer rescue team succeeded, the group tasked with finding goods found themselves in a total bind. 3 days had passed, and they still hadn't found a single settlement, let alone any merchants or packages sent to Radu. If they couldn't find anything, all their other theories about the goods would collapse, and the team would lose precious time to return and deal with the Believers. Everyone could only hope that Josua's team had successfully done their part. Meanwhile, Josua arrived at the cave where the group of Believers was hiding. Bellely finally woke up, politely thanking the brave heroine for saving her life. Hearing such a well-behaved child express gratitude made Dua's face instantly flush red. She immediately ran outside, muttering to herself that she wasn't the type who enjoyed praise. But the relief was undeniably real. At the very least, their goal of rescuing the death row prisoners had been achieved. Let's elaborate a bit more on that rescue plan. From the start, they had prepared 3 dummies using cloth bags, old clothes, and ropes. With bags over their heads and ropes around their necks, from a distance, it would look exactly like an execution scene. If a real body were mixed in, the authenticity would skyrocket. But that exact detail was what made Dua so uncomfortable. She asked directly, wouldn't doing that mean they'd actually have to kill a real character in this world? Josua, however, still viewed everything through the lens of a system and a game. He analyzed that they felt pain but not too clearly, had absurd inventories, weapons appeared from thin air, and even the server owner once said this was future technology. To him, this world might just be something made real enough to make players believe it's actually real. But even now, Dua still couldn't stomach that line of thinking. She asked Josua, even if this is a virtual world, is eliminating one person to avoid war still the right choice? Josua flat out stated, if necessary, yes, because the 5th quest still needs to be completed in this world. More importantly, This was what Kabel had asked for, and an acquaintance of his had already fallen. That line sounded like he was defending a friend, but coming from Josua's mouth, it still gave Dua goosebumps. She understood that feeling of revenge, though, because if a character she liked was killed in a game, she'd also want to execute the culprit. But then she wondered, if Kabel was so important to Josua, what did that make the three of them? He then used an analogy. They were all like passengers on a bus about to fall off a cliff. One wrong shift of weight, and everyone dies. In a situation where he himself could die along with the whole group, he believed he didn't have the luxury to sit around pitying the lives of people in a game. On the other hand, the Diok soldiers were still wallowing in the shadow of their failed mission. But before this, Kamito had been personally given immense expectations by the king himself. Yet now, the outcome was completely the opposite. After the incident, all they managed to recover was just the carriage. Kamito was in utter agony, his tears falling as his game finally ended. Kamito gritted his teeth, penning his final letter to the king, reporting this absolutely epic fail. But right after that letter went out, Kahab showed up to deal with Kamito's last remaining soldier. He was clearly panicking, having heard from Dua that Kotnel's entire night squad had already gone bye-bye. He now had no idea when or where he'd been tricked, grabbing an axe from the carriage and lunging at Kahab like a moth to a flame. And that's when everything was revealed. Not a single thing Kamito thought he knew was actually true. Even worse, those black-clad figures who'd been incinerated earlier, turns out they were his soldiers. With that, Kahab swiftly crippled Kamito, subjecting him to the ultimate humiliation. Next, she drew her greatsword, allowing him to speak his last words. Kamito closed his eyes and resigned himself, but his final wish? For world peace. Peace, my foot! Kahab immediately delivered the killing blow, because the peace spewing from his mouth was built on the lives of her comrades. Very soon after, the Empire also received news of the mission's failure. However, that king had zero sympathy for Kamito's team, even declaring that if they messed up, they should have just hightailed it back sooner. A subordinate asked if a rescue squad was needed. The king flat out said no, because for him those measly lives weren't worth the trouble. What concerned him more was the hero, who was supposed to remain neutral for humanity, now showing signs of turning against them. If it was just Kamito being an idiot and temporarily angering them, it would be one thing. But prevention is better than cure, so the king decided he'd better start researching ways to kill the hero, just in case. Meanwhile, Josua's group still didn't know if Kamito's letter said exactly what they wanted, but they were calling the plan a win for now. But the mission wasn't over yet. The group's real objective was still ahead, getting those goods to Radu. Checking the map, Josua realized Sind and Kusue's team wasn't moving anywhere near as expected, meaning the goods-finding team was hitting a serious wall. And indeed, the search team was completely drawing a blank. They'd asked everywhere, even thought they had a lead with a merchant, but it turned out there were no packages needing to be shipped to Radu. Looking around, they couldn't find any other suspicious shops or trading establishments. If they kept going and still couldn't find the goods, the whole team would pretty much be screwed. Kusue started thinking outside the box, wanting to ask the soldier Makua a question. Meanwhile, Josua's group was getting ready to continue their journey. But there was one thing bugging her. She really didn't want to sit next to whatever Doza had just loaded onto the cart. Of course, Doza was as practical as ever. Since it technically counted as cargo, he was bringing it along. Suddenly, the kid from the group of followers popped out, offering to help out. Dua, seeing this, completely forgot what she'd just been complaining about. Now she just needed to restrain herself from doing anything to the child. Josua saw this and immediately suggested they swap places so Duka could drive the carriage instead. The first one to react, however, was Kahab, which immediately made Duka suspicious. And that wasn't all. Along the way, Kahab kept staring at Josua and sighing. All these signs connected in Dua's head, and she was sure Kahab was absolutely head over heels for Josua. Because the number of passengers had increased, the whole group had to let the horses rest more often. Kahab wanted to say something to Josua, but kept hesitating, which Duka, standing nearby, immediately picked up on. Through her weeb eyes, this whole vibe looked exactly like one of those confession events in a dating sim. So she reluctantly took on the role of an accidental matchmaker. She remembered those events in the game on Star. Just help a side character confess, and the main character's affection level would go up too. The more Dua thought about it, the more she felt this was her moment to make her move, even if the actual people involved seemed to want zero meddling. Her first plan, create some private space. Since riding a horse for too long made her super sore, she used it as an excuse to switch spots, strategically pushing Josua and Kahab into the same carriage. According to her game logic, cramped space, two people alone, plus that looming feeling of being about to part ways. That pretty much guaranteed something had to happen. But life isn't a game, and the second Josua had a chance to lean back, he immediately fell asleep. Dua stared at the scene, utterly speechless. Sure, after a super stressful night, sleeping totally made sense, but this just cranked up the ship-shipping difficulty to expert mode. Refusing to give up, our resident matchmaker thought, if these two cook together, some accidental hand-brushing will surely lead to undeniable chemistry. Ah, the classic rom-com setup. But before she could even properly set the scene, Cabello just casually dragged home an entire wild boar. Way to ruin the vibe, bro. Everyone else was stoked, but Duca froze. Her meticulously planned romantic dinner scene absolutely obliterated. Her dreams shattered. When her cute little schemes kept failing, Duca started swerving into a much more perilous lane. She reasoned that if Kabu didn't have many opportunities left with Juza, then a good old training session could totally engrave their feelings. Peak fantasy romance, right? Immediately her mind conjured up those controversial game characters, the ones who apparently expressed their affection by leaving battle scars. Yikes. Duca even tried to convince herself that some deep primal love could only be communicated through combat. Naturally, she ended up getting roped into the training herself. She protested fiercely, arguing she was clearly meant to be the director, not a participant. But hey, she started it, so she kinda deserved that. After a string of spectacular failures, Duca finally snapped, ranting about how this entire world was just a trash-tier game. We've all been there, girl. Meanwhile, in a completely different storyline, the legendary hero party Sindo finally caught a glimmer of hope. Kusue had a brainwave earlier, realizing they shouldn't be looking for merchants, but actual delivery services. Sometimes the obvious solution is the hardest to see. Even better, the monthly delivery run was happening today. Talk about perfect timing. The entire group quickly spotted the actual courier, package in hand, making their way to Jadadobo. This was almost exactly what they'd been looking for. Our valiant hero party immediately offered to escort the precious cargo to its destination. The original transport crew didn't object at first, but then some random local bully decided to jump in, all annoyed that these heroes were meddling in his business. He drew his weapon and charged Sindo, only to get absolutely bodied in about one sad, lonely musical note. Another high and mighty wannabe humbled. And just like that, all objections magically vanished. Funny how that happens. That night, Kabu finally tracked down Juza, ready to reveal what she'd kept bottled up in her heart for way too long. Cue the dramatic music. She hesitantly admitted there was something she'd been itching to say for ages. The tension! And then, the big reveal wasn't a confession of love as everyone totally expected, but a simple thank you. Oof. She was grateful to Juza for giving her the chance to avenge her fallen comrade, Bim Bird. A heartfelt thank you for helping her achieve what she couldn't possibly do on her own. Juza, ever the chill one, simply replied that he already hated those guys anyway. So casual. Kabu finally felt a huge weight lifted, having said her piece. Meanwhile, Duca, who was lying nearby, was on the verge of total collapse. All that build-up for a confession, only to get a bog-standard thank you? The horror. The next morning, back with Sindo's group, that loudmouth who objected was now acting like a perfectly trained puppy, showering the heroes with endless flattery. Classic. As for Juza, our resourceful MC, he meticulously laid out his 3 potential cargo options. Always prepared this one. Option number 1, the 3 death row prisoners Ajos that he just casually rescued. If he could get those 3 to a safe haven, the system would probably count them as legitimate cargo for the transport quest. Genius, really. If that plan flopped, Option 2 involved the relics of the fallen Dex soldiers. Just by selling or submitting them at Jadadobo, the system might consider that as transporting goods. As for the third possibility, oh, that one was far more terrifying, and just thinking about it was enough to make everyone groan. Looking at Sindo's group, at their current pace, they'd barely make it in time. This was their absolute last shot, which meant even Kusue wasn't entirely chill about this cargo. Because if all it took was escorting some regular old package to complete the quest, well, things would be suspiciously too simple for this world. Especially since, from day one, every single quest in this world had been designed to absolutely wreck players. Plus, they still had another quest hanging over their heads, mapping the entire second half of the terrain. No sooner had he finished that sentence than the delivery quest complete. Notification dramatically popped up. Classic timing. Turns out, our boy Juza's unconventional cargo had been officially recognized by the system. He's just built different. Jadadobo sent its thanks to the group for both the intel and for totally messing up Dex's evil plans. But they also had to politely remind them that next time, even if it's crucial evidence, maybe don't bring human heads. A minor detail. Duca, of course, was floored that the literal head of a Dex soldier was the correct answer for the quest. This world, man. Juza figured it probably met the criteria for cargo to Jadadobo, but honestly, it was just like a boss judging a resume. If they liked it, it counted. If not, you're redoing the whole thing. Well, at least the first quest was officially confirmed complete. Small victories, right? Right after that, Sindo's group linked back up with Juza. The gang's all here. The first major task was done, and the group could finally breathe a temporary sigh of relief, but no real rest for the weary. That giant, unmapped second half of the terrain was still looming. With only about a day and a half left, Suya was just about to suggest their usual split up and conquer strategy, but the entire group beat him to the punch. He suddenly realized he might have accidentally taught these ladies some questionable habits. Oops. And just like that, the four members split into the four cardinal directions, east, west, south, north, to tackle that map and hit their 5% quota. Efficiency! In their heads, given their current speed, this quest seemed like it would be a total breeze to complete. Just when they thought they could finally catch a break, the snow started falling again, and that familiar, ominous trash game smell immediately hit them in the face. Here we go again. On the other side of the world, our boy Cabello was also completely snowed in at Jadadobo, stuck by a ridiculously heavy snowfall. From Makua's intel, this region had a uniquely nasty climate. Once the snow started, it wouldn't quit until everything was buried under a blanket of pure white. And of course, the mountains were always the roughest part. Kahab suddenly recalled her last moments with Josua, the setting sun urging her to finally speak her heart. She'd asked if Suza was really leaving for good. Our boy didn't want to, but alas, duty called. So they parted ways, leaving Kahab with a serious case of what-ifs. While she was deep in thought, Makua pulled her back to reality. Back to the present, Kahab decided to postpone their departure, giving the whole squad some much-needed rest before heading home. The moment Makua left, Arnaitis fell back into a pensive mood. Before, she thought this place would be her end, that she'd leave without ever becoming anything significant. But after all that, she was still alive, and her fight apparently wasn't over. Kahab knew herself to be a knight, and for a knight to truly live, the battlefield was her stage. Therefore, the feelings brewing in her heart simply weren't allowed to exist. Meanwhile, Josu started on his map-scanning quest. Thanks to his prior class transfer, he could equip a few extra items. In fact, if you considered physically layering outfits, he could even wear multiple sets at once. At first, our MC thought he was lucky to have changed classes just in time, but on second thought, lucky my butt. He'd expected this part to just be a leisurely stroll to fill out the map, but nope, the system decided to dump an instant blizzard on him. It kept getting darker, the temperature plummeted, and the problem quickly shifted from completing the quest to whether he'd freeze to death on the road. Josu quickly pondered if respawning would even work if he died from the cold. Sind and Kusue had once been eaten by a giant worm and couldn't revive normally, implying respawn only worked if the surrounding conditions were still livable. If his body froze, then revived only to immediately fall into a dangerously low temperature state again, well, that'd be game over, for real. To avoid dropping his body temperature too fast, he had to force himself to move, running with high knees through the snow. Du wasn't doing much better. The moment she was thrown into the blizzard, she cursed this event for being utterly terrible, wishing for at least some romantic scene with a handsome guy on a white horse, trapped in the snow, having to huddle for warmth. But before she could finish dreaming, reality slapped her hard in the face. She started wondering if everyone else had already given up and rested. If everyone had, it wouldn't be so bad, but if she was the only lazy one stopping, the map progress would rat her out instantly. So Du shivered and kept going, complaining about the cold non-stop, knowing that if she stopped, she was genuinely toast. In another direction, Kusue was also being pushed to her absolute limit. She'd been going almost non-stop since the day before, now compounded by heavy snow, her heart pounding like it was about to burst, but Kusue refused to stop. She remembered the first time she was pulled into this world, when she was granted the warrior class. Back then, Sin was ecstatic, like she'd struck gold, finally having a new comrade, and a familiar face at that. Even though Kusue didn't understand what was happening, Sin proactively reassured her, telling her to just try her best, and she'd support her all the way. For Kusue, her first time in this world was actually a little bit fun. True, this place was full of scary things, but at least she had a healthy body, able to move like everyone else. For someone who in her real life couldn't easily do such normal things, that feeling was anything but small. As for Sind, her path forward was just as hazy as her first time being brought to this world. Back then, she had no friends beside her, no familiar group, no one to cling to. The server admin simply tossed her into a quest and left her to her own devices. In that moment, everything Sind had tried to build in her real world felt like it was stolen clean away. For her, friends were always allies, and comrades were strength itself. She had learned that, as long as she became someone everyone needed, she wouldn't fall into loneliness again. So, Sind tried her hardest. She believed she had to change the world she lived in with her own hands, and after so much effort, she finally got what she wanted. Yet when she was dragged into this crappy world, she was almost completely stripped of all her advantages. That's why, in that moment of being pushed to the edge, Sin gathered all her courage to beg Josu for help. It might sound a bit dependent, but for Sin at that time, as long as she had someone to lean on, she could still keep fighting. Kusue, on the other side, had also reached her limit. Her limbs felt like lead, sensation almost gone. Luckily, she was still heading in the right direction, just a tiny bit further, but then her body hit its absolute limit and she collapsed. Kuze wasn't about to give up, and certainly not about to kick the bucket in a place this unglamorous. But what's a girl to do when her HP is basically zero? Her consciousness was basically hitting the log-out button. Meanwhile, Sind had just stumbled upon something that completely maxed out his suffering from success meter. And Joshua? He noticed his squad mates' movement markers hadn't budged an inch in ages. Not good. For Joshua and Sind, it was slightly better, since they at least had some half-decent starter gear. 10 kilometers left, only 6 hours on the clock, and the final boss isn't even here yet. Host was so utterly fried, he couldn't even manage a proper high step anymore. The mission rules were clear, only one survivor needed. Talk about high-stakes casual gaming. But here's the kicker. If they all froze to death right now, there might not even be a respawn option. Oof! Past missions were basically die, respawn, repeat, but this one decided to crank up the difficulty to hardcore mode. This wasn't your usual lose HP, wait 40 seconds for revive kind of death. This cold was hitting both body and mind hard. To avoid becoming human ice sculptures, the smart play would be to dig a temporary shelter and wait for the blizzard to chill out. But rest? What's rest? They had zero time to spare. Pushing forward was the only, albeit insane, option. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, the server admin, clearly thinking they were still too comfortable, decided to send in a local snow monster to say hello. Our boy quickly pulled out his weapon, ready to exchange pleasantries with this frosty bully. He knew fighting right now was basically a ticket to the afterlife, but what else was there to do besides, well, fight? Joshua pulled out a spare claw, using it as a shield to miraculously block a critical hit. Clutch! Then, he whipped out his chef's eye skill, immediately scanning for the monster's weak point. Because of course, our hero has a chef skill. Finally, after what felt like 77-49 epic rounds of trading blows, Josu managed to persuade the snow monster to take a permanent nap. Good thing it was apparently super hungry, so it wasn't exactly operating at peak monster power. But then, plot twist, Josu spotted a whole pack of snow monster babies chilling behind the now napping mama, just when you thought it was over. Even snow monsters are living creatures, apparently. They have babies, they need to survive, yada yada. And if Mama Monster bit the dust mid-blizzard, those little ones would probably freeze or starve. But our hero Juzia instantly swatted away those thoughts. This is a virtual world, after all, and honestly, not his problem. With only 5 hours left, the blizzard showing zero signs of quitting, teammates pretty much frozen in place, our boy Souza literally had to drag his own butt forward. In his head, though, he could almost hear everyone else's thoughts screaming. Kuze, bless her heart, had once declared that as long as she was healthy, she wanted to help everyone. Classic protagonist sidekick energy. Sino, meanwhile, just wanted to be saved from the corner he was backed into, while our boy Josu had a very clear principle. He wasn't one of those all lives are equal types. Nope, for Josu, every life had to be weighed on a fair, albeit harsh, scale. Anyone more valuable than him? Anyone stronger than him? Absolutely no way was he letting them die. He's got priorities. The kicker? This mission wasn't just about in-game permadeath. If they failed, everyone was taking the ultimate dirt nap in the real world too. Jose just couldn't stomach the idea of his whole squad being forced into this nightmare, thrown into such a brutal place, only to die without ever knowing why they were dragged into this messed-up game. Just as he was having these profound thoughts, he stepped right into a deep snow-covered pit, and what waited for him down there was basically a one-way ticket to game over. At the exact same moment, the magical girls from Duka's childhood memories suddenly came flooding back. Ah, the good old days. In their story, the world was being plunged into despair by none other than Demon Lord Luki and his entire villainous squad. This guy's evil plan? To drain all the dreams from every single child and smother the world in eternal darkness. So subtle. But the legendary Magia faction, they were absolutely not letting go. Not a chance. Even with their backs against the wall, they still clung to the belief that the light of hope would never truly vanish, and that a blazing red flame could scorch away all the darkness. And thanks to that never-say-die spirit, the goddess of victory literally beamed at them, bestowing a sudden surge of power that catapulted the magical girls to a whole new tier. She unleashed one ultimate fire magic attack, and just like that, effortlessly wiped the floor with the Demon King in a blink. Talk about OP. Back in the day, little Duka was absolutely obsessed with the Magi sisters, her ultimate role models. She even thought that with enough love, friendship, courage, and hope, she could totally become a super cool magical girl and save the world herself. Bless her innocent heart. But then, real life hit, and she quickly realized someone like her just wasn't cut out for that magical girl life. Duka, ever the realist, always knew her place and instinctively sided with the strongest faction to protect her own skin. Survival of the savviest, right? Even if she was secretly trash-talking them 5 minutes ago, the moment a common enemy appeared, she'd immediately cozy up to whoever offered the best advantage. Practical, not heroic. And it wasn't just her. Everyone around her did the exact same thing, which, in a weird way, made Duka feel even stranger. And now, facing utter despair, somewhere deep down, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Meanwhile, our boy Suzu finally blinked back into consciousness. This seemingly fatal drop into the abyss, ironically, turned into a lifesaver. Because he died and conveniently landed deep inside the mountain, his body was finally safe from the blizzards trying to freeze him solid, which meant his revival conditions were still perfectly met. The moment Jiosu revived, he instantly sized up his new predicament. This place looked exactly like some secret, unmarked dungeon. He had no idea how deep this mountain cave went, but pushing into unexplored territory meant a chance to finally uncover more of the map. With zero other options, he knew if there was even a glimmer of a path, he had to take it. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Kusue was still completely unconscious. Repeated calls echoed in her mind, desperately begging her body to wake up and get out of this horrible place. Just then, Sino jolted awake from her sudden, unexpected blackout. She spotted Kusue's status notification and immediately raged, cursing the server owner for being utterly inhumane. But raging or not, she still had to move. Sino just realized that if she'd bothered to get her bearings from the start, things might have been a whole lot easier. Even though the wind had calmed down a bit, trekking through this frozen hell was still just as brutal. And just then, she spotted what looked like a village up ahead. If she could just reach it, she could hopefully borrow a horse-drawn carriage, a sled, or anything to speed up her desperate escape. Thinking of Kusue still waiting for revival, Sino pushed herself to keep moving forward. Because with just a little more effort, the whole party still had a chance. But of course, this game never lets anyone off the hook for long. The place Sino was so desperately heading towards wasn't a village at all, but a massive, treacherous frozen lake. And naturally, the moment she stepped onto it, the ice immediately cracked and splintered. Hos, who had just checked on her progress, saw Sino's life signal vanish from the map, and he was just starting to put a lot of hope in her too. Dosuza's path ahead was completely sealed off. He was forced to turn and find another way, muttering curses as the situation grew more and more ridiculously hopeless. Until he hit a literal dead end, Dosuza truly had to admit this mission was just straight up impossible. And then, he found something that sounded incredibly dumb but was more precious than gold in this absolute chaos. A giant frickin' earthworm. Apparently, earthworms in this world also survived by eating dirt, just like back home. And even better, it was digging straight towards the unexplored, hidden areas of the map. With almost zero danger, this oversized worm instantly became his super-tier, last-ditch escape vehicle. The only problem? It was agonizingly slow. Dosuza poked its tail, and thankfully, it sped up a little. But before he could even celebrate, another one appeared, cutting directly into the path the first one had cleared. Dosuza, assuming it was just another harmless earthworm, went to shoo it away, only to find it was a sharp-toothed, ravenous grub. Meanwhile, Sino was still painstakingly dragging herself forward, step by agonizing step. When she saw the notification pop up, saying she was the only one left in the game, any remaining glimmer of hope seemed to instantly die out. Sino started to wonder how she could possibly push through this alone. The chilling cold wasn't just freezing her body, it was paralyzing her very will. And the scariest part? In that very moment, she actually felt a strange sense of relief. Sino realized that deep down, all she wanted was a perfectly valid reason to finally give up. She was still terrified of dying, but if everyone else was already gone, if she truly couldn't do anything alone, then she could finally stop trying without feeling any guilt. The more she thought about it, the more Sino let go, granting herself permission to rest, because trying in a situation this hopeless just sounded utterly exhausting. And just as Sino was about to completely give up, the image of a young female mage flashed before her eyes. At first, she thought it was just a dream, a final hallucination, but this vision wasn't there to comfort or console her. It was as if they were forcing her to confront a single question. What had she truly seen from the Crimson Magic all these years? Sino remembered it perfectly. She knew the first generation of Crimson Magic had fallen to the dark strike of Demon King Lucife. She also knew the second generation had been utterly defeated by Uzubaz and his devastating energy blasts. Even the third generation had fallen, brought low by Gogen's petrifying gaze. Sino had watched every single one of those failures. She remembered them, knew them by heart, and didn't need anyone to remind her. What they wanted her to remember was that after every time they were knocked down, they always got back up for the love and hope of children all around the world. Our magic girls aren't the type to never lose, but the type who fall down and still gotta crawl back up. And that's exactly what woke Duka up. She squeezed out every last drop of magic to cast a warming fire spell. After that, she followed the call of her idol Tsubasa, with her fellow magic girls cheering her on from behind. Just as her body was sending out a distress signal, a stranger riding a white tiger suddenly appeared before Du. This mysterious person reminded her that sleeping in the snow like that was a guaranteed death sentence, then asked if she was a player and offered her a ride. When they found out where Du needed to go, the person realized that at a normal pace, they wouldn't make it in time. But instead of giving up, she immediately sped up, told Du to hold on tight, and summon the power of the wind spirits. Under the name of the mage Fatina, she used the wind to push their entire journey forward much faster. Du was startled and asked if Fatina was a player like her, but Fatina denied it, saying she was just a normal mage of this world. For now, the most important thing was still the mission. Fatina continued to enlist the wind's help, blessing the brave hero, who was racing against time. Thanks to this perfectly timed appearance, Duca finally helped push the mission across the finish line, bringing all members back intact. When she woke up in the server master's space, Josa hadn't even fully recovered her senses. Du, however, immediately realized her chance to take credit and deflect blame had arrived. She was about to hog all the glory when the server master suddenly appeared from behind, giving her a fright. The reward after this mission was still a single question. She really wanted to ask who Fatina was, but she only had one question token, so she couldn't waste it. In the end, Du decided to ask the master if this world was just virtual reality after all. The answer instantly flipped everything on its head. He began to explain the concept of parallel worlds. Every choice could give birth to a different possibility. Someone at a crossroads might turn right in this world, but turn left in another branch. If that choice led to an accident and death, then a world would exist where that person was no longer alive. If the choice was 3 years ago, there would be a world that had lost that person 3 years ago. If the choice lay in her parents' actions 20 years ago, there would be a world where her parents died 20 years ago, meaning she was never born. The further back in time the branching occurred, the more alien the parallel world became compared to the reality they knew. From that, Doza understood that, if counted from the birth of the universe to the present, the number of parallel worlds was almost infinite. The server master confirmed they used a special method to observe and travel to worlds that met certain conditions. That condition was that the world's wavelength had to be similar. To put it plainly, the place where Doza and his group were thrown was not a virtual playground, nor a game map set up for a quest. It was another Earth that had branched off 4.6 billion years ago, where a form of intelligent life, almost identical to humans, had arisen and experienced a similar history to humanity. The planet's name, biological organization, terrain, and many other things might not be exactly like Earth, but that place was absolutely not virtual space. It was a real planet, existing in the same position as Earth in a parallel world. If there was anything virtual in this whole story, it was the group of players who were summoned there. That statement hit him like a truck. His worldview suddenly came crashing down like a badly built Jenga tower. The truth was, he had genuinely laid hands on real people. At first, Doza was almost unable to react. He once hated humans so much that he thought it wouldn't matter if they all disappeared. He once weighed the lives of others, thinking whoever was less important could face whatever fate, as long as it didn't drag down those who mattered more. Yet, knowing his hands were stained with real blood, his heart started pounding uncontrollably. The feeling was like being thrown onto a roller coaster, or rather, being pushed straight out of a plane without any preparation. After that, life on Earth continued, but everything was clearly very different. At school, Kusue seemed much better than before. The mere fact that she no longer had to stand by and watch others exercise was a huge step forward. Sino also felt his body was lighter, and his stamina was a little better. Perhaps the level-ups in that other world had an inverse effect on their real lives. However, when Joshua was mentioned, the atmosphere suddenly became terrifyingly quiet. Both of them had heard Duca vividly recount that barbaric revenge plan, and they truly didn't know how to face it. On the court, Juza was going through the motions like usual, playing alongside his teammates and getting nagged to pass the ball properly, but anyone watching could tell he was completely trapped in his own head. That's because our guy was currently choking down a brutal reality check. Out of the entire squad, he was the only one who had actually crossed the line and taken a human life. The more he overthought it, the deeper he spiraled into a toxic mental loop. And right on cue, the server admin slid into his DMs with a ruthless reality check. So how does it actually feel to erase a human life? Juza instantly smashed that delete button and bolted straight back home. He started spiraling, wondering if his entire blood-stained path was scripted from the start, but he couldn't just throw all the blame on the system. Sure, he genuinely believed it was just a video game world, but at the end of the day, he was still the one who pulled the trigger. Right in the middle of his existential crisis, a girl suddenly popped up out of nowhere just to remind him to check his emails. He immediately suspected this was the server admin in disguise, except this time, the dude dropped the creepy NPC act and spoke like a normal human being. Just like that, Juza was dragged right back to reality. In his eyes, those scumbags he wiped out in the other world had it coming 100%. They were literally planning to slaughter innocent believers as a warning and drag the players into a lethal trap, so to him, that was pure evil. But if he had known the terrifying truth about that world from the start, Juza never would have taken a life. He had to own up to it. Taking a life was an unforgivable mistake. Hearing that, the server admin instantly pivoted and shifted the focus straight to the next player. Just like before, Juza got slapped with another mandatory quest to go recruit a system-targeted player. It instantly brought back repressed memories of being forced to corner a guy in a public restroom. But quest is quest, so he sucked it up and went along with it. The navigation set his destination to a local diner, where the admin pointed out a guy chilling at the back table. Turns out this shady figure was a local drug dealer. The real plot twist? In about 20 seconds flat, a new player was going to walk through that door and put him 6 feet under. Talk about zero prep time. Before Juza could even process the hit job, the server admin dropped the target's dossier right in front of him. The hitman was Toji Keta, a 19-year-old who dragged his own 14-year-old little brother Suji into this suicide mission. Hearing Suji's age gave Juza a sharp reality check. The kid was literally the exact same age as him. Before he could overthink it, the two hooded brothers burst into the diner, ready for violence. Quick on his feet, Juza pulled off a smooth leg sweep to trip one of them up, before attempting to talk them down, explaining that everyone here was just getting played by the system. But these guys weren't in the mood for a talk no jutsu, forcing him to fight fire with fire. While throwing hands, Juza casually snatched off Kita's hood. He warned them that their target had already bolted, and the cops were rolling in, so their best play was to get out of dodge immediately. But Kita was stubborn as a mule, obsessed with finishing the hit no matter what. In his twisted eyes, the guy was just a dirty drug dealer whose life was totally worthless. But Juza stood his ground. He didn't care who the target was. He wasn't going to let a murder slide right in front of his face. Naturally, all the chaos in the diner dragged the local mob boss straight into the fray. Suspecting Juza was a hitman hired by a rival syndicate, the mob boss pulled out a gun to flex on him. Right at that exact second, the server admin dropped a shiny new cheat item, the Creature Mage class gauntlet. Without missing a beat, Juza slapped on the legendary gear and delivered an absolute beatdown to the arrogant boss. Right as the beatdown wrapped up, police sirens started echoing in the distance. Juza used the chaos to tell Kita to grab his little brother and scram. The mob boss tried to pull a cheap sneak attack with his gun, but Keta actually stepped up and blocked him. Juza thought the side quest was officially wrapped up. He handled the objective, but the server admin held him back just to drop another philosophical question. You just saved a life today, so how do you feel looking back at the time you took one? Juza didn't give some long-winded tragic sob story. He admitted he still didn't fully get it, but at the very least, he finally knew what path he had to walk. If the Kita brothers got locked up, the success rate for the upcoming main quest would tank hard. After all, it was only thanks to Juza's clutch plays that the squad even survived the last mission. Deep down, Juza still held on to a cold reality. Life itself wasn't inherently sacred. As far as he was concerned, fools dumb enough to let themselves be manipulated. If Kita wasn't a player, our cosmic narrator here probably wouldn't even give him a second thought. Meanwhile, Sin was just vibing with her friends, gossiping away. But when the recent murderer became the topic, her reaction was unusually, almost disturbingly, chill. On the flip side, over at Quay's place, the local news was buzzing about some dude with a gun getting cuffed near the station. Her mom thought it was super strange, since her daughter wasn't freaking out like she normally would. Back in the day, a whisper of a burglar in the neighborhood was enough to send Quay into a full-on sobbing panic attack. Yet now, hearing about firearms in danger, she was totally unbothered. As for Dua, she was still doing her usual livestream hustle. But deep down, something in her had clearly shifted, and every single one of those changes revolved around Juza. Our boy was getting grilled by the server master, questioned about his casual habit of judging people's worth. Basically like those anonymous online accounts scoring lives from their high horse. Who exactly did he think he was to pull that kind of move? Juza, ever the direct type, didn't shy away. He admitted he was nothing special, just an ordinary kid, maybe even a slightly annoying middle schooler. He totally knew his thought process was flawed, but understanding it intellectually and feeling it in your gut were two entirely different ballgames. He still couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't really wrong, sensing some twisted personal brand of justice pushing him to keep going. Now for a quick dive into Kita's past. His family was living in a straight-up slum. His mom had to deal with alcohol and the nightlife just to put food on the table. The two brothers tried to tell their mom to take it easy, but the mountain of family debt left her with zero options. And just like clockwork, some low-tier debt collector showed up. His attitude? Beyond awful. He was rude as heck and treated human lives like literal trash. Kita desperately wanted to flex on this guy and kick him out, but his younger brother held him back. Then that same dude dragged the kids into a big job, promising that if they nailed it, all their debt would vanish in a month, and their mom could finally chill out. The task itself, when explained, was terrifyingly simple. Eliminate a traitor. And just like that, that was the entire reason Keita and his brother found themselves at the local junk shop. From that exact moment, Keita started accumulating some seriously complicated debt to Jose. After all that drama, summer break was around the corner, so the school squad decided on a camping trip. Sind, naturally, was still rocking it and stealing the spotlight as usual. All she had to do was show up looking even slightly put together, and the whole place would instantly start buzzing. And yet, she always prioritized anything related to Quay, which completely baffled some onlookers since they never seemed close before. One was basically school royalty, chilling at the top, while the other was an introverted, low-key type. By any normal metric, they were literally heaven and earth. But our boy Juza saw the two of them through a completely different lens. Even with their vastly different personalities and classroom statuses, both Sind and Quay carried a certain unique power deep down. A power that ultimately got them chosen as players for this wild ride. On the other hand, Dua was practically vibrating with excitement. Just imagining telling the story of the whole squad getting yeeted into another world, that was definitely going to break the internet. Especially since, at this very moment, only 4 people knew that particular kind of existential dread, and another was about to join their exclusive club. Then that oh-so-familiar sensation started to creep in. The atmosphere around them shifted, and the entire group almost instantly realized it was time to get yeeted to the other side. And sure enough, Keita was already there, barely crawling his way out of a monster horde, only to be instantly bombarded by a gazillion judgmental stares. Totally understandable, honestly. From his head to his literal toes, not a single accessory screamed respectable hero. His entire vibe just screamed danger in neon letters, making the ladies immediately wary. Just then, the server master popped up, ready to drop the next quest. As per usual, it was a string of utterly baffling cryptic jargon. The entire squad had to offer J-Phone Bow at Vicademania. Wasn't just the quest, the system itself had a new update this time. Respawn time got bumped up to a whole 50 seconds, and a quick travel function was added, letting players instantly yeet themselves to any location they'd already visited. Sounds like a total flex, right? But the catch was, the usage conditions were anything but cozy. And finally, for Keita's class assignment, he was proudly bestowed the legendary title of Spear Warrior. Mission accomplished, and the whole squad immediately fast-traveled out of there, instead of, actually explaining anything to Keita. Since one use came with a brutal 24-hour cooldown, Keita, understandably, was not a fan of their nonchalant attitude. Bro just got yanked into a totally foreign dimension and desperately needed someone to give him a proper explanation. Thank you very much. Juza, being Juza, just shrugged it off, clearly prioritizing precious travel time over one person's temporary inconvenience. Sin had to jump in, block Juza, and give Keita the quick and dirty summary herself. Alright, listen up, she probably said. This is an isekai, we're the designated heroes, and if we don't complete the mission, we're toast. Surprisingly, Keita actually processed all of that information pretty quickly. Our boy, who proudly dropped out after 9th grade, found this particular explanation surprisingly easy to grasp. Even with that, Keita still needed a personal humbling to actually get him on board. So he just casually dragged Joshua into a one-on-one showdown. Sino, watching from the sidelines, could only offer endless apologies because Keita apparently wouldn't use teleportation without this motivation. Keita wanted Joshua to hit him with his voice manipulation skills. Joshua, obliging the request, made Keita kneel down right as the match started. However, our unbothered lead suddenly woke up right before the attack landed, countering with a casual flying kick. The fight was technically over, but Keita still landed an extra kick on Joshua, just for good measure. After that, the whole crew used teleportation and casually warped to Toilo. Once there, they decided to track down Kahabe. Keita had no clue who she was, so Sindo had to give him the rundown. She was an old acquaintance of the group, who even got roped into one of their bandit gang confrontations back in the day. As if on cue, the moment they mentioned Kahabe, she appeared right in front of them. For our heroes, it felt like just yesterday, but in this world, a full 15 years had actually flown by. Kahabe now had a child, and proudly showed off her super-duper adorable little one. By evening, Joshua still couldn't quite wrap his head around this new, demure, and gentle version of Kahabe. Comparing her to the knight who used to demand to chop raw meat all day was genuinely hard to believe. When asked about Joni Bao, Kahabe said she had no idea what a bao was, but Joni was a famous island for exporting handcrafted weapons. She also casually mentioned that she'd left the knightly order. She'd lost her right arm on the battlefield, a true veteran move. The story began 15 years ago, when the Kingdom of Dok decided it was time to get serious about unifying the continent. Tolo and other nations formed an alliance to resist, sparking a truly horrific war. Kahabe had been to the front lines 4 times, but after giving birth and raising a child, she simply couldn't go back to her old self. Kahabe called it becoming weaker, but Joshua wasn't buying it. For him, tearing things down was always infinitely easier than building them up. Killing was countless times easier than giving birth and raising a life. If Kahabe could go through war, then still give birth, raise a child, and continue living, what she possessed wasn't weakness at all. She had simply changed. It was at that moment Joshua truly realized the massive gap between himself and her. He used to mirror Kahabe in his thirst for power. But this woman's current state was a realm a mere child like him couldn't even dream of touching. Hearing about childbirth, Kita immediately flexed, bragging that he'd personally delivered his own younger brother when he was just 5 years old. Apparently, his mom went into unexpected labor, and there was absolutely no one else home. His dad was gone, leaving his mom to shoulder everything, to the point where debt collectors even roped our young Keta into a killing job. Keta explained that if Josua hadn't shown up back then to help him escape, things would have probably gone in a direction no one could have saved. The result? The debt collectors got arrested and the debt got magically cleared. That little solo brawl was just Keta returning the favor for Josua punching his little brother, but he was still genuinely thankful for Josua's help last week. That night Josua lay wide awake, his mind just racing. Because both Kahabe and Keta had their own unique kind of power and their own way with words. Our boy, who yearned to become stronger than anyone else, felt like he was being left behind. Suddenly, Kahabe opened the door and called Josua out to catch the sunrise. She took him to what she considered the most beautiful spot in her world. For Kahabe, 15 years was such a long stretch of life that she genuinely thought she'd never see him again. Josua suddenly realized he'd said goodbye pretty casually back then, just assuming he'd see her again soon. He apologized for dragging Kahabe into all that trouble, especially with the whole Bim Bird mess. If he hadn't gotten him involved, maybe none of that would have ever happened. But Kahabe, ever the optimist, actually saw that whole crazy trip as her wild youth. She'd rarely had such a long adventure in her entire life. Those very memories were what kept her going through the hellish days on the battlefield. So instead of holding a grudge, Kahabe actually thanked Josua. That answer didn't exactly make Josua feel better right away. He still wondered if he actually helped her, or if he was just some random guy passing through, leaving others to deal with the fallout. Then Kabul reminded him that she and Josua used to get along pretty well. She used to like Josua, so she asked if she could borrow the morning light for a kiss and a belated confession. Our boy Josua couldn't really blame her, nor could he change a thing. The peanut gallery of waifus who were eagerly watching from behind turned away disappointed, expecting some juicy drama, only to get a super sad, heartbreaking confession instead. Right at that moment, Kuei reunited with Sat, a child she had once helped when she saved the village from the Chon monster. Sa came to express his deepest gratitude, bowing his head in thanks for giving him a chance to live. Kusue's emotions at this moment were truly beyond words. Perhaps all the encounters here were destined to hold some profound meaning. Leaving Cotonello, the whole group headed to Joni Island to follow the quest clues. The guide seemed honored to see the heroes arrive on the island, thinking they were there because of the call for mercenaries. As Joni appeared before them, the group was welcomed by two girls named Jana and Ao. At first, the two were super excited, thinking mercenaries had arrived to help, but the moment they heard the group wasn't mercenaries, their attitudes flipped instantly. Even so, the party still had to decipher the quest. Jose asked what Vaikidamania was and was told it was the Harvest Festival. But when they asked about the Jone Bao, the two girls weren't willing to explain it for free. Just then, Kita was about to drop some cheesy pickup lines, seeing the two girls were cute, but he was immediately shut up because the more he talked, the more tangled things would get. So, Kita proposed they just sign up as mercenaries anyway to get some better perks. Sure enough, the two priestesses happily led everyone to see the Jone Bao. Turns out the quest objective was a creature that looked like a beetle, and the mission was simply to offer that Bafo creature during the Vai Kedamania Harvest Festival. But of course, there was no way it would be that easy. The two priestesses explained that the festival couldn't be held this year. The reason lay with Kumamo Castle. It was a fortress built by their ancestors 400 years ago, but 5 years prior, a horde of monsters had swarmed in and taken it over. They were orcs, and their leader was the Orc Queen. The moment the orcs set foot on the island, war broke out, but Joan's forces were utterly annihilated. Before being completely wiped out, the islanders surrendered. The problem was, the orcs didn't even consider themselves to be fighting a war. To them, everything that happened was simply a meal. And that's not all. The orcs didn't just eat regular food, they ate people too. So, even though Joni had surrendered, they still had to offer Joni bows as substitute food to avoid being eaten alive. From then on, the villagers were turned into slaves, forced to raise bafos for the orcs. All the bafos belonged to the orcs, so humans couldn't use them for their own harvest festival anymore. Worse still, the number of orcs was steadily growing. If things kept going like this, there wouldn't be enough bafos to feed them all. Only now did Josua finally understand why Jone was desperately recruiting mercenaries. The villagers didn't want to just sit around waiting to be eaten, so they decided to make a move first. On the 11th, when the Vaikedamania festival was to be held, and the Orc Queen came to collect the bafos, they wanted to use that moment to wipe out the Orc horde. Keita, hearing all this, thought it sounded pretty simple. Just defeat the enemies and it's over. However, the power gap between the two sides was too massive. If simply shouting charge was enough to win, they wouldn't have needed to recruit anyone. To turn the tide, they needed to find a way to bridge that gap, while also securing the other conditions of the quest. Husue then asked about the role of the Vaiketum priestesses in the festival. The two girls explained that they were the ones who performed the ritual dances and carried out the harvest festival rites, and there was no one else who could replace them. This meant that the safety of Jana and Ao also became an implicit condition of the quest. The quest had now transformed into a massive pile of tasks. Confront the orcs, protect the priestesses, solve the power imbalance, keep the festival running, and still offer the Bafos at the right time. On the other side, the intel that Joni was gathering mercenaries had already fallen into the enemy's hands. After getting a full grasp of the situation on Joan, the hero party decided to join the mercenary squad to prepare for the battle against the orc horde. Their commander was Kan Tu, a veteran who had faced orcs many times, so the moment he heard the heroes agreed to help, he immediately deemed it a highly reliable turn of events. Keita, still very much the new guy, was totally hyping up Kan Tu's leadership skills. Meanwhile, Josua wasted zero time getting into serious training, knowing this wasn't a game for messing around. Kan Tu then broke down the scariest thing about these creatures. Their real weapons weren't some fancy swords or axes, but those ridiculously long arms and massive fists. Get hit by just one of those, and you're instantly deleted from existence. So the golden rule for fighting them was to hit hard and immediately get out of range. Trying to duke it out up close and personal with these things was basically a voluntary self-to-delete. The actual problem was our boy Josua was still stuck with his trusty chef's knife set, and those blades were way too short to land a fatal blow on an oak. Kentu didn't sugarcoat it, flat out saying with those knives, Josua would be the first to get wiped. Keita and Sin were the only ones in the group even remotely qualified to get into close combat, and Kue and Zuka. Forget about them being anywhere near the front lines. Our unbothered lead, Josua, absolutely could not handle being seen as a dead weight, so he immediately dipped to go grind levels, determined to come back with a profession so OP it would make everyone else look like F-rank nobodies. But grinding levels on Joni Island? Yeah, that wasn't going to be as chill as he hoped. Apart from the ox creatures chilling in the castle, this place was practically a monster-free zone. Because the islanders' ancestors had pretty much already cleared out all the local wildlife ages ago and totally flexed about it. So Josua, ever the resourceful one, decided to just gain experience the professional way. If mages level up by spamming spells and chefs level up by cooking up a storm, then he could totally just level up doing stuff related to his current profession. So he casually asked Jana and Ao if he could just work in the fields. At first, the two priestesses were pretty shocked, because who expects a hero from another world to actually diligently work the fields like a proper country boy? But our accidentally overpowered country boy Josua, he worked those fields like a pro. The simple reason was that back home, he used to help out on his grandparents' farm, so all this manual labor was old hat for him. Suddenly, an unexpected tremor hit, and a whole bunch of fruit just plopped right off the trees. Jan and Adu explained that the soil here was getting weaker, so even a tiny tremor would make the fruit drop before it could even soak up enough nutrients. They used to use Bafo fertilizer for the fields, but now pretty much all of it had to be handed over to the Aki creatures, which meant the entire island's agriculture was taking a nosedive. It was then that Josua realized feeding these Ak wasn't just an immediate survival problem. It was slowly but surely eating away at Joan's entire production system. Turns out this place was a volcanic island, meaning the topsoil was super low on organic goodies. If they lost their main fertilizer, they had to find a replacement. Our farming king then brainstormed using seaweed, seashells, and other bits and bobs from the ocean, mixing them into the soil and letting nature do its thing. While he was busy making fertilizer, Adu totally thought he was checking out Jana, and she instantly blew a fuse. Nobody, she declared, gets to take these two ticking time bombs away from her. But Josua adamantly protested, so the conversation quickly switched gears to the priestess duo's own private drama. These two had to keep their status as priestesses, a sacred role that could only be filled by, well, virgins. Normally by now, they should have had a successor, allowing them to retire, get married, and live that sweet, normal life like other girls their age. But because the Auk monsters had been gobbling up too many people, there weren't any young girls left to even become future priestesses. So Jan and O were basically stuck in this gig for years, now well into their 20s, still unable to live their own normal lives. Hearing all that, Josua suddenly found himself with 100 more reasons why he absolutely had to get stronger. Our cozy lead practically turned the entire field into his personal experience grinding dungeon. He was simultaneously cooking up gourmet meals from scallops, veggies, and beans to rack up chef XP and crushing seashells, mixing leftover Bafo fertilizer with seaweed and all sorts of other marine goodies to create his custom super fertilizer. Since the island had a cozy hot springs, the warm, humid environment was practically begging for microorganisms to thrive, which naturally gave him the perfect excuse to use some biomagic to supercharge the decomposition process. The work was so mind-numbingly repetitive that even Josua, our unbothered farming king, started to get a little bored. So he casually asked if anyone had some good tunes to vibe to. And of course, Jan and O immediately pulled out Jone's traditional folk song, a banger that had been passed down for a casual 800 years. The title sounded super solemn and important, but when the two of them actually sang it, it was pure, unadulterated, chaotic country folk energy. While Josua was neck-deep in his farming grind, everyone else had their own little quests going on. Keita and Sind were sparring, but Keita was still way too green compared to the mercenaries' lightning-fast reflexes, getting absolutely schooled and just wondering how anyone could react that quickly. Kusue was busy distributing food to the soldiers, while Du was still pure embodiment of effortless and didn't want to do anything at all. Spotting Soldier Katsu meticulously drawing a map, Du immediately hit him with the classic, "Are you just slacking off, dude?" Well, obviously not everyone was as commitment-phobic as Du, because understanding the battlefield terrain was like a super crucial part of battle prep. Though he totally admitted that, over half of it was just because he liked doing it. Meanwhile, some classic village drama was starting to brew. Some villagers started getting seriously ticked off. Seeing these mercenaries constantly, they argued they paid these mercenaries to protect them, not drag innocent civilians into a suicide mission against these monsters. Cantu shot back, asking how they expected to face those monsters if they couldn't even handle a little training. But those words only fueled the fear, sparking even stronger backlash from the terrified villagers. Some even declared they'd rather keep paying tribute than fight a reckless battle and get completely wiped out. Sino, however, saw the glaring difference in perspective. The so-called heroes might respawn, but for the islanders, death is permanent. Their fear wasn't something a few inspiring words could just brush away. Just as tensions reached a boiling point, an Oka monster suddenly ambushed them. Keita and Sindo immediately charged headfirst into battle, but in the blink of an eye, the terrifying power gap between humans and Ox became brutally obvious. Both were taken down almost instantly. While waiting for their revive timer to tick down, Sino watched the mercenary squad continue their assault, no longer charging in recklessly, but targeting the monster's blind spots. They hacked at its iron-hard fingers, crippling its ability to punch, then finished it off with a sword thrust into a critical weak point. That precise display made Sindo finally understand the real way to take down these monsters. But if one monster took this much time and effort, how were they going to handle the 14 more still lurking out there? The monsters leaving the castle at such a suspiciously perfect time immediately sparked island-wide whispers of a traitor leaking intel. The entire village turned on each other, and soon, harsh accusations were hurled at the two women, who were, after all, the ones who called in the mercenaries. Some even claimed that before these mercenaries arrived, the island was peaceful in its own way, and now all this division was the fault of those two women. Sino, hearing this, felt his blood boil. A bunch of grown men shifting blame onto two young girls was just a pathetic sight. But the one who truly managed to turn the tide was a man of indigenous origin. He reminded everyone how their ancestors had crossed the seas, seeking freedom and peace, then painstakingly transformed a barren island into this thriving homeland. He declared that paradise wasn't something you waited for, but something you had to build with your own hands. That speech struck a chord, rekindling the islanders' lost pride. The same people who were just trembling in fear began to remember what they truly wanted to protect. Not just their own lives, but their land, their people, their culture, their knowledge, and the fierce pride passed down from their ancestors. Even Cantu, standing on the sidelines, was taken aback. With just a few words, that man had rallied their spirits in a way the entire mercenary squad struggled to achieve. The tide had finally turned. The islanders agreed to fight, while on the other side the monster horde received news of a fallen comrade. They cried out, then erupted in a furious rage, swearing vengeance for their fallen kin. Meanwhile, our boy Josu was still grinding like crazy, laser-focused on leveling up. Finally, the literal server admin popped up, congratulating him on reaching max rank as a biomage before making him spin the wheel for a new class. Since Josu had always been handed the short end of the stick, he desperately hoped the system would finally throw him a decent bone this time. The result? Blacksmith. He was so livid, he legitimately wondered if the server admin was trolling him on purpose. But of course the admin just casually vanished, as always, leaving Josu to stew in his unreleased rage. Luckily, after cooling off and checking his new skills, he realized that being a blacksmith in this scenario wasn't entirely useless. His skills allowed him to craft weapons into armor, and even create gear that other players could use under specific conditions. That's when he remembered that Joni was famous for its handcrafted weapons. Jan and Ao immediately took him to meet their grandfather, a master blacksmith, to learn how to craft monster-slaying weapons. Of course, becoming a true blacksmith wasn't an overnight task, so the old man taught him how to use casting molds. Josu's technique was still raw, but with the molds and his system-assisted skills, he could at least craft something usable for the upcoming battle. After a furious grind in the workshop, Josu completed a bizarre weapon, an axe with a stake attached to the back. Its appearance was certainly odd, leaving everyone unsure whether to praise or roast him, but once they saw it in action, they immediately understood his genius. The axe and stake were specifically designed to counter the monster's tough bodies, aiming for decisive finishing blows rather than useless, shallow cuts. Not only that, he also custom-made weapons for Kusue and Juka, knowing they weren't strong in close-quarters combat. Keta, seeing Josu constantly buried in his work, still couldn't resist teasing him about romance, even confidently declaring he'd compete fairly for Sindo's affection. Josu, however, couldn't be bothered. His priority was making sure everyone had reliable weapons. He barely slept, pouring every waking hour into the workshop. Kusue heard Aodu recounting this, so she came to see for herself. Seeing her concern, Josu simply stated it was all for everyone's survival rate. He elaborated, saying he'd even sacrifice his own life to ensure those more valuable than him survived. That level of absurd humility was so intense that Kenchiu couldn't just keep hiding and listening anymore. He had to point out that it was a dangerous ideology. Josua countered that he didn't judge people by bloodline or origin, but by their current state and future potential. But Kantio wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily, reminding him that a person's present and future are heavily influenced by where they're born. Josua couldn't deny that. He only added that if two people were equally underestimated, those with power would rank lower than commoners in his book. Because bad leadership from the top always causes way more damage. This comment hit Kantio right in the feels. He was once an officer, even a commanding general, but his army lost 7 straight battles, and his homeland ended up completely destroyed. Josua had heard that the battle was unwinnable regardless of who commanded it, and Kantio was still a respected general. But Kantio himself wasn't about to give himself that easy out. He saw himself as a foolish commander who misjudged the time to retreat and got too many soldiers killed. That's exactly why in this current battle he refused to lose ever again. No sooner had he finished than bad news came crashing in. Someone frantically reported that Jones Port was under attack by orcs. And now for a quick, wholesome, absolutely not depressing backstory break with Lair, a guy who laughs like life's a joke, but whose past makes you want to curl up and cry. 4 years ago, he and some comrades were in a small army, always dreaming of joining Kantio's squad. To Lair, Kantio's team was the epitome of cool, a goal he looked up to from afar. Sadly, his skills weren't quite there yet, so he was stuck in the reserve squad. Yet, before he could even reach his dream, his country was obliterated. From that day on, Lair and the other survivors were thrown into a non-stop cycle of fleeing and being hunted. He remembered every single person who died, every name, every day, every single thing that happened along the way. Some fell to the pursuing remnants of the enemy, some died running into bandits, others lost their lives fighting over food. The scariest part? Lair narrated this entire horror show with a grin, like he was telling campfire stories. Josua just stared, utterly baffled. How does someone who watched their homeland get wiped and comrades die for 4 straight years sit here recounting it with such a bright, cheery face? But Lair just smiled because, hey, they were just sharing life's most memorable moments, right? The heavy vibe actually lightened a bit, thanks to that signature, slightly dark, Lair brand humor. Back to the present, and the moment they hit the port, everything went from 0 to absolute chaos real quick. The orcs, clearly impatient for the Kadamia festival, decided to kick off the party early with a full frontal assault, leaving Jones' crew completely blindsided and scrambling. Kita and Sin charged in, only to find out these orcs were built different. Their skin was like tank armor. Regular weapons just bounced off or snapped, barely scratching the surface. One quick counter, and an orc basically vaporized Sindo in the blink of an eye. Keta followed suit, hitting the respawn timer right alongside Sindo, waiting out a 50-second cooldown. Heroes get a respawn, sure, but for the rest of the islanders and mercenaries, that kind of hit meant game over, permanent delete. Just as everyone was panicking, a special arrow suddenly zipped through the air, right into an orc's head. Kintio and the mercs instantly knew that wasn't some basic Joan issue weapon. The sniper? None other than Josua, wielding a custom bow he'd whipped up after leveling his blacksmithing skill. This wasn't just any bow. It was specifically engineered to launch stakes with pinpoint accuracy and massive force, aiming for the orcs' squishy weak spots instead of their impenetrable hides. But our guy still needed precious seconds to aim and reload, meaning if any orc got too close, it was game over. Lair, bless his chaotic heart, got it immediately. He immediately charged out, turning himself into prime orc bait, drawing their attention and buying Josua the crucial space to reload and line up another shot. The first ever Josua Lair tag team, chaotic as it was, worked like a charm. With another perfectly placed shot from Josua, the battle finally started to swing their way. Kantio was beyond thankful to Lair for pulling them back from the brink of absolute disaster, but he knew they needed a new game plan, fast. They might have lost the element of surprise, but they were far from out of the fight. Injured were whisked away to the priestess's cave for healing. The able-bodied returned to their defensive lines, and anyone who could actually wield these new weapons got their marching orders. After that initial skirmish, Josua got back to work, fine-tuning custom weapons for Kusue and Zuka. The moment Zuka laid eyes on her personalized gear, she was hyped, instantly naming it the Orc Destroyer. Of course, being hyped is one thing, actually hitting what you're aiming at. Kusue was worried about her aim, but Lair, being the classic self-sacrificing hero, calmly told her he'd be bait to make her shots easier. Which, sounds noble and all, but also pretty much signed his own death warrant. Everyone was like, dude, seriously? But Lair just shrugged it off, accepting the dangerous job easily because he knew his main skill set was basically run like hell and aggro everything. As two of those ugly creatures closed in, Jos and Lair immediately rushed out, playing the classic human shield role. Quay held her weapon, with Duka standing by to guide her and time her shots. Their tag team effort was a little clunky at first, but the moment that creature lumbered into range, a well-placed stake shot ripped right through it. Immediately after, the system chimed in. Duka, rank 10 achieved. The system admin, being the helpful presence it is, popped up to let her spin for a new class. And what did she land? Hunter.
Yeah, she was pretty stoked, to put it mildly.
For someone who practically lives for cool character designs and edgy aesthetics, becoming a hunter was basically her dream cosplay coming to life. She immediately went full-on roleplay, spouting some super dramatic self-introduction lines, completely oblivious to the fact that Ju was still down there, desperately needing a rescue. After the second attack wave, Jos noticed the creatures weren't being as aggressive, so he decided to go on the offensive himself. He also wanted to test out his brand new weapon, but fighting these things is never as easy as the theory crafting makes it sound. One mistimed swing and Jos got swatted like a fly. Out. As his 50-second respawn timer ticked down, the situation outside just kept getting worse and worse. That giant monster started lobbing boulders at the wall, and with each massive hit, their defenses began to crumble. If that thing got through, the inner area would be pure chaos, guaranteed. Seeing the imminent disaster, Lair, our brave bait, rushed forward to intercept. He tried to stab his sword into the creature, but its hide was so tough his weapon snapped like a twig. In that critical moment, he knew there was no turning back. But unlike his past moments of despair, this time, Lair wasn't just a helpless survivor anymore. The creature brought its attack down, and Lair went down, only for Souza to revive him, just as things were at their absolute worst. He immediately sprang back up, grabbed a stake launcher, and drove a shot straight into the monster's head, finally putting it down for good. After that, he went right back to being bait, drawing in more monsters so the girls could get clean shots and finish the job. The situation in that sector was finally under control, but man, the cost they paid was absolutely devastating. When the whole team rushed to Lair's side, he was already on the ground, his breathing barely there. Seeing the heroes arrive, Lair could only weakly whisper, asking if they had won. Souza, barely holding back her tears, choked out that they'd only won because of him. That's all Lair needed to hear. A proud, faint smile touched his lips. For him, just being able to tell his old teammates on the other side that he fought for Kantio was more than enough. His childhood dream to fight for something bigger finally came true, even if it was just for one impossibly short battle. Lair passed away, his hands still clutched in Juza's. Post, usually so calm and composed, broke down, unable to hold back his tears. Kusue and Duka couldn't hold back their grief either. When the news of Lair's permanent departure reached the others, the entire mercenary company fell into a somber silence. Kantio thanked him the way only a commander could, a silent promise to meet again in the underworld, in the Yellow Springs. The heroes then pressed on, dealing with the one monster that had actually breached their defenses. Once that one was finally taken down, they confirmed there were only 5 of those creatures left. But what really bothered Souza was that the numbers still didn't add up. Someone big was missing, and if a battlefield this loud still didn't have a queen creature making an appearance, she had to be aiming for something else entirely. He quickly rechecked the mission parameters. To finish this, they needed to offer the J-Phone 3 Phos during the Ketamania ritual. For that ritual to even happen, they needed the 3 Phos, a priestess, a proper ritual area, and oh yeah, the entire population of the island not getting wiped out first. And out of all the priority targets to protect, the priestess's cave was now the most dangerously exposed location. Because Janna and Ao were absolutely essential, non-negotiable components of the upcoming harvest ritual. So Jos made the call. First, they'd swing by the blacksmith to grab more stake ammo, then they'd immediately rush to reinforce the priestess's cave. Their ammo was almost completely gone. Without a resupply, those fancy new weapons would just be expensive paperweights. Thankfully, the old blacksmith was still furiously churning out more. Before heading out, they passed by Layer's freshly dug grave. Joe stopped, lowered his head, and said nothing, a silent tribute. Kusue and Duka, seeing his gesture, did the same. Meanwhile, in another sector, Kentia was also starting to get suspicious about the queen creature's true endgame. Meanwhile, over in the west, two orcs just casually popped up. The deputy commander quickly sent someone to report, then teamed up with a few mercenaries to buy some time. Their worst fears had officially come true. The orc queen wasn't heading straight for the shaman's cave. Oh no, she was making a beeline for the boat where the island children were hidden away. Of course, Kanchu and Sindo weren't about to let that happen. Meanwhile, Keta was non-stop grumbling, because even in another world, he still had to fight the bad guy's minions. Even worse, this time it was his duty as the hero, but Doa wasn't seeing things so simply. Because objectively speaking, the islanders weren't entirely in the right. Initially, when they were overwhelmed by orcs and begged for their lives, it was the islanders who offered to pay tribute in exchange for a non-aggression pact. The orcs didn't even need to sign that pact, but they accepted it anyway. Then, when orc numbers grew and the tribute was in danger of becoming insufficient, the islanders chose to wipe out the orcs before they themselves became food. Meaning, from an outside perspective, the Joan people were the ones who broke the pact first. He remembered the evening before the battle, when the blacksmith asked Ju if he planned to stay here and practice his craft. Because with his talent, in just 2 more years, a legendary blacksmith would be born. However, Do Souza refused without a second thought. For him, blacksmithing was just a necessary means for now. Completing his mission was the ultimate goal. At that moment, the Orc Queen looked at Kantiu and Sindo and just felt utterly infuriated. After everything that had happened, she concluded that humans were an ungrateful species. So she attacked her enemies even more ferociously. Our 2 warriors had no choice but to coordinate and hold her back. Kentio used his battlefield experience to draw her out, while Sindo seized the chance to counterattack. The initial diversion plan worked. The Orc Queen was wounded in the back, but she was far from defeated, turning around to retaliate instantly. Kentio quickly pulled out his gigantic axe, betting everything on the next move. Meanwhile, Doa and the rest of the group rushed to the recently attacked village. The scene before them was not pretty at all. The islanders had tried to resist, 1 orc was killed, and another was wounded and fled. But the cost of holding this area was also very heavy. Some mercenaries were seriously wounded from shielding others. Duza wanted to use his healing ability to save him, but his current level wasn't high enough. Looking at the wounded, he saw his own limitations even more clearly. He decided not to split the group, because in this chaotic situation, dividing forces would only increase the risk of being picked off by orcs. They all ran to the blacksmith's place to get more stake bullets. But a problem arose right there. The bullets the old man made weren't something the hero could directly use, as players were inherently limited by basic equipment. Only items Do Souza created with his blacksmithing skill were exempt from that rule. However, if the islanders loaded the weapons and the player only fired, there was still a way to make use of the bullets the old man was making. After hearing this, a man from the village volunteered to stay and help load the bullets. The reason was both funny and heartwarming, because earlier, Kusue had handed out rice balls to them, so in their eyes, she had practically become the goddess of rice balls. Cared for by a kind girl in these chaotic times, they naturally wanted to repay her. Keita suddenly took on a commanding tone, selecting 4 people to help the blacksmith, while the rest would head to the shaman's cave with the hero's party. Seeing everyone obey Tam Tap, he immediately got cocky, turning to Yosia to boast that he looked pretty cool just now, and if Sindo were here, she definitely would have swooned. Doa could only think one thing: this guy is such a buffoon. Back on the Orc Queen side, our team deliberately lured her into a preset trap. At the same time in the shaman's cave, the wounded soldier suddenly sat bolt upright, even with his wounds still fresh. He knew he was worried about the hero's party, but now he could do nothing more than pray. Speaking of Yoshu, his team had now reached the Orc Castle. He was still pondering how to approach this battle when Kita had brazenly led his troops straight in, forcing him to chase after them. Just as everything seemed to be going according to plan, the ground began violently shaking, and it wasn't a normal tremor, but a sign that the island's volcano was about to erupt. Daiphone Island was already sitting on unstable land, and now a natural disaster also joined the fray, pulling the human orc back. The Oracle's Cave, once thought to be the island's ultimate safe sanctuary, suddenly wasn't so safe anymore. The injured, who were just getting patched up inside, now had to move immediately because the cave was on the verge of collapse. John and Adu tried to lead everyone out as volcanic rocks started raining down. But when she finally made it out, only Jan was left. She couldn't accept it, wanting to charge right back in, but the chaotic situation simply wouldn't allow it. Volcanic rocks were raining down relentlessly, forcing everyone to scramble for cover. Keita on the other side also took a direct hit and collapsed. Seeing this, Juga immediately dragged Keita's body to a safer spot for revival. Out in the ocean, Sindo was facing an even worse situation. She was worried about the boat hiding the children on the island, knowing that if volcanic rocks hit it, the kids would have virtually no escape. In just a moment of lost focus, the Brain Queen landed a hit on her with a thrown rock. That blow tore off a part of Sindo's body, killing her instantly before she was thrown into the sea. Normally, dying just meant waiting for a revive, but having her body fall into the water turned into a massive problem. While trapped underwater, Sindo realized something even more terrifying. The ocean water was receding abnormally. This wasn't a normal tide, but the telltale sign of a post-earthquake tsunami. That terrifying sight plunged everyone into fear. A colossal wall of water appeared offshore, triggering the island's most ancient memories. One of the two oracles began singing a folk song passed down from 800 years ago. The song recounted a disaster that had once befallen J-Phone in the distant past. Before, that song seemed like just a tradition, something sung during rituals and special occasions. But as the tsunami truly rose before their eyes, every line of the song suddenly transformed into a chilling, visceral warning. The islanders burst into tears listening to the song, finally understanding that their ancestors hadn't left that legend behind just for kicks. It was a memory of catastrophe, a dire warning that later generations had completely forgotten while chasing after immediate prosperity. In all that chaos, Dosuza and Keita went to search for those still trapped inside the oracle's cave. Luckily, Adu remembered a secret passage inside the cave, which allowed her to lead the injured and villagers to safety. However, the tsunami had already swept away homes and fields in the low-lying areas. The ground cracked open, and lava began to erupt from the very heart of the island. Yet, Dosuza was only thinking about destroying the entire castle to wipe out the brains inside. He asked Adu about Kumamo's structural weaknesses, considering using the lava as a weapon, but after assessing the terrain, that plan was almost entirely unfeasible. The brains were on the upper floors where the erupting rocks couldn't reach, and channeling lava into the castle would require digging trenches in a situation where nobody had time for that. So the most logical solution in Dosuza's mind was still to just collapse Kumamo entirely, burying all the brains inside. It sounded effective, but the moment that sentence left his lips, Adu absolutely erupted in anger. To her, Kumamo wasn't just some abandoned shell you could smash whenever you felt like it. It was the symbol of Joan, a structure their ancestors had built over 400 years, withstanding countless earthquakes and eruptions, yet still standing tall. It embodied the wisdom, techniques, and sheer perseverance of countless generations. Dosuza heard all this and didn't argue back. If he couldn't destroy the castle, he'd just go find a more advantageous place to fight instead. That excessively calm reaction left Adu completely speechless. Keita had to turn to her and explain that Dosuza was like a machine, operating solely for a goal, not understanding what joy there could possibly be in living that way. But Keita's words unintentionally hit on something Adu herself was struggling with. When she asked why, Juga simply replied that if you have a clear goal, all you need to do is act to get closer to it. After hearing that, Adu didn't quite understand what he was saying, but she knew one crucial thing. The people of J-Phone had no time to stop now. Homes were swept away, fields were obliterated, people were dying right before their eyes. If they just stood there crying, everything truly would be over. From that moment, the words of the two oracles began to rally the spirit of the entire island. Though they weren't in the same place, Jan and Adu almost simultaneously conveyed the same powerful message. From ancient times, Joan had a sacred teaching: never build homes in the lowlands. Yet, due to crowded land, a growing population, and the desire for gardens and assets, they gradually forgot their ancestors' warning and built homes right by the sea. They once believed that increasing numbers, more assets, and expanded fields were the very definition of prosperity. But then the tsunami swept away everything, and the oracles admitted that the people of J-Phone had been terribly wrong. And they, in their role as keepers of history, were also at fault for not clearly reminding the islanders of that crucial truth. But that confession wasn't just about despair. If houses were destroyed, you just built stronger ones. If fields were washed away, you just farmed on higher ground. The ancestors of John didn't turn this small, resource-scarce island into paradise by waging war and stealing from others. They used technique, labor, sweat, and perseverance to survive, to advance little by little. Sometimes progressing, sometimes retreating, but never giving up. That's the true spirit of John's people. Those words brought tears to the people's eyes. But this time it wasn't just out of fear. They cried because they remembered what they had forgotten, because they finally understood that John's paradise was never a given. It was built generation by generation, with knowledge passed down. Just as their spirits were lifted, the volcano erupted even more fiercely. A pillar of fire shot straight into the sky, and from within that flame, a colossal dragon emerged. Somewhere beneath the sea, a hazy memory of the Orc Queen gradually resurfaced, so faint that even she wasn't sure if it was the past or just a lingering nightmare. Back then, her tribe was attacked by humans, her village destroyed, many of her kind killed, and she herself was captured alive, caged like merchandise. If she only wanted to survive, she could have fled immediately after escaping the cage. But the queen didn't do that. She returned to the ship because her family was still there. Back in the present, Josu saw the colossal dragon flying in the sky after the eruption, but he didn't let himself get distracted by it just yet. For him, the urgent goal was still to eliminate the remaining orcs and complete the mission. He quickly devised a way to lure them out, because fighting in their den would be a huge topographical disadvantage. Keita didn't fully understand, but if it was Josu's plan, he would always approve. Plan A, let's call it push from the balcony, began with Keita throwing his spear towards the orc horde, successfully attracting their attention. But these guys wouldn't budge from inside the castle, probably wary of the volcanic projectiles. Josu immediately switched to Plan B. The villagers would act as bait, while he would wait for them to get close, and then strike them down with special weapons. As soon as one was lured to the designated position, Josu instantly made his move. The axe could inflict damage, but it was too little since Josu was immediately smashed to bits. Then Keita's sneak attack from behind worked, but another one popped up, catching him off guard. What's worse, it gnawed off Keita's legs before tossing his body away. After that, the orcs immediately turned their backs and went back inside. Josu was surprised to discover a child with hair on its back. Audu explained that, according to their knowledge, most orcs were male and bald. Only the queen was an exception. A queen could give birth to about 100 children in her lifetime, and among them would be a few females. If those females continued to reproduce, the number of orcs could increase extremely rapidly. The reason both knew such details was because they had read through an encyclopedia about orcs, which also revealed that they had their own language. Josu's eyes immediately lit up, because if they could use the orc language to call them, they'd have another way to get their attention. Sounds great, but the problem was Audu only remembered one word, and that word was so sensitive it made her blush. She absolutely refused to shout it in the middle of a battlefield. Off the coast, the orc queen had reached the ship where John's children were hiding. She intended to use the children as food for her journey, and also wanted to find her family. But just as the queen was about to act, the warrior Sanjama appeared. He held a large sword, standing before her with a confident smile. The queen didn't rush in, because just one mistake, and that sword could completely make her pay. Back at the castle, Josu, Keita, and the priestess were ready for a new plan. Keita even took the opportunity to compliment Josu on coming up with such devious methods. That seemingly normal compliment, however, made Josu pause. He realized he very rarely complimented anyone. While Keita could easily see the good in others, and state it plainly, he wondered where the difference lay. Human charm, concern for others, or his own excessively high self-esteem. After much thought, the answer might be all of the above. Josu hated people, mostly because he also hated the very things within himself. He stood among others but always felt alone, but all those deep thoughts got shoved aside, because plot. The battlefield wasn't waiting for anyone's self-reflection, so Audu just started making weird squid monster noises to bait the baddies out. And shocker, it actually worked. The squid monsters were instantly drawn in, which was Souza and Keita's cue to charge in with a literal lava-hauling cart. They used the cart as a battering ram, slamming straight into their target while Keita stabbed with his weapon, letting the lava dish out some unblockable, crispy damage. One squid monster got skewered, while another got doused in lava, receiving some very unpleasant burns. Amidst the chaos, Josu snatched a baby squid monster off its parent's back and immediately bolted. Just as planned, the parent squid monster abandoned everything else to chase after Souza. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Du was getting super impatient with how long it was taking to craft these bullets. Then, a brilliant idea sparked in her mind. She told Kuswa to stay and help everyone, while she ran off to handle some important business. At this point, the blacksmith was pretty much at his limit. His aged body just couldn't handle working for long in that dusty, smoky environment. Meanwhile, Jana noticed everyone's bodies were feeling unusually heavy. A suffocating sensation spread, as if the life force of both the living and the departed was being siphoned away. With the weak magic of a Kidam priestess, she saw the life force being pulled towards the mountain peak where that legendary dragon had appeared. The fight on the ship was also escalating intensely. The squid monster queen was still wary of Sanjama's greatsword, knowing even one hit wouldn't be easy to recover from. But then a huge wave crashed in, making Sanjama lose his balance. The queen immediately seized the opportunity, snatching the sword and putting him in a checkmate situation. Just then, Sindo appeared, surfing in on a plank from beneath the waves. The queen was astonished, having thought Sindo had already drowned. Turns out Sindo had indeed fallen into the water and couldn't just respawn instantly. But once the tide receded, her body could breathe normally again, crisis averted. Sindo realized that the squid monster queen was way too tanky to be taken down in a single blow. So she changed her fighting style, no longer trying for a piercing blow, but instead slicing away layer by layer. Kusue's side wasn't having an easier time either. The blacksmith had developed a fever, gasping for breath, with his consciousness fading. Kusue tried to care for him, at least needing to get him to a more ventilated area. Just then, Duka managed to retrieve a bullet from a squid monster corpse and threw it to her. However, she fumbled the catch, and it nearly tumbled into the lava. She managed to save the bullet, but couldn't do anything to pull Duka out of the encroaching lava flow. Suddenly, the blacksmith jolted awake, urging Kusue to quickly fire the bullet she'd just recovered. Back on the ship's front line, the queen was gradually getting covered in small wounds, while Sindo was flexing her respawn ability to force the monster to accumulate damage. Still, the squid monster queen was just too powerful. After a drawn-out struggle, it killed Sindo yet again. While she waited to respawn, the queen turned to finish off Sanjama. But just when it thought it was all over, it got shot in the back. The shooters were Kusue and the blacksmith. That shot severely wounded the squid monster queen. It collapsed but still didn't think of itself first. In its final memories, the queen remembered the children and family it had fought so hard to protect. Sanjama seized the opportunity, regained his sword, and stabbed the queen in the stomach, sending it toppling off the ship. The enemy was dead, but the boat carrying the children was being pushed by the waves straight towards the lava flow. Sanjama jumped down, trying to push the boat away, completely ignoring the fact that he was about to be melted by the lava himself. At the same time, Josu was still running from the castle with the baby squid monster on his shoulder, the last parent squid monster chasing after him like a maniac. He knew just running normally wouldn't work. To kill it, he'd have to use its own parental feelings as a trap. So Josu threw the baby squid monster towards the lava flow. The parent squid monster immediately lunged after it, catching the baby before it could fall. But the moment it held its child, it realized the baby was no longer moving. And that was Josu's cue. He used a hammer to shove the grieving parent into the lava. But the truth was far more brutal. The baby orc was still alive, waking up with tears streaming down its face as it saw the one holding it. The adult orc, half its body submerged in lava, still managed to lift its arms to shield the baby from the immediate flames. Realizing its child was still alive, it smiled a tragically brief, happy smile. And then the lava consumed them both. Dosuza stood there, admitting to himself that he was weaker than anyone. After escaping the castle, Suzu joined forces with Keta and Ao, and she shared more about the Orc Queen's origins. 5 years ago, the ship carrying the queen drifted ashore at John. There were no bloodstains on the ship, so it was highly likely the sailors had jumped into the sea to escape before being eaten. The ship also bore no markings of any nation, meaning it wasn't allowed to dock publicly anywhere. Doza speculated that the Orc Queen might have been secretly transported to be sold as a weapon, but it was all just speculation with no way to verify. He further asked what else had happened on the island while they were in the castle. Audu said that everyone's life force was being drained, and thanks to a bit of Kedam's magic, she could see the islanders' life force being pulled towards the mountaintop. Jose used his magic gloves to check and realized there truly was an energy flow draining away. So, the dragon wasn't just there for a pretty post-volcano eruption show. It was absorbing the life force of everything on the island. Circling back to Sanjama's past, the man who once spoke so proudly of John, he actually hated the island to his core when he was a child. For him, John was too small. The land was cramped, and relationships between people felt just as stifling. The adults knew nothing of the outside world, nor did they care to know, simply living peacefully and dying in that tiny little loop. Sanjama couldn't stand the feeling that everything around him was small and confined, so he always believed that beyond the sea lay a bigger world, where he could unleash his full strength and test his limits. And so he left the island to become a mercenary. But after 15 years of struggling through countless nations, Sanjama finally realized that the very thing he once despised was what many others out there dreamed of. Some fought for their country's peace, others took up arms for family, friends, or loved ones, just to have a stable life. The cramped island of John from his youth, a place without war, turned out to be a land that countless people shed blood just to hope to reach. When he returned and saw the island overrun by orcs, he fought not purely out of love for it, but to reclaim the peace he himself had once scorned. In the present, Jatsuza and Keta were climbing the mountain to find the source of the draining life force on the island. On their way, they encountered a bald man named Jiachi, but at first he pretended to be a normal islander caught in the disaster. Dusu, not knowing who he was, reflexively advised him to leave the area because the volcano was spewing incredibly dangerous rocks and toxic gas. Just a moment later, both of them came face to face with the colossal dragon on the mountaintop, which was draining the life force of the living and the recently deceased on the island. Keta, upon seeing it, immediately charged forward with his spear to fight, but just one blow was enough to instantly trigger a 50-second countdown debuff on him. Josua, on the other hand, didn't need to save face. He turned and ran, because fighting this dragon now would only be a free ticket to an early grave. While running, he forced himself to think. The dragon was truly powerful, but it wasn't pursuing them. It just stayed stubbornly on the mountaintop, as if even moving consumed too much energy. If its goal was to drain life force to replenish energy, then recklessly breathing fire would only waste what it had just absorbed. If they forced it to attack continuously, perhaps it could be weakened. But that approach wasn't feasible, because before it ran out of strength, the islanders would have already had all their life force sucked dry. So a direct assault was out, prolonging the fight was out. To win, they had to uncover the magic operating behind the scenes. Down below, Jan had just realized the life force was being drained by a form of advanced magic. And unfortunately, the priestess's meager power wasn't enough to contend with a high-level mage, but if they could identify the spell, they might still be able to alter or cut off the absorption flow. Meanwhile, Doa, on his way retreating from the mountain, ran into that bald guy from earlier again. Seeing him still standing there amidst the toxic gas and spewing rocks, he didn't think twice and just hoisted him onto his shoulder to carry him to safety. The bald man suddenly burst out laughing, revealing that he had been found out, as markings on his face became clearer. He introduced himself as the Gagan Bishop, the one who had summoned the dragon. Ho immediately flung him away, then paused to think. It was only then that Bishop realized he had just revealed his own hand, because Josu hadn't actually discovered anything. And so, the two engaged in battle. Ru used his knives and talons for close-quarters combat, but his opponent was a true mage who also knew how to manipulate energy. Bishop used fire magic to kill Souza very quickly. It was almost a guaranteed one-hit KO. He resurrected and took cover behind a rock, trying to observe Bishop's spellcasting rhythm and attack patterns. Keita also resurrected just in time, climbing onto a boulder, and then leaping down, but Bishop dodged and unleashed a single attack, taking them both down at once. For him, heroes who didn't stay dead were just a waste of time. I mean, they just kept respawning. What's a guy supposed to do? So he quickly shifted his target to a much bigger threat to his magic spell. The priestess K-Dam. Audu was quickly found by Bishop. She recognized him as Jiachi from Sector 3, someone once considered the island's genius. Since childhood, he had stood out, later becoming a shockwave engineer, contributing greatly to Jafon's development. He was even the one who proposed building homes in areas previously swallowed by lava, all for the island's development. Thinking back, Audu was fuming, realizing the mastermind behind all this chaos was right there on the island all along. And yet she had gone searching for mercenaries and even declared war, causing so many to sacrifice their lives. Just as Audu was about to be attacked, Josuya lunged forward, blocking the blow with his claws. He pulled her hand and ran, while Audu was just confused why this hero was still bothering to save her. Josu leaned in to whisper his genius battle plan, but Audu, bless her heart, totally thought he was going for a kiss and shyly closed her eyes, ready for her first fantasy smooch. Naturally, Josu wasn't kissing anyone right now. He was actually trying to deliver a crucial counterattack plan. When Bishop appeared before them and prepared to unleash more spells, Josu took out his magic glove, and together with Audu, used a shared catalyst to amplify their magic. That combo move held Bishop for just a split second, long enough for Keita to dart in and stab him right through the hand. Injured and surprised, Bishop had no choice but to retreat, hopping on his tiny dragon and fleeing the scene. Audu flopped onto the ground, her face still bright red from genuinely believing Josu was about to kiss her. Right after, Ket remembered a strange detail. Before the battle, he'd noticed Jiachi standing on a strange marking in the rock. On the other side, Janna's group had also just discovered a hexagram magic circle. When they erased this mark, the siphoned life force significantly weakened. This confirmed Bishop had strategically placed multiple magic circles across the island, siphoning all life force towards the mountain peak. To completely stop the draining spell, they had to find all 6 points of the hexagram formation and erase them. It sounded like a solution, but Joan was a whole island, and these 6 marks could be anywhere. And this, ladies and gentlemen, was where our last soldier's hidden talent for cartography finally got its time to shine. From the location of the erased magic circle, he drew a circle around the mountain, dividing it into 6 equal parts at 60-degree angles. If Bishop wanted to efficiently drain life force, the formations had to be placed in near-symmetrical positions around the mountain peak. Thanks to that map, everyone systematically found the remaining magic circles. With each point erased, the islanders felt a little lighter, and the life force draining into the mountain weakened even further. Finally, the 6th magic circle was also erased. As the hexagram formation completely shattered, the life-draining spell also ceased. The dragon atop the mountain immediately weakened, losing its intimidating aura and retreated back into the volcano's crater. What a glow-down! After surviving countless layers of disaster, from brain-eating horrors, tsunamis, lava flows, to literal dragons, Jafon finally got a moment to breathe. But that joy didn't last long. Witnessing Sanjama's charred corpse, no one could speak, only choke sobs echoed. The very person who claimed to hate this island was the one who stopped the burning ship, saving Jone's future. The irony. Josu bowed, thanking him and all those who died in the battle, because without their sacrifice, this mission would never have reached its end. Finally, the Kadamia ritual was held. On an island that had just been heavily devastated, this festival was no longer a normal harvest celebration, but a declaration that Jone was still alive. It was then that Audu suddenly hugged Josua and declared, "If you were from this world, I'd marry you just to escape this secondary female role. Bold move, girl." Ket naturally didn't miss the chance to tease him, while the other ladies shot Josu a look that screamed, "He's a lost cause now." First it was Kabeo, and now Audu. Seriously, how does Josu manage to win over so many ladies in this world? In another development, Kentio had been adrift for over a day, clinging to a piece of wood in the ocean, having almost reached his limit. Just then, Besop flew by on his dragon, seeing the former general, once so majestic, now miserably floating. He scoffed in disdain. But before he could revel in his smugness, a massive pillar of ice unexpectedly pierced through the dragon, knocking both Besop and his mount onto an ice surface that materialized in the middle of the sea. Kentio was absolutely flabbergasted. That magic was way too powerful for any ordinary person to wield. And who should appear next but a familiar face, the legendary Grand Sorceress Fatina, casually strolling in with her giant owl familiar, which was already busy chowing down on the dragon corpse. Talk about an entrance! As for our hero party, after the quest, the Game Master pretended to give them the usual reward, a question. Keita was the one who got to ask, and instead of using the chance to ask for something strategic, he just asked Besop what he really wanted to do. The server admin replied super concisely that his true goal was to revive a dragon. That short, abrupt answer actually connected to a crucial detail. Earlier, during the reward sequence for a round 3 quest, he'd seen a dragon appear in Tokyo. Back then, he'd been fine with letting the city fall into ruin, but now it was different. Lying there, reflecting on everything, Josua remembered Sanjama, who had fought to the very end to protect the homeland he once despised. Just then, the server admin appeared, announcing that among the people Souza was about to meet, the 6th member of their hero party would be found. No sooner had he finished speaking than his childhood friends unexpectedly called him. When he ran out, Juza met a foreign girl named Glenn, who claimed she came because she was tipped off by a certain white girl. She then tracked down Josa's grandparents' house and introduced herself as an independent filmmaker, traveling the world to shoot footage. But her real reason for showing up was of course linked to the server admin. The crazy part is Glenn had never actually been to the other world, but before she got dragged into this game, she'd already found tons of clues online. 4 users had posted videos, claiming they'd gone to another world and then somehow returned. They came from America, France, Egypt, and Japan, with no discernible connection. Yet the details in their accounts matched up in an eerily specific way. This made Glenn believe it wasn't some mass delusion or elaborate hoax. As soon as Josa heard Japanese person, his mind instantly went to Zuka, because the account name alone totally screamed her energy. Meanwhile, Glenn, completely unfazed, casually mentioned that she liked the French woman's face because, well, she's only into women. But sadly, that particular person was no longer around. The last piece of info she left was that she'd completed round 4, meaning Quest 5 must have been absolutely terrifying. Glenn had tried contacting the other users by leaving comments on their videos, but got crickets. Maybe they didn't notice, maybe they deliberately ignored her, or even worse, they might have failed too. So, instead of just waiting for replies, Glenn suggested the hero party should become the ones sending out the signal. If they made a short film recounting their otherworld experience and posted it online, other players might recognize familiar details and reach out proactively. And just like that, the whole group got to work filming a short movie about their otherworld adventure. The filming location was Yosa's countryside, and the cast, besides our hero party, also included his childhood friends. As soon as his friends saw Sindo and Kusue, they immediately assumed Ju had brought girlfriends home, even joking if he was, gasp, two-timing. Josa immediately denied it, but the more he denied it, the more something else became obvious. Back home, he spoke with a very natural local accent and was easily teased by his friends, a stark contrast to his usually unlikable, distant self when he was with the hero party. Sindo looked at that scene with a visibly surprised expression, realizing that Josua actually had a more chill, less unapproachable version of himself. The filming took place under a super tight budget. Even so, everyone tried to recreate enough elements for other players to recognize the server admin, the rules, quests, heroes, monsters, combat, and the whole complete the mission to go home ordeal. Josua even played the server admin, trying to mechanically explain the rules, followed by scenes of crying for help, realizing he was a hero, and then being forced to fight. All of it was filmed as a summary of the entire group's experience. After filming, Juza apologized to Sindo for making her travel all that way. However, Sindo wasn't annoyed at all. She said she was free and actually found acting pretty fun. But right after that, she pulled Josua close, reminding him that as a professional model, she couldn't possibly work for free. Josua freaked out because he'd previously said this was for the benefit of all heroes. But Sindo didn't ask for money. She just asked him to drop the formal speech and act natural, like he did with his hometown friends when talking to her. Of course, this was a request he absolutely couldn't refuse. Joseph could only grit his teeth and bear it. A few days later, the short film was finished and uploaded to some anonymous Y platform. 10 days passed, and the plan started working, as they received feedback from others who'd experienced something similar. But before they could even dig deeper for more info, the whole group was summoned to the other world once again. This time, Glenn officially became the sixth member of the party. The server admin spun the wheel to choose her class, and the result was an axe warrior. Keita looked at the party roster and grumbled that the group now had way too many warriors. Speaking of Kusue, everyone then noticed she was rocking a brand new, massive set of armor. Turns out, after that Brain Queen battle in Joan, Kusue leveled up and received the Heavy Warrior class. For Juza, at least this new and improved Kusue could finally— Oh great, the system just dropped a double whammy on our heroes for this 6th round quest. Option A, drop the percentage of Rainbow Stair users in the Gondia Kingdom below 3%, and they've got a whole 90 days to do it. Option B, stop Josu Village from getting utterly wiped out within a mere 30 days. On the surface, option B sounded way more straightforward. Just save a village, easy peasy, right? But our boy Juza, wise from past rounds, instantly smelled a rat. He knew the simpler a quest sounded, the more impossible it was to figure out what they actually needed to do. So Juza wanted option A, figuring clear numbers were better. But Keita, hearing save a village and thinking it was an easy dub, just went ahead and picked B. The quest giver, because of course, accepted that choice and poof, vanished, leaving Juza absolutely fuming, practically ready to blow a gasket. Juza ripped into Keita for going rogue, while Sindo, the voice of reason, just sighed and reminded them it was a done deal, so arguing was pointless. But first, to save Josu Village, they kinda needed to know where Josu Village was. So the gang decided to trek back to Cotonil to hit up Kabelu for some intel. But upon arrival, they were smacked with yet another dose of reality. Turns out, a lot of time had passed in this world while they were away. We're talking a full 17 years since they last checked in. The person greeting them wasn't Kabelu, but her grown-up daughter. She looked so much like her mom, the squad did a double take. But her very first words shattered any hope. Kabelu was gone. Her mom used to gush about her adventures with the heroes, calling it the proudest memory of her life. So, meeting the legendary heroes her mom always talked about, she genuinely wanted to help them out. Kabelu's passing hit the squad hard, leaving them in somber silence on their journey to the Josu region. For our heroes, that last meeting was practically yesterday, but for Kabelu, it was a whole lifetime. Joshua, remembering her kiss and thanks back at dawn, felt a pang of self-disgust. The more he thought, the more uneasy he got. Our boy Joshua had essentially used Kabelu, and a grim realization dawned. He'd probably have to keep using people like that just to survive. Kabelu's quiet passing left Juza with a strange, unshakable feeling he couldn't quite name. And as if that wasn't enough, the journey to Josu Village itself was no walk in the park. Their ride could only go so far. Then it was a full-on hike into the forest, because this whole area was basically uncharted territory. Josu Village was so off the grid that its exact location was pretty much a myth. Night was falling fast, and signs of civilization were basically non-existent. Juza was already grumbling about the jungle trek, and Glenn was stressing that if they didn't find a lead soon, they'd be lost in the woods forever. On their trek, they also stumbled upon a pretty cool detail about the world's auto-translation system. Glenn realized she was still speaking English, but the Japanese members in their party heard it perfectly in Japanese. And vice versa, she heard everyone else speaking English too. Basically, this world had a built-in real-time speech translation for all players. As the squad was literally fumbling through the dark, suddenly, a wild goblin appeared. Kata, ever the Glory Hound, immediately volunteered to solo it for all the XP. The others let him go for it, since goblins were usually F-tier fodder. But this time, something felt off. Turns out this goblin wasn't just not weak, it absolutely demolished Kita in seconds. Juza and Sindo scrambled to help, but this thing's speed and strength blew past any goblin they'd ever seen. It took Glenn, in the end, to finally land the clean finishing blow, one-shotting the monster by axing its head off. Our chef boy Joshua used his skill to check its stats and instantly flagged an anomaly. A regular goblin should be bottom tier like F rank, but this dude was flexing a D rank. So either something was buffing the local wildlife, or this whole region had been cursed from the get-go. While the squad was still debating, they spotted someone peeking out from behind a bush. Glenn, ever the action hero, immediately gave chase. Kusue followed right behind, ready to back her up. The tracks led them to an old overgrown cemetery and a tiny secluded house. Turns out the shadowy figure hiding was just a scared little girl. She was so terrified she was curled into a ball, clutching a knife defensively, seeing every one of them as an enemy. Glenn, aware her imposing build might just freak the girl out more, smartly deferred to Kusue to do the talking. Kusue slowly and gently reassured the little girl, explaining they were heroes and meant her no harm. The little girl finally dropped her knife once she realized she wasn't facing another bunch of local bullies, but actual heroes. She then introduced herself as Jizubi, a resident of Josu village. Turns out, she was just running, because she thought our heroes party was some local village goons trying to chase her down. Jizubi then pointed out the village was perched on this massive vertical rock formation. Glenn, our resident scholar, chimed in, explaining it was cooled magma rock exposed on the surface, kinda like the Demon Tower over in Wing.
The only snag?
That thing was so ridiculously high you'd need a private jet or, a winged beast to even think about getting up there. Which, our boy Josua notes, perfectly explains why this village was practically off the grid. Josua was about to ask Jizubi to lead them, but Glenn immediately shut that idea down. She could tell the poor kid was still traumatized and definitely didn't want to go back to the place she just fled from. So the party decided to chill out for a bit and figure out their own way up there later. The next morning, Jizubi showed them her usual watering hole, then casually announced she was off to forage for some edible berries in the woods. Glenn watched her go, thinking how rough it must be for a little kid like her to survive all alone in the wild. Kue, ever the innocent one, overheard and asked if Glenn just didn't like kids. Glenn replied that she does like kids, but adorable little Jizubi wouldn't exactly be in her area of interest until, say, around 18. Only then did Kue suddenly remember that Glenn was in fact exclusively into women. Glenn, completely unbothered, even complimented Kue's flustered look as adorable, making Kue blush so hard she nearly short-circuited. Meanwhile, Doza was busy flexing his biological magic, making the veggies grow at warp speed. He also noticed that the mana consumption around here was way lower than normal, making his supergrow powers even more efficient. Sino also just returned after gathering firewood and hunting, completing their daily chore list. The whole squad was basically having a cozy forest camping trip, but that peaceful vibe was instantly shattered by Kue's panicked scream. Everyone rushed over, only to find a dude standing there with what looked like a giant parasite doing a victory dance on his head. Jizubi, who was still kinda hiding behind everyone, practically crumpled when she recognized the guy. The poor kid just kept screaming, "Dad, Dad!" Yep, turns out the parasite-ridden dude was none other than Jizubi's actual father. Our boy Josua instantly knew this was not going to be a chill situation. If this was just some basic monster, it'd be a simple whack-a-mole situation. But according to the wiki pages and forum posts Josua had scrolled through, this looked like a Hajigan parasite. These bad boys burrow straight into your brain and turn you into their personal puppet. Chopping them up doesn't work, even grinding them into paste is a no-go. The only real solution was to completely incinerate both the host and the parasite, or else it would spread faster than a viral tweet and cause a full-blown pandemic. In short, the father Jizubi just got back had been dead the moment that parasite sank its teeth in. What was standing there was just a meat puppet, controlled by the brain bug. Sounded like solid logic, but try telling a traumatized kid to watch her dad get unalived for a second time. Glenn, our resident powerhouse, was suddenly attacked by the possessed corpse, catching her completely off guard. Doza instantly yelled for Kue to step up and handle it. Kue raised her sword, knowing exactly what had to be done, but as the parasite-controlled father looked right into her eyes, her hand froze, and she ended up getting choked out. Glenn, finally recovering, acted fast, knocking the enemy down and giving Josua the perfect opening to rush in for the finishing blow. Once the dirty deed was done, Duka was called in to cremate the corpse, while poor Jizubi just screamed her father's name until she completely passed out from exhaustion. Once the dust settled, Josua asked Kue point-blank why she froze up. She admitted she wanted to strike, but her hand just wouldn't obey. Josua, ever the pragmatic one, snapped back, arguing that monsters here were leveling up, and if they kept hesitating, someone would actually die. But Glenn quickly interjected, saying Kue's reaction was completely normal, because parasite or not, that thing still looked human. That hit Josua like a truck, making him pause. He realized he'd gotten way too used to the kind of messed up stuff nobody should ever get used to. Josua told Kue that if she ever found herself unable to do something like that again, she should just speak up beforehand. He'd take care of it himself, because his hands were already dirty anyway. But Kue wasn't having any of that. She didn't want to kill with her own hands, but if it had to be done, she refused to stand by and act like it had nothing to do with her. Glenn, always the wise one, chimed in, reassuring Kue that there are a million things to do in this world. Everyone has their strengths, and you shouldn't force someone to do the one thing they're terrible at. After all that chaos with her father, Jizubi finally made up her mind the only way into this village, through a super-secret, super-dramatic passage carved right into a rock cave. The moment they stepped inside, our crew immediately understood why this village was practically off-grid. This path was a literal death trap, deep long, and one misstep meant a one-way ticket to oops, you're gone forever land. Naturally, the cave decided to spice things up with a few blood-sucking bats. How original. Kay, seeing these guys were clearly weaker than a Gobin, confidently stepped up, looking for some easy EXP. He actually handled them pretty well this time, only to be mercilessly abandoned by the rest of the group. Classic Heh. Later, around a cozy campfire, Jizubi spilled the tea about her village's situation. Turns out, they have a little tradition there, delightfully named the Hopeful Journey. The idea is, chosen villagers leave to find a new, safer land for everyone to live. Sounds wholesome, right? You know, because the monsters are getting beefier, and the crops are just not cropping anymore. But despite the pretty name, everyone knows it's basically a one-way trip to the Grim Reaper's doorstep. And who gets chosen? Mostly the elderly, and those who can't pull their weight anymore, conveniently pushed out with the excuse of doing something useful. Yeah, hope is just a fancy euphemism for a brutal way to cut down on hungry mouths. Our boy Josua, ever the sharp one, immediately sniffed out the classic scent of a society rotting from resource scarcity. Jizubi's dad, along with some young blood named Dan, tried to rally against this tradition. They wanted the village chief to stop sending people to their deaths, but the chief, being the absolute villain, simply used their protests as an excuse to put them on the hopeful journey list themselves. After her dad got yeeted from the village, Jizubi's mom fell ill, leaving our girl to raise her little brother. Desperate, Jizubi secretly snuck out of the village to find her dad, hoping he'd come back and save their family. By some miracle, she found him living in a small house, but he flat out refused to return. He was terrified that if he broke the rules and came back, not only would he face execution, but Jizubi would too, for defying village law. The next day, he said he'd go negotiate with the village chief, and then promptly vanished into thin air, forever. Koi got super worried hearing Jizubi could be executed for returning, but our girl was determined. She had to go back and tell her mom and little brother that their dad was gone. Even with the fear and potential punishment looming, she couldn't just abandon her family. So, the next morning, the group continued through the tunnel towards Josu's entrance, with Jizubi scouting ahead for any of the chief's goons. Setting foot in Josu, the group instantly sensed this place was weird, even by fantasy village standards. Only about 100 folks lived here, clinging to a rugged, rocky terrain, with resources so scarce they were practically on a liquid diet. Suddenly, a little boy named Flog spotted Jizubi and ran right over. He was clearly a mix of happy and ticked off that she'd just vanished without a trace. But the moment Jizubi asked about her mom and little brother, Flog's face just dropped. Turns out Jizubi's mother had passed away just a few days prior, her illness taking a turn for the worst. And her little brother, Jianan, had witnessed the whole thing, leaving him in shock and practically speechless. Bro, our girl Jizubi just lost her dad in the forest, came home, and now her mom's gone too, with her brother a literal empty shell. Talk about a bad day. Even our unbothered lead, Josua, couldn't handle this level of sad, so he pulled the classic I gotta go observe the village move. Glenn, being Glenn, immediately saw through it and followed him out. On the way, she mused that Josua wasn't quite as cold and detached as he sometimes pretended to be. He didn't leave because he was heartless. He just couldn't stand watching Jizubi in so much pain. Josua, however, labeled his feelings more as regret than mere pity. If only they'd arrived a little sooner, if only he'd had time to whip out his biological magic, Jizubi's mom might have had a fighting chance. Just then a girl dressed way too fancy for a dying village, flanked by a few servants, strutted into view. This, apparently, was Ais, the village chief's granddaughter. And the moment she saw our heroes, Ais, with zero chill, declared the village didn't need them. She was convinced her grandpa could fix literally everything. Bless her heart. Glenn, however, maintained peak politeness, even calling her Lady A's, which genuinely made the girl pause, because apparently no one had ever done that before. Meanwhile, Flog chimed in, reminding everyone that his own brother Dan had also gone missing after his hopeful journey. Jizubi's dad is dead, but the village chief, despite being old AF, never goes on these trips himself. He just sends off anyone he deems inconvenient. Right after, Josua and Glenn had a chat with the village chief, who, with an extremely polite facade, claimed he'd heard of their world-saving deeds, but then smoothly tried to show them the door. According to this clown, Josu was totally peaceful, and there was absolutely nothing a hero needed to meddle with. Josua tried to point out that the monsters were getting stronger, and the village was constantly under attack, hoping to get permission to stay and protect them. But oh boy, that was the wrong thing to say. The village chief immediately asked where they heard that from. Josua tried to hide Jizubi's involvement, not knowing what the chief would do to her, but accidentally let slip that she had seen Jizubi entering the village with them. And just like that, Jizubi's name was out in the open before the chief. He reacted smoothly, feigning sincere sorrow for Jizubi, mourning her separation from her father and her mother's passing. He even added that it was so good she was back. When Josua pressed further about the monsters, the chief assured them not to worry because the village had a secret weapon against the beasts. He even invited Josua and Glenn down to the basement to see this secret weapon. Both were suspicious, but refusing outright would alert the chief, so they reluctantly followed. And just as they suspected, the moment Joshua and Glenn stepped into the room, the door slammed shut. The chief stood outside, his true colors now fully revealed. He declared that adventurers were even more troublesome than monsters. He also thanked them for bringing Jizubi, the rule-breaker, back to face judgment. Joshua asked what he intended to do with the girl, but the chief merely said they'd slowly rot in the dungeon, so there was no need for them to know. Meanwhile, the rest of the party was at Flog's house. His mother treated them to some vegetables and frog eggs from the backyard pond. She apologized for not having anything better, while the adventure party couldn't bring themselves to complain. From the mother and son story, they learned that Flog's family and Jizubi's family had been ostracized by the village after opposing the Journey of Hope. Flog was forced to guard the village outskirts, and his mother barely interacted with the villagers anymore. In other words, anyone who challenged the chief's authority was swiftly marginalized. Sino started to feel uneasy about how long the other two had been gone, a bad feeling stirring within her. But before they could act, the chief himself arrived. He appeared with a benevolent smile, claiming the two adventurers were being graciously entertained at the manor, and invited the rest of the party to join them. For Jizubi, he put on a particularly magnanimous show. He declared that by law, those who left the village without permission must be severely punished as an example. But since the adventurers had pleaded on her behalf, he would graciously forgive her, trusting the villagers would understand. It sounded plausible enough, so the entire adventure party decided to follow. On their way to the manor, they had to cross a rope bridge over a swampy area. When the group was halfway across the bridge, the chief suddenly cut the ropes. The chief stood on the side, casually remarking that this method was much less troublesome than locking them in the dungeon like the other two. Once they fell, there was no crawling back up, because even monsters couldn't escape from there. However, our squad of heroines was far from ordinary. Sino immediately unleashed a spell, knocking the chief off his feet, while the rest of the party quickly grabbed hold and climbed back up before they fully plummeted. Meanwhile, in another part of the village, Jizubi had been taken away by the villagers after the adventurers were out of sight. Flog had now decided to run off and save her, despite his mother's desperate pleas. As for the chief, the adventurer party had tied him up and dragged him back to the manor to demand Joshua and Glenn's release. But upon arriving, things were already far more chaotic. Outside the manor gates, villagers gathered in fear, having just heard a massive roar echo from outside. Before they could comprehend what was happening, the guards appeared, dragging the captive Jizubi along. The chief immediately switched roles, playing the victim, claiming he only wanted to apprehend the rule-breaking child. Yet these adventurers had used force to restrain him. When the villagers questioned why the adventurers would do such a thing, he immediately fabricated a story that they were outsiders sent to steal the village's riches. Flog couldn't take it anymore. He rushed forward, striking a guard, then stood protectively in front of Jizubi. The chief, caring not if they were children or not, ordered his guards to seize both of them. Flog tried to resist by all means, but what could a child do against adults? The surrounding villagers also began to question the adventurers, unanimously demanding they leave the village silently and immediately. Just then, Flog's mother appeared, pushing a guard to save her son. The chief, enraged, accused the mother and son of harboring Jizubi. He used the monster's roar from earlier as proof, causing the crowd to panic. And as if on cue, the monster roared once more, as if to confirm his words. The villagers immediately converged, dragging Flog and his mother away. This scene made Keita absolutely snap. It dragged him straight back to his childhood memories of his mom and little brother being terrorized by loan sharks. Keita completely lost his chill, charging in and punching anyone who got in his way, knocking out guards and grabbing the village chief to make him spill where Juza and Glenn were locked up. All the XP he'd painstakingly grinded in the cave earlier got completely wiped, because apparently the system draws the line at punching people. When the whole crew stormed the mansion, Ace was already sitting inside, fuming because her grandpa got clapped. The little gremlin confessed she'd tossed the dungeon key down the old well behind the house, the one that had been dry and seemingly bottomless for ages. Meanwhile, outside, Flock was acting like a full-grown man, telling his mom and Jizubi to hurry home and hide, while he'd head back to the heroes, sure that the village chief was cooking up something evil. No sooner had he finished speaking than a giant snake appeared right before his eyes. Flock burst in, breathless, to report that a ton of monsters were heading straight for the village. The entire group peered through the window and instantly understood why that earlier roar had sent the villagers into such a panic. In this crisis, the village chief, of all people, was the first to plunge into despair. Ace, still naive, chirped, "Oh, heroes, just go beat them up." But Keita instantly chewed her out, pointing out she was the one who'd tossed the dungeon key and had no right to demand anything. Just as everything was getting super messy, the ground suddenly shook, and the floorboards shattered from below. Next thing they knew, Juza and Glenn themselves climbed out, leaving the whole team completely dumbfounded. Turns out the village chief's so-called dungeon was only solid on the walls and bars. The ceiling was just plain wood. So, when they heard commotion above, Juza simply carried Glenn up and busted through the ceiling to escape. Once out, Juza immediately checked the situation through a window and realized this disaster was far more severe than anticipated. The group instantly started discussing an escape plan. Defeating that horde of monsters was almost impossible, so the only option was to get the villagers out of Josu. The problem was, the secret path the group used to enter the village was right near where the monsters were swarming in from. Knowing he couldn't fight, Flock volunteered to run and warn everyone in the village. Kuzu suddenly had an idea. She dragged everyone to the well to see just how deep it really was. Ois had mentioned the well had a broken bottom and was dried due to an earthquake ages ago. If the bottom of the well truly connected to the cave system below, it might very well lead to a tunnel out. This was an incredibly risky theory, but surrounded by monsters, it was either try this or die anyway. Kuzua proposed she jump down herself to check. She was a heavy warrior class, so she at least had better impact resistance. If she bit the dust, everyone could observe her respawn location to determine if there was a path down below. With that, she jumped down the well, instantly dying from the fall. Then after respawning, she used a signal to report back to the group. It was about 40 to 50 meters deep, and yes, it was indeed passable below. From then on, everyone frantically started tying ropes, planks, and anything usable into a makeshift ladder to get the villagers down the well. Outside, the giant snake was already right by the village. It didn't need to attack each house individually. A blast of poisonous fluid from its mouth was enough to dissolve its victims down to the bone. Those who couldn't escape in time were instantly wiped out. Flock was currently running to find Jizubi, Yan, and his mother. But when he found Jizubi and his little brother, he heard the devastating news that his mother had stayed behind to block the path so the two children could escape. Flock was so heartbroken he could barely stand, but he had no time to cry. He had to get the two siblings to the heroes. Otherwise, his mother's sacrifice would have been in vain. Very quickly, all three arrived at the well. While climbing down, Ace slipped and fell from the ladder, but Kuzo, who was already below, managed to catch the little girl. Seeing his granddaughter saved, the village chief thanked Kuzu profusely. When most everyone had made it down, only Juza, Kita, and Juko remained above. The monster horde spotted the escape route and surged forward all at once. A massive rock was hurled straight into the well, snapping the makeshift ladder. With no time left to climb down, the three could only jump straight into the well, accepting death by freefall and respawning below. After coming back to life, the group continued to lead the remaining survivors along the caves and eventually made it back to the surface. Behind them, Josu village was completely destroyed by the monsters, but the group hadn't failed. It meant the true objective wasn't to preserve the houses, but to protect the remaining people of Josu. After walking for a while, Ace started complaining about tired legs and stubbornly refused to go any further. Juza tried to hold himself back, using sweet words to plead with the little girl to keep moving. But Ace remained stubbornly uncooperative. Just as he was about to resort to force, Kita bent down and said he'd carry her on his back. Juza watched, utterly baffled by what Kita was thinking. Just moments ago, he'd called her quest baggage, and now he was being gentle like a literal big brother. After a while, Kusue realized they were actually heading in the opposite direction from the village, rendering their fancy map pretty much useless. While resting near a river, Glenn stumbled upon a super weird overgrown path. It definitely wasn't monster tracks. This looked way more like a human trail. This was super odd, considering their previous guide explicitly said this area had 0 towns or villages. So, Doza decided to scout ahead with Glenn, leaving the rest to protect the other survivors. Keita wanted to join in too, but Aceit was practically glued to him, refusing to let go. Which meant the scouting party was still just Doza and Glenn. The two followed the overgrown path and eventually stumbled upon an abandoned village. At first, they suspected it might be a bandit hideout, but the location was way too remote and inconvenient for any serious raiding. Like if you want to raid other places, choosing this spot is just asking for extra travel time and pain. The area was completely deserted, but there were still clear signs that someone had lived here recently. If they could fix it up, this place might actually work as a temporary base for their group and the other survivors. But a rustle in the nearby bushes quickly made them realize this place might not be so empty after all. Both immediately snapped into full alert mode. Meanwhile, back with the main group, Jizubi started sharing more about her dad. Turns out he wasn't her biological father. He'd adopted her when she was just a little kid. But for Jizubi, that didn't change their bond one bit. On the other hand, Doza and Glenn had just run into a group of people who seemed to be the actual villagers from this abandoned place. At the same time, Sino was starting to get antsy since Doza still hadn't returned. And the village chief? He finally dropped his fake nice guy act. He flat out declared that the harvests in Ju were getting worse and worse. There wasn't enough food for everyone, so those who couldn't work anymore had to be eliminated. Sounded brutal, sure, but he argued it was the only decision a village chief could make to stop everyone from starving together. But before his little tragedy play could even properly unfold, Keita spotted a group of goblins lurking in the trees. He instantly pulled the elder and child to safety, then rallied the waifu squad for battle. Kusue grabbed her shield, taking point as the vanguard, while Sino positioned herself behind to coordinate the finishing blows. Yu fired an arrow from a distance but totally whiffed the first shot. The moment a goblin got too close to her, Keita swooped in for backup, telling her to take the kids and elders and get out of there. In the middle of the fight, Sino was suddenly blindsided by a goblin from behind. Right at that super dangerous moment, time suddenly froze because she had just hit rank 10. The server admin popped up as usual, spun the job roulette, and this time Sino landed a high-level sword warrior class. Lucky her. The moment she returned to the battlefield, she was a completely different person. Those goblins who were just causing trouble, Sino was now casually dispatching them with ridiculous ease. In another direction, Doza's retreating group found their path blocked by more goblins. Yu, in a total panic, didn't know which weapon to grab for such close-quarters combat. Luckily, she managed to pull out her magic staff, but her attack felt more like a tickle than an actual spell. Just as things were getting super dicey, Glenn arrived and swiftly took it down with his axe. And with her was Dan, Flo's older brother. The moment Flock saw her brother was still alive, she burst into tears and immediately rushed to hug him tight. Jizubi couldn't hold back her emotions either. After so much loss, Flo being reunited with her brother felt like a rare miracle amidst all this tragedy. Turns out, the people the scouting party found were the same group who had been forced out of the village during that journey of hope. They had survived, built a temporary shelter, hunted to get by, and continued to exist deep in the forest. When night fell, the hero group and the villagers settled down to rest in that small, rediscovered village. The residents here welcomed them with everything they had, which was genuinely heartwarming. The one cooking dinner, an old man, turned out to be Yu's former village chef. And of course, mentioning the old chief made the atmosphere instantly awkward. The people he'd driven out no longer had any reason to bow their heads like they did back in the village. They didn't hide their bitterness. The very burdens he tried to eliminate had survived, while the main village was practically wiped out. The chief tried to keep his calm facade, but at this point, nobody was really buying his self-righteous speeches anymore. Dan then explained that he had set out weeks ago to find Nguyen, but ended up in this very spot, and couldn't bring himself to leave because he felt for the people here. He'd been hunting daily to feed everyone, which was the only reason this small village had. Hearing that, Flo proudly flexed that her brother was the top hunter of the village. At first, Keisue figured the villagers could just chill right here, but Josu immediately shut that idea down. According to him, the monster horde that attacked Yosu weren't your garden variety monsters. They were clearly out for blood, and might even be under someone's control. If they just stayed put, the chances of getting jumped again were super high. Dan couldn't fathom where Sue got off making such a bold claim. He couldn't exactly spill that the mission wasn't finished, so he just pulled a classic hero's intuition excuse out of thin air, and Dan, bless his heart, totally bought it. This is where Glenn finally chimed in, asking what this new Eden Dan wouldn't shut up about actually was. To the villagers of Josu, it was just another mythical land where humans were supposedly promised eternal, cozy peace. This journey of hope started as a noble quest for the youth, but quickly morphed into a shady excuse to yeet any useless villagers out of town. Our good old village chief then dropped the most brutal truth bomb. Only those who chose to die would ever reach New Eden. Yikes. This was top secret, spicy intel passed down through generations of village chiefs. Dan just couldn't swallow that bitter pill, realizing the villagers had been living in constant fear for years, wondering when their turn would come. So New Eden sounded less like a paradise and more like a myth with good PR. But then, out of nowhere, Jizubi piped up, confidently insisting it did exist. She remembered her parents talking about a truly peaceful land on the other side of the dense forest, where actual humans lived. And just like that, this little tidbit became their brand new ray of hope. The only tiny hitch? To get there, they had to trek through a forest, which, by the way, had a goblin settlement with roughly 30 of those green little dudes right in the middle. Now, 30 goblins ain't a small number, but if they were all clumped together, at least they could pull off a surprise ambush. While the hero party was busy strategizing, Jizubi just casually asked to borrow a blanket for Ayas. Priorities, people. The next morning, bright and early, they all set off on their quest for New Eden. The vibe had definitely shifted by this point. Everyone was quieter, the mood way heavier. The reason? Last night, they'd heard the ominous roar of the monster that had previously leveled Shu. After half a day of trekking, the whole squad stopped for a break, while the hero party geared up for a nighttime ambush on the goblin settlement. The ambush squad? Souza, Sindo, Keta, and Dan, who was basically their designated guide. Before heading out, Ket even made a classic anime promise to Ice. He'd get stronger, nab a cooler job, and then come back for her. Sino was pretty surprised to realize this dude actually had a soft spot for kids. Who knew? As they crept closer to the goblin settlement, Josua busted out some biomagic to mask his presence and silently dropped the unsuspecting guard. The original blueprint. Take out the guard, then split up and waltz in to attack the sleeping goblins in their cozy dens. But the moment they peeked inside, they found the whole place eerily empty. Turns out the goblin they dropped earlier was just a decoy, and the real party crashers had circled around to ambush them. Classic rookie mistake. So the tables immediately turned from, "We're ambushing them" to, "Oh no, we're being ambushed." Meanwhile, on the flip side of this chaotic coin, Kusue was having a deep chat with Glenn. After all that went down, she confessed she was still pretty terrified of taking down monsters. Glenn, ever the empathetic one, didn't see that as weakness at all. She then shared that her dad, a former soldier, came back from the war with PTSD and just drowned himself in alcohol. Heavy stuff. He would often force her to look at horrific photos from the battlefield. Every single day, he'd parrot the same line: "I protected this country, so everyone I protected owes me eternal gratitude." That kind of life pushed Glenn right to her absolute limit. When she finally told her dad she liked women and wouldn't be having kids, he responded by immediately pointing a gun at her. Yeah, that was the very last time she ever set foot in that house. After that, Glenn just drifted across the entire world. Suddenly, Ace walked up and asked where he had disappeared to. Glenn assumed he'd just gone to the little adventurer's room, but then Dua came sprinting back, absolutely breathless, with some urgent news. While on patrol, she'd stumbled upon the village chief's lifeless body, chilling by the riverbank. Ace immediately started wailing upon finding her grandfather dead, while Glenn, ever the pragmatist, instantly switched into detective mode. Since the wounds were clearly human-inflicted, her number one suspects were the group who got exiled during that whole journey of hope debacle. They totally held a grudge and admitted hating the chief's guts, but they swore they weren't that far gone to actually kill him. The village was gone, they had nothing left but pure despair. A stab wouldn't bring anyone back anyway. Meanwhile, the raid party finally flipped the script in the enemy's stronghold. Most of the goblins were already taken down, with the rest scattering for their lives. Souza declared the area temporarily safe, so the whole group could finally get some rest. On their way back, Juza heard everything from Glenn, but it wasn't the time to dwell on it. They needed to rush to the next waypoint. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief upon arrival, since at least this spot offered some shelter from the elements. Gaka even found the goblin's meat stash could be put to good use. That's when Josua noticed something strange. He asked Juka and Shindo to continuously cast spells, just to check the mana drain. And just as he suspected, in this goblin territory, magic consumption was significantly lower than normal. That phenomenon was just like the place where the group had first encountered Jezubi. While the grown-ups were busy investigating, Ket and the kids huddled in their tent, catching up on all the gossip. Eyes started talking about a flying monster that once appeared in Yosu, claiming if they caught it, they wouldn't have to walk anymore. However, Flop immediately advised everyone not to trust Ace, since she was known for stretching the truth. Yet, Jezubi still opted to trust her, even reminding Flop to play nice and not bully her friends. That night, Glenn gathered everyone around the campfire and declared they had found the village chief's murderer. And the culprit was none other than the cook. It sounded a bit surprising at first, but Glenn pointed out that besides the hero party's gear, the sharpest thing capable of being a murder weapon in this area was his own kitchen knife. More importantly, Jiaka had already given himself away. Before Glenn even revealed the chief died from a stab wound, he blurted out, "What's the point of stabbing the chief now, anyway?" In other words, Jiacha already knew how the chief had died. Being called out like that, he was basically backed into a corner with no way to deny it. Eyes immediately lunged forward in a fit of rage, but everyone managed to hold her back. Glenn decided not to deal with him right away, opting to temporarily lock Jiatsa in a small shack. After some thought, they decided to leave Jiasa there and continue on the road, because their mission couldn't wait for them to solve a whole murder mystery. Glenn admitted that no one had the right to play judge, jury, and executioner, but she still had a bad gut feeling about it. While everyone else was still hesitating, Ace quietly crept toward the shack where Jiaka was imprisoned. Ket saw the girl and immediately ran after her. When he arrived, he found the problem was even more terrifying than he could have imagined. Ace had been infected by a parasite, just like Jizubi's father before. The girl pounced on Ket, trying to strangle him right there on the spot. Juza immediately drew his blade, having made it clear before that he would handle situations where they had to deal with infected loved ones. But Ket couldn't just stand there and watch Ace get taken down like that. He pushed her away, trying to keep things from escalating further. But when the girl kept lunging, it was Ket himself who was forced to strike. With a single swing, Ace fell right in front of everyone's eyes. Afterward, they threw the parasitic body into the flames to consume it. Ket deliberately stood far from the crowd, bowing his head alone, in so much pain he didn't even have the strength to scream anymore. The next day, the entire group laid flowers at Ace's grave. Jizubi still couldn't process losing yet another loved one. That's when the elderly members of the group simultaneously reported that their bodies weren't feeling right. Flop immediately realized the children were showing similar symptoms, everyone suffering from unexplained fatigue. Naturally, the hero party felt nothing. Josua was immediately reminded of Jaefron. This familiar feeling of their life force draining away was exactly what happened before, when the Gagon Bishop used that ritual on the island, so there was a high chance another Bishop was pulling the same trick nearby. Ket was still drowning in grief over Ace. He tried to act like he was okay, but Sindo knew better just by looking. She didn't give him a lecture or tell him to be strong right away, only reminding him that getting tossed into a strange world, constantly facing heartbreak, and having to fight just to survive was already beyond ridiculous. Everyone was trying to hold it together, even Josua, but nobody was truly okay. That's why, in the end, our boy Keta, remembering his little brother back in the real world, knows giving up here just isn't an option. That thought alone was enough to snap Kita back to reality, at least for a moment. Sinnoh, bless his heart, even suggested a beach trip after all this was over. Sounded super normal, but in this life or death situation, it was basically a promise to give them a reason to keep fighting. Right at that critical moment, Jizubi suddenly had a major aha moment, remembering a crucial piece of info. New Eden, the legendary promised land, was supposedly past the dense forest towards the rising sun. So, if they just headed east from Josu, they could finally find the legendary promised land their people had been looking for all this time. But Juza, being the cautious one, wasn't about to bite hook, line, and sinker. Because if the Dragon Bishop was actually lurking around, rushing into action based on some vague memory felt like a death wish. Flock, totally fed up, demanded to know if Juza just had some personal beef with Jizubi, because why else would he refuse to trust her? But before anyone could even finish that argument, the monsters decided to crash the party. Juza immediately barked orders to get the kids and elders out of the settlement, like, now. Glenn tasked Kusu and Dua with managing the little ones, while everyone else was to charge straight into the fray. However, the moment he clashed with a single wolf, Juza went down so fast it was genuinely alarming. Meanwhile, the evacuation squad had to scramble over a massive fallen tree to get away from the immediate chaos. Right at that moment, little Jianan slipped and went tumbling down. Kuzu immediately told Duka to haul the kid back up, while she stayed behind to fend off an incoming goblin that was getting way too close. Same old trick, waiting for the perfect moment to draw her sword, leaving the monster no time to react. Classic Kuzue. Meanwhile, when Dua scooped up Jianan, she noticed he'd taken a nasty bump to the forehead. Back on the main battlefield, Sind was caught in a brutal tug-of-war with another wolf. Suddenly, Juzas, who had just somehow revived, appeared behind the wolf and hammered it, creating an opening. Sino immediately capitalized, slicing off the enemy's head with a clean swing. And Keta, not to be outdone, promptly took care of another one. Thanks to that teamwork, the initial wave of monsters was finally blessedly dealt with. But before they could even think about taking a breather, a massive, horrifying worm burst onto the scene. It brutally slammed Natindo to the ground and then, gulp, swallowed her whole. Cole, seeing his friend literally get eaten, recklessly charged in, only to get snatched up and swallowed himself just as fast. Yikes. Before the rest of the group could even process what just happened, a powerful gust of wind suddenly slammed into the worm, forcing the massive creature to retreat. The one who saved the day? None other than Kanti, the legendary mercenary commander. Kanti's sudden appearance left the entire team, especially Dua, completely flabbergasted and overjoyed all at once. Years ago, after some epic battle against hordes of monsters, they'd heard he was swept away by a tsunami. Turns out the old man's still kicking. Kanti explained that right after that massive disaster, he was rescued by none other than Grand Mage Fatina herself, and then apparently became her magical apprentice. Dua, hearing Fatina's name, suddenly realized that this legendary mage was also the one who'd saved her when she was lost in a blizzard years ago. Small world, huh? And Kanti's presence here? Definitely not a coincidence. Fatina had apparently sensed the shadowy presence of the Dragon Bishop in the area, so she sent Kanti to investigate, and naturally, kick their butts. According to Kanti, the Dragon Bishop wasn't just some religious cult. They were actively trying to resurrect actual dragons. Yikes. And if they succeeded, humanity was basically toast. But wait, there's more. Kanti also dropped another bombshell of information. Apparently a few months back, a meteorite absolutely jam-packed with absurdly powerful magic crashed down near here. One huge chunk landed beyond the mountains, but smaller bits scattered all over the place, making all the local monsters get an unexpected, terrifying power-up. And the Dragon Bishop was probably exploiting that immense magical energy to continue their dark blood rituals, straight up draining life force from people. Juza then had a sudden realization, remembering the Kingdom of Doc, which was involved in a past mission. Kanti revealed that he'd actually taken down another dragon bishop there before, a sneaky one who'd hidden in the royal palace, stirring up wars just to harvest the lives of the dead as ritual fuel. Seriously messed up. Hearing all this, Juza immediately connected the dots. If wiping out a single village wasn't enough for their ritual, then there had to be other heavily populated areas nearby. Which meant New Eden, the promised land, might actually be real after all. To combat that rampant meteorite magic, Kanti handed the group some seriously special glowy seeds. These bad boys could apparently suck up magic and seal off the meteorite's corrupting influence within a 10-kilometer radius. Talk about plot-convenient seeds. Our resident accidentally overpowered country boy, Juza, used his bio-magic to speed up the plant growth, but since the ambient magic in the area was ridiculously dense, the plant went full-on OP, skyrocketing into a giant tree that even popped out edible fruit. Classic. Keita, ever the pragmatist, immediately snagged a few of these magical fruits for some emergency, on-the-go rations. But hold up, the real urgent issue wasn't the food situation. It was the fact that Sind and Kuzue were still chilling, presumably, inside that giant worm's belly. So naturally, Juza, Keita, and Zuka immediately took off after it, ready for some worm hunting. Glenn stayed with the villagers to look for the Dragon Bishop's magic circle, mentioning she had something important to confirm. The Chol had bolted through the dense forest, making its way to an area near a waterfall. The moment Keita saw it, he went absolutely wild, just like always. He threw his spear at it, but it had no effect and was quickly crushed. Doza calculated the opening after each time the Chol jumped and landed, aiming to strike with his hammer at the precise moment, but it was much faster than last time. Luckily, Duka quickly managed to shoot one of its eyes. Juza immediately told her to shoot the other eye to blind it, but the Chol wasn't just going to stand there and take it. It counterattacked incredibly fast, crushing Duka to death on the spot. Just when Doza thought everything was over, Keita revived just in time, leaping forward to impale the monster's head with his spear and finish it off. After that, they cut open the Chol's belly and pulled out the bodies of Sind and Kusue. When Sindo revived, she could only sigh and complain, as this was already the second time she'd been eaten by the Chol. Immediately after, the group discovered a massive waterfall ahead, and embedded within the cliff face was a giant magical meteorite. The small fragments scattered around the forest were likely just debris from this very object. Joe looked up at the top of the waterfall and thought of Jaezui's words. If New Eden was located to the east, past the dense forest, then a habitable place might be right above them. But the cliff was so tall that climbing it by hand was almost impossible. Just then, he remembered the seed Kanti gave to Doza. Keita took one seed, used biomagic to force it to grow, then clung to its stem and climbed up. While they were exhausted to the point of collapse, they couldn't help but feel a little strange. Because who would have thought there'd be a day they'd be searching for the promised land by climbing a tree straight out of a fairy tale? While Souza's group was climbing the waterfall, strange things were also happening back at the shelter. Janan unexpectedly woke up after his fall during the escape. Flog was overjoyed to see the boy could finally speak, but her joy quickly turned into unease. Janan couldn't clearly remember what had happened after his mother died. Flog just thought he'd hit his head and temporarily lost his memory, eagerly wanting to bring him back to Jizubi to cheer her up. Meanwhile, at the top of the waterfall, where Souza and everyone finally managed to crawl up, there was no city or village in sight. However, Souza hadn't given up yet. He silently looked down the waterfall. If there's nothing going up, then the remaining possibility lies in the current. He suddenly jumped straight down the waterfall, despite the others' panic. The moment he submerged, he discovered the current below wasn't flowing in a normal direction. It pulled him into an underground passage, then pushed him up into a completely different river. And right before Suzu's eyes was a hidden city. Not a pile of ruins, nor a made-up legend to trick the old and weak into dying, but a place where people actually lived. The people there were incredibly peaceful. Children played, adults chatted, as if the war and monsters outside had never touched them. When strangers appeared, they were only surprised because it had been a very long time since they had visitors. The city had over 300 people, and recently a baby was born, bringing the population to 321. They had lived here for generations, with no conflicts, no wars, almost completely isolated from the outside world. Since there was only one city in the region, and they didn't interact with anyone, they didn't even need to name their home. Meanwhile, at the shelter, an even more terrifying truth was being revealed. Jizubi finally reunited with Janan, but the boy looked at her like a stranger and claimed he didn't have an older sister. Jizubi almost collapsed, repeatedly begging her younger brother to remember her. But just as her emotions surged, Jizubi's eyes flashed red for a very brief moment. Glenn walked in at that exact moment and noticed something amiss. She point-blank exposed that the person in front of her should stop pretending. Because Jizubi's was none other than a dragon bishop. Delving deeper into the meteorite fragments, it was revealed that from ancient times, dragons once reigned over this world. But after a great catastrophe from the sky, they were almost driven to extinction, with only a few individuals remaining. During that upheaval, one dragon had flown out into space and was still sleeping soundly there. The meteorite fragment that fell into this forest could very well be a part of that very dragon. In other words, it wasn't just a rock boosting monster's power, but something accelerating the apocalypse. Back in the present, Flog still didn't understand what was happening, but Glenn immediately brought the last person chilling with Ace before she got body snatched by a parasite. Yep, it was our girl Jizubi. So if we're playing detective, who had the prime opportunity to implant that nasty parasite into Ace? Plot twist. It's glaringly obvious. Of course, Jizubi still tried to play the innocent, fluttering her eyelashes and demanding Glenn show some proof for such a heavy accusation. But Glenn, our sharp-witted boy, had been clocking her suspicious vibes for ages. Remember their first meeting? Deep in a monster-infested forest, Jizubi was just casually strolling, picking berries like she was in her backyard. And wait, there's more. When the whole squad rolled into Josu village, Jizubi volunteered to scout ahead, then strolled into the village solo. Glenn realized that wasn't just a scouting mission. Nah, that was her dropping some sneaky memory magic, making everyone in the village believe she'd been living there forever. The biggest red flag? It was all thanks to Don's absolutely confused reaction. When he first saw Jizubi again, John legit paused, like his brain was short-circuiting trying to figure out who this person was. But then, bam, the planted memories kicked in, and he instantly switched to long-lost Big Brother reunion mode. And Annan, bless his little heart, was the last piece of living proof. Because the kid had some memory and mental issues, Jizubi's mind-bending memory magic just fizzled out on him. So when he finally came to, he had no memory of ever having a sister. Because plot twist, that memory was never real to begin with. Glenn also dropped another bombshell. The village chief incident wasn't just Jaka going rogue. If Jaka had done that all by himself, there's no way the other elders wouldn't have known something was up. After apprehending Jaka, Glenn circled back to the elders and, surprise, surprise, found out they'd been manipulated by Jizubi. She totally played on their existing resentment for the village chief, weaving fake memories with real emotions to bend everything to her twisted will. Glenn had his suspicions brewing early on, but he just didn't have the ironclad proof yet. And because of that agonizing hesitation, poor Ace ended up becoming a sacrifice. Called out so hard she had no script left to follow, Jizubi finally dropped the innocent victim act. And just like that, the creepy markings of the dragon bishops started to appear all over her face. She even complimented Glenn's smarts, but our boy just casually brushed it off, saying he's just naturally suspicious from a not-so-great childhood. Jizubi was officially done with hiding her true colors. She confessed that even her fancy memory-implanting magic always leaves tiny little glitches, and even the smallest glitch can completely derail a whole master plan. The village chief actually caught on because the numbers in the village just weren't adding up. In his memory, if you counted Jizubi and her fake parents, there were suddenly 3 extra people. So, naturally, he had to go. Ace, bless her heart, accidentally saw Jizubi casually riding a monstrous beast through the sky, so she also got added to the elimination list. Oh, and at that point, she was hunting for the perfect ritual spot, needing to sense massive clusters of life force to drain dry. But around the waterfall, she could only vaguely sense human life signs, not the exact location she needed. So naturally, she befriended a local, and casually extracted the juicy legend of New Eden from them. And then, the moment he started getting suspicious about her planting parasites, she just let him go. Tactical retreat, I guess? Then, right on cue, the hero party shows up, so she, being the opportunist she is, totally used them to help track down the hidden city. Even the entire Josu tragedy? Yep, all Jizubi's handiwork, just to harvest more lives for her big spooky blood ritual. Flog, hearing all this, finally snapped. He immediately demanded to know about his mother. Jizubi didn't directly off his mom, but when the poor woman was trapped under the rubble, begging for help, Jizubi just shrugged and left her to die. That answer hit Flog like a ton of bricks. He absolutely exploded, charging straight at her, but Jizubi just calmly raised her staff, ready to unleash some magic. Thankfully, Kanti swooped in just in the nick of time, landing a shot first and forcing Jizubi to bail out on her dragon, flying into the sky. Before she zoomed off, she even had the audacity to sneer that Kanti was just a third-rate mage. She taunted that by the time they figured out her true identity, it was already way too late. Meanwhile, over at the waterfall, Dosuza just barely broke free from the hidden city and made it back to the group. He spilled the tea to everyone about the underground current beneath the waterfall, revealing a hidden city where over 300 people had been living for generations. And get this, the old man there was actually from Josu. Turns out the old village chief's cryptic words actually held a much deeper meaning. That whole only those who choose death will be led to New Eden thing? It wasn't just some morbid suicide pact after all. The people who were cast out fell down the waterfall and somehow got lucky enough to be swept away by the underground current. They probably landed right in that hidden city. Still, Juza had a nagging feeling it was all a little too convenient, and sure enough, Jezubi, making a grand re-entrance, descended on her dragon, landing right on the meteor shard. Glenn and Canty caught up right behind her, immediately shouting out the big reveal. Jezubi is the Dragon Bishop. No more denying, no more games. She just started to chant a spell, ready to kick off her master plan. As soon as the magic lit up, monsters from all over the forest started swarming in. Our valiant squad instantly geared up for a fight, but they quickly realized these monsters weren't actually targeting them. Their real target was the waterfall, the only path leading to the hidden city beneath the earth. If those monsters managed to storm down there, New Eden would be erased from existence in mere moments. Jose immediately ordered everyone to stop them. The entire squad plunged into battle, but these monsters were way more powerful this time, thanks to the meteorite's influence. Attacks kept missing their marks, and the damage barely registered. Jezubi stood atop a rock shard, smirking with pure delight, because the very power of the meteorite would accelerate her dragon resurrection ritual. Cantu desperately searched for the magic circle, but couldn't find it in a stationary location. It was only upon closer inspection that he finally noticed a crucial anomaly. 6 stone golems weren't directly engaging in the fight. The magic circle wasn't drawn on the ground, but carved onto their backs, making it constantly shift and impossible for outsiders to detect conventionally. No sooner had he finished speaking, Cantu was dealt a heavy blow by Jezubi. Josu tried to heal him, but Cantu brushed him off, refusing to waste precious time. What needed to be done was destroying those 6 golems with the magic circles on their backs. Just erase those symbols, and the blood ritual would be severed. Doza immediately passed the monster-killing duties to everyone else, while he set his sights straight on Jezubi. He used nature magic to mask his aura, crept in close, and delivered a swift kick that sent her staff flying from her hands. But Jezubi wasn't the type to just put on a show. She instantly erected a magical barrier, making Yosua's attacks almost impenetrable. His knives, axes, every weapon he had was shattered, leaving only a lone sickle that Josu casually tossed at Jezubi, barely leaving a small scratch. And that was exactly what he wanted to see, as Josu continued to press his attack, taking hit after hit just to lock down her movements. Next, he shoved a divine beam into the scratch on Jezubi's hand, then used life force magic, dumping all his remaining mana into it. Finally, Doza succeeded in shoving her down below, and the moment she was ripped away from the meteorite, the power boost on the monsters immediately weakened. Kentu immediately yelled for the heroes to seize the moment and deal with them. Juka and Kusue focused on the golems, erasing the last of the magic circles on their backs. Sin kept hacking down anything blocking their path, while Ket poured all his strength into piercing the serpent, destroying the water source. This time, their attacks finally had a noticeable effect. As the final magic circle shattered, the hero's mission was complete. After that incredibly risky move, Doza collapsed from sheer exhaustion. When he came to, he saw Jezubi was still alive. To him, the path forward was crystal clear. She had taken too many lives. Someone like her simply couldn't be allowed to live. Zhou stood up, ready to deliver the final blow, but Kusue unexpectedly hugged him tightly from behind, begging him to stop. She knew Doza had personally taken lives before, understanding he always saw it as his duty to deal with those who deserved death. But if he kept killing again and again, eventually it would just become normal, and he wouldn't be able to turn back anymore. Zhou still said coldly, "Trash should die. I don't care what happens to me." But Kusue didn't let go. She just begged him not to lock away his own future. Glenn also chimed in, saying this was this world's problem, so its people should be the ones to handle the ending. Yosua finally lowered his hand, though he had absolutely no intention of forgiveness. Flock stepped forward, asking Jezubi the one thing that hurt him most. He wanted to know, did she just alter his memories, or did she manipulate his feelings too? Her answer was utterly ruthless. Jezubi scoffed and declared that her one and only love was her god. Human affection meant absolutely nothing to her. With that, Jezubi used her own magic to self-immolate, choosing to die by flame rather than face human judgment. Flock could only thank her for her honesty, then bid a final farewell to the woman he once loved. Just as things were settling down, Fatina made her grand entrance, riding her giant owl. She seemed a bit embarrassed about being late, but still nonchalantly destroyed the magical meteorite. The moment the meteorite finally shattered, the land underneath revealed itself, unveiling a hidden city that was just chilling there. The survivors from Yosu finally arrived at their promised land. But since this city was nameless, Josua casually suggested they just call it Josu. Mission accomplished. The hero party was once again summoned to meet the server owner. This time, the question reward was given to Glenn. After a moment of thought, she asked, how exactly would dragons get to the real world? The server owner replied that a small, mysterious hole was currently connecting the two worlds. That hole was slowly expanding, and once it was big enough, dragons could pass through. Back in the real world, Kita excitedly rushed to meet Jua, figuring after all those life-or-death shenanigans, they'd at least be a little closer. but in real life Ju was still as cold and curt as ever. Elsewhere, the girl group gathered to watch a short film they had shot earlier. Juka and Kusue complimented Sin's incredibly impressive acting. Sindo, however, found herself thinking of Yosua. Maybe he was still wearing his usual unapproachable mask, but at least things seemed a bit lighter than before. Ju then remembered she hadn't sent the beach trip photos to everyone, including Josua, even though she knew he'd totally pretend not to like them. Keita, meanwhile, was secretly flipping through the beach photos at work, only to get scolded by his boss for not focusing. He reluctantly went back to work, but his mind kept drifting back to Isit. That evening, Josuzu stood in his room, gazing out from the balcony. The server owner suddenly reappeared, this time in the form of a little girl, asking him if he still hated this city. Josua, stubborn as ever, still replied yes. He still hated where he lived, and still couldn't truly say he understood the value of life. But after everything, he had personally come to feel one thing. In that other world, hundreds of thousands, even millions, of people were living, and those lives were sustained daily by countless sacrifices. Whether he liked it or not, Josua and the hero's actions had truly changed that world. And if he was now carrying millions of lives on his shoulders, running away just didn't make sense anymore. He had decided to see this through to the very end, protecting those lives in his own unique way.